Well, I don't think that that's a protected class under employment discrimination. That's usually sex,
fair
race, those kind of things.
Sure.
Certain
Religion
state
is,
regulations.
right?
I'm not sure about Title VII, but there's some things that it covers and some things that it doesn't. And one thing that I don't think it covers is political opinion. And so the question is, would you be okay with the same kind of restriction fitting your definition as stated, but put out for a protected class some kind of political belief? So making slander about Democrats or slander about Republicans. You would be, of course, be against that, right, Viv?
Yeah, of course I would be against that. I would much rather, like I said, I'm not even advocating for this. I'm just saying this is something I wouldn't oppose if it was like put into law, and I think it would have to be restricted to immutable characteristics. I think that would probably be the line. There's like this hazy line around religion. That's
that's what I wanted to ask you about. Yeah,
that's where I was gonna go.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going. Yeah, I was waiting on. Okay, so Viv, you largely said you think that there are religions that are hateful. Would you say the practicing of said religions could be considered hate speech?
So if you're referring to my previous conversations with Fanatic, I said that his particular interpretation of the Bible, which he calls biblical literalism, leads him to certain conclusions that are in fact homophobic. It is not homophobic for him to be a practicing Christian. It's homophobic for him to say some of the things that he said about gay people.
So you would be against his speech being allowed in our country if you're saying that his speech is homophobic, right?
Provided that sexuality is sexuality immutable? Is it a mutable characteristic?
What, sexuality? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
So religious preachment of anti-gay preachment would fit under your rule, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So I do want to reiterate, like I said, I'm not proposing that this should go into law. I don't think I'd fight for it. I'm just saying it's not something that I would oppose if it went into law. Like if we were to pass hate propaganda laws similar to Canada and the United Kingdom that were based purely on immutable.
It seems kind of sneaky, Viv. If I said to you, this is a law, you have all
sneaky.
Because I'm presenting you the question. You have absolute power. In your universe, the law is either in place or it's not. And I'm asking, which would you choose?
If I have absolute power in my universe, like I'm immediately decentralizing the state and handing that power to the communities.
All else equal. Don't dodge the hypo. All else equal.
You ask and you shall receive.
Constrain the hypothetical.
Viv,
I can't constrain that hypothetical because I've already said that I don't agree.
You're unwilling to answer. Of like all else equal in society.
I'm saying.
Would you be in favor or against it?
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
You can't answer that.
I can't answer it. I can't answer it because I cannot constrain that hypothetical within my moral framework. I do not believe in totalitarian power. I do not believe in like a one world government or a one or an overarching state government, right? So I would
limit it in such a way that it applies only in one country. Suppose it, or one town. I'm trying to isolate everything to see if you are actually in favor of this or not. So suppose those considerations aren't there.
Okay, and in a much smaller community, right? Then it would depend on the democratic will of the people who are there.
Suppose they're all looking to you.
So let's assume you were a part of that Democratic committee. What would you vote?
Yeah, that's what we're getting at.
We can make this
What's your opinion?
Like there's a Dodges question on this bingo board, and I'm trying to figure out, can I mark it off as that's what you're doing?
What is your vote for that law in your local community? In favor or against?
In favor of
banning religious expressions of homophobia.
What? No, I mean just homophobic.
Phobic expression, however you defined it.
I don't think I could quantify what Fanatics said as falling under like hate propaganda laws here in Canada or in the.
You said it was transphobic.
I said it was homophobic, right? Homophobic, but merely being homophobic.
Again, you're kind of dodgy. I suppose it's unequivocally hateful.
Holy fucking shit! Let me finish answering the fucking question because I was about to. All right.
You are.
I said yes. So okay, right. If it is intended. Right, the way the law is worded here in the United Kingdom, I think is like pretty decent. is if it is intended to stir up hatred against a group of people based on their status as being of a protected class or some shit like that, right? And I would change the protected class to like based on an immutable characteristic. I think that's fine. I think that's like restrictive enough that like you could probably get away with saying like, I don't know if it's really that great to be gay or whatever, right? But you wouldn't be able to like make defamatory or false statements about that group, like all gay people are pedophiles, right? And start putting those on fucking leaflets all around the place.
Careful with
Like-
defamatory, like things of opinion. You know, if I think it's my opinion, whatever God says, that's not usually going to be in the domain of
Okay, but all
defamatory.
gay people are pedophiles is pretty easily disproven as like.
If you were to
being-
frame it in
wait.
such a way that it's, you know, it is my opinion that da 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 da, are you going to outlaw that?
So Viv, we can say that it's
I am
intentional.
I am a lawyer. I can't word this absolutely perfectly for you, Pisco, but I think that you can understand the what would you say, the spirit of what I'm trying to put across, right? And
Yes.
and obviously people who are better versed in law than me
So-
would be able to like put that.
So we'll go to
Wait.
GSU and then we'll go to Vaush, okay?
Yeah. So you talked about intentionality, and let's say that it's intentional for certain religions to have the descriptive or prescriptive views that they have. So that's why I would still come back to the same question, because like I don't want to argue over whether we can prove intent in court, blah blah blah, but we can say that religions are intentional in the views that they espouse. So that's why I was wondering your stance on religious doctrines.
Sorry,
that you don't agree
religions are
with.
intentional on the views that they espouse.
Yes.
I don't even know what the fuck that means.
So whatever
GSU.
whatever you say,
I
what-
said whether it was intended to stir up hatred against a group of people based on their status as a protected class, right?
Telling you, assume that they are, because they're preachers
Yeah.
and they want to spread their word and they
Yeah.
believe
Yeah,
what they say.
exactly.
So
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
he's
They
simplifying
believe
it for you.
Yes,
Sure.
I'm trying to.
I-
I'm trying to go to every link to where it's just obvious that you're weaseling if you don't answer. That's what I'm attempting to paint.
I
here.
mean, I'm not weaseling. It's a very
Oh.
complicated issue, right? I've already said that I'm broadly against any kind of like state overreach, and it should be local communities that kind of make these decisions for themselves. So, like, it's very difficult for me to put like a solid line on it as well, because like I'm not a fucking lawyer, okay? I've read a fair few laws, but I'm not a fucking lawyer, so I don't have the legalese to be able to put it in exact fucking terms. I'm just simply saying I wouldn't necessarily oppose like hate speech propaganda laws like they have in the United States or Canada if they were restricted to immutable characteristics rather than even including religion, right? Like, I don't know how I can be much clearer. Like, go read those laws, remove religion from that list of protected characteristics, and you've got what I wouldn't oppose.
Let's go
No,
to
well, Dennis,
let's go to Vaush.
Oh, well, and I just jumped. Originally, I was just going to make a joke. I was just going to say we could solve all these problems just by banning gay people, and then we wouldn't have to tiptoe around it, you know? But that was a joke, of course. I don't actually believe that, and it was satire. Thank you. The actual statement that I have to make is that I don't think it's healthy to approach anything dogmatically. When we talk about the values that like free speech give us, and I like, by the way, America, very big on free speech. Big fan of that, okay? Wouldn't take that away. Just saying, we shouldn't be dogmatic about any of this. Some people call themselves free speech absolutists. Of course, nobody's actually an absolutist about anything. Here in the United States, for example, you know, you can go tell someone to go commit a crime. That's a crime. Was it your free speech to say? I mean, you know, it was your speech. You could argue there might be some merit to allowing people to make comments in crying stochastic terrorism, for example. But we've decided we probably get more benefit as a society from not letting people do that. Same with a lot of other stuff, you know, some harassment laws, that kind of stuff. Don't know if I'm a big fan of hate speech laws. Seems like you can run in some dicey territory there. But there is some value in drawing lines on what people can say before they start to face legal consequences, you know? I don't think that even suggesting that, I don't think that just like bringing that up is authoritarian, because we've already accepted that. I mean, we all agree here that the idea that harassment can be illegal if drawn out to a sufficient extent, even just through speech, that can be defended, you know? So it's really not a matter of dogmatism. It's not authoritarians versus free speech loving, flag waving, whatever. It's just, where do we think we get the most utility, you know? And to be honest, Way the country's right now, way countries have been in the past, real big threats been posed by people who exercise their free speech to rile people up into acts of stochastic terrorism, and broader, often illegal activities that originate from legal free speech, but are themselves legally distinct. It's at least something worth talking about, you know what I mean? Even if we're not saying like, oh, we should ban all of it, we should at least acknowledge that we are paying a cost for our values.
Yeah, so I want to ask you just to see where you are in the spectrum. Would you be for
I'm
or
autistic.
against? Okay, all right. I hate you. But would you be for or
Samesies.
against the type of law that Vivian was talking about? So broadly, let's just say speech that attacks the immutable characteristics that we have by law. Would you be for banning that type of speech, or where are you on the spectrum of not free speech absolutists, but like where we are to whatever the hell authoritarian control is?
I genuinely don't know, because I feel like something like that could be very beneficial if used by the right people for the right intentions, and very detrimental if used by the wrong people for the wrong intentions. For example, I know, and I know this, that if such a law were to exist, Republicans would be using it to attack critical race theory, saying that it attacks white people. And that, and like they would draw it out into these protracted, the Supreme Court would see it. I mean, it would be like this big thing. We have protected
And they'd
classes.
lose, probably. Yeah.
Oh, sure,
Well,
of course. But, well, sometimes. I mean, maybe every once in a while you might
Well,
get a
look who's
favorable
in the
ruling.
Supreme Court right now, though. Like Trump appointees.
Well, I mean, I'm
Okay.
just
6 to
Right.
3.
Well, that's why I like to ask, like, well, if you're going to be okay with the free speech like amendments, like, would you be okay with like Trump writing these? Like, that's what you have to think about.
there's
Like, if
no
another,
I don't
another
think there's any
party takes power, are they going to abuse this?
I don't think there's any such thing as a legal code or a law that can survive bad faith actors. It seems like so much of law and legal rulings come down to interpretation of what a reasonable person might do or what charitability you're willing to assign, that you could have like a perfect legal system, and then if you staff the entire court and judiciary and everyone with fascists, they're going to find a way to ruin the world with it. So I don't know if there's a way to handle that perfectly. I feel like the question of what is a good law and how do you keep bad people from abusing it might be two separate questions. Like they might be two like balls you have to keep juggling at the same time, you know? So I don't know if I'd support that kind of law.
That's
It's
why
really
this
hard to say.
objection is
So
It's like I
There's a
just
lot
said
of
before
people-
Vaush showed up. Who is to decide? I'm glad we agree.
Yeah, so Vaush, so this is why strategically I disagree with any form of hate speech laws, because I do understand that it's incredibly complicated and that other people could become in power and Trump could write whatever laws he wants, right? So this is why I'm against it in principle. So I'm asking if you are for it in principle or against it in principle as well.
I don't like hate speech laws as a matter of principle. I think that I don't know how effective they are at solving the problem either. It feels like bigotry is very much a cultural thing. Like, for example, you know what's legal to say? The N-word. Nothing, no law against it. I mean, unless you're harassing a person, but you can say it if you want to. But culturally, it might as well be illegal in basically every element of civil discourse, since the 1960s at least. But has racism gone away with that? Not really. Fox News and all the other conservative outlets start using, you know, dog whistles. They say thug instead of, you know, the N-word. And it seems like we repeat the same basic talking points, we just annul the language. Now we're seeing a rise in the same kinds of talking points, like Trump talking about Black Lives Matter invading the suburbs, you know, very clean dog whistle there. The same underlying sentiments exist. We've sanitized the language, though. I feel like the cultural problem is what we should fixate on first and foremost, because trying to legislate away the means by which people express their bigotry is only going to encourage them to get smarter about how they express it. But I'm so 50-50 on this. I don't want to, like, that's just the argument that I have against it. There are good arguments for it, too. It's genuinely too complicated
So
for
I
me to have,
think-
like, a hard line on.
Yeah.
So
So
I
we
think a
agree
good
on it. I hate this.
I
wanna
I
listen
think
to
I
this.
think a good
Let
example.
GSU finish his point, and then
Okay.
Viv, you can go.
Yeah, I don't think there's reasonable positions to argue against it. And like me, Pisco, like I don't feel like there's a reasonable argument that anybody could put forth. So the reason why I was asking you to join was because I was hoping that you were against it. And then there'd be like a good back and forth, and we can figure out like more like a more nuanced strategy of people that believe it. So that's the only reason I was asking you directly, because I feel like you're a rhetorician. So arguing this against you when we have such confidence in it, I thought it would be fruitful, right?
My belief is that racism is bad. That's the hard line that I'm putting down. I'm putting all my chips down on that one.
That's great.
Holy shit!
Mind blown, man.
So,
Dropping hot takes everywhere.
I'll say
incredibly brave.
So,
Stunning and brave.
I haven't had much bandwidth to keep track of Viv's exact point, but I had said previously that I think hate speech is inherently a threat, and that we should find ways to restrict that. That is a category of speech that we shouldn't have. I'm too busy right now dealing with the rest, like managing this right now. But I'd love to engage maybe at some point in time. So we'll go to Viv and we'll go to Maddie. Sorry.
Yeah, so to be completely clear, like I did repeatedly say that I wouldn't be in support of like a federal law dealing with this shit, right? I like the state of the United States right now is at a point where you just couldn't fucking trust the government to be able to deal with to have that kind of power, right? I was going to say that I think that there are numerous good examples of like where restrictions on speech have had really positive effects outside of the United States. But because of the state of the United States, if you were to reinstate those same policies there in the way that it currently is, then you'd have a lot of problems. And a good example of that is probably like prescribed group law here in the United Kingdom. Okay, prescribed group law basically makes it an offence to express support for, offer material support to, or declare membership of a particular group, right? And to get onto the list of like prescribed groups is really fucking hard. Okay, some conservatives were suggesting trying to put fucking Black Lives Matter on it last year, and there was just no way that was ever going to fucking happen, right? Because of the long and arduous process that you have to go through in order to be able to do that. And because of the requirements of being put on that prescribed group list. So you have groups on there like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, I think there's a couple of different IRA groups that are on there, and the BNP aren't on there, but
did they get removed?
No, the BNP have never been on there, but National Action were on there.
That's the one.
Yeah, so National Action were like a straight up fucking neo-Nazi group that like were involved in like actual terror attacks, right? And they got put on there after the death of Joe Cox, an MP who was assassinated in the street. Yeah, so like so the requirements for being placed on this list is like really strong, and I think that could survive for a short amount of time in the United States before it was dismantled enough that the Republicans could use it to prescribe all kinds of like left-wing groups and so on. If we look at the track record of the FBI in the United States as well, post 9/11, all their focus was on jihadism and left-wing extremism right up until the recent election. So you can't trust the US state with the kind of power that other kinds of states have used relatively responsibly. Your country's just fucked, dude. So like you can't put hate speech law in the United States because it would just not be used in any way faithfully.
Can I just add on to that?
Who
really
is to
quickly?
decide? Like I said, go ahead.
So like just to add on to that point,
very quickly because someone else is in line. Got to very quickly, whatever it is.
It's just to reinforce Vivian's point. So like you have another country, another great example that can be argued was an absolute shithole for many decades, Northern Ireland, right? That has a hate speech law against incitement to religious violence. And you'd think a place like Northern Ireland with so much sectarian violence, they would abuse that power constantly. In 21 years, there has been one case where a person has been prosecuted through that law. So to say that these hate speech laws are these big boogeyman that will oppress everyone, the society, it just isn't the case.
Okay, Maddie?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what we're talking about are things that were outlined in the Supreme Court case of Virginia versus Black, where they draw a distinction between what constitutes protected free speech, because you can espouse whatever dumb bullshit you want, and technically, out of context, that is fine. That is protected free speech, whatever. However, the distinction is made when that speech is espoused with the intent to create or to intimidate or cause harm to someone else. And that is where it's drawn. I think that is an important distinction to make, even in how we discuss hate speech, because there's a difference between someone just talking about how they believe that like white people are superior or whatever, and then having that rhetoric where they are directly threatening and putting the lives of people who are not white directly in harm's way. And that is this, like, again, this is the distinction that's not only made in Virginia versus Black, but that has been reinforced in the Supreme Court for a while now. And those statutes have been upheld. And a lot of these statutes come from the state level, which is why they were challenged in the first place. And I think as we as a society have those kind of laws against hate speech, because I think we also have to reinforce what we deem as acceptable. Like, when we're building out this, like, that's how laws are created in the first place. We have to think about, like, do we want to live somewhere where it's okay to disparage and harm someone because of how they identify? Like, is this a threat to whatever we hold near and dear in our society? And then based on that, what would be necessary recourse or acceptable recourse? Or is that something that we just want to put it in the quote marketplace of ideas?
So we'll go to we'll go to sorry, hold on. We'll go to Wick, Pisco, and then you, Jessica, and then Vaush if he wants to say something.
Okay. So a lot of really great points have been brought up here, and I think it's worth considering even further. Though, Prime, when you made the statement that you did that hate speech is a threat, I would argue that the hate speech itself is not the threat. It's the ideas that the hate speech is trying to espouse. It's the ideals that the hate speech is trying to get across. Because as Vaush pointed out, if you censor the certain words, it doesn't get rid of the idea. It doesn't get rid of the thing that the idea that they're trying to espouse forward. It simply makes them change how they present those ideas. So when we talk about using law to as Maddie was talking about, when we talk about using law to kind of enforce societal standards, you get into real dicey place. You get to real risky place, because how we view things today isn't going to be how we view things necessarily in 10 years or 20 years. So when we normalize using the law to codify how we as a society view it, some things as acceptable when it comes to speech, when it comes to expression, you run a lot of risk there. And I think the risks really outweigh any potential benefit we can get.
Okay. God damn it. I really want to respond. I'm gonna try to focus because
I mean, it's your show. Go for it.
God, this is all right. Just quickly, and then I'll go to Pisco. Is that like the ideas? The ideas are the threat, sure, but the words convey ideas. That's what they do. Okay. The fact that once. I don't see how you separate the two, right? And those words can encourage action. So, and Vaush already mentioned it, stochastic terrorism, exactly how that works, right? Just use the words, but like not specifically saying something needs to be done, but just setting things up so you understand that there is a threat and something needs to be done about it, right? So that speech should be limited. Why are we protecting that speech? Hate speech has a cost for individuals, for those who are targeted by that speech. When even something like within the context of, like, for some academia, right? Your teacher says something about your group, right? Something terrible about your group. That is in itself a threat. They may not say anything about your grades or anything like that, but once your identity, there's clearly have a problem with your identity, then that's a threat to you. Like,
This totally ties into something that I really wanted to say, Prime. So the UK government right now is trying to get is trying to pass laws to, like, make it illegal to fire somebody for being transphobic, or make it illegal to fire a teacher or whatever for expressing unpopular opinions, basically being transphobic. And I think when you're in I'd ask those people who are on like the opposite side to me, would you want to instate laws in order to protect people from being like fired from their job for this?
Oh,
kind
please
of speech?
stop. I mean, that's so the state is not everything is speech. Me driving over 70 miles an hour is not
What?
speech. You know, I agree that the line is fuzzy between conduct and speech, and that you
What
can
the fuck
think
does
of things
this
like
have to do with anything?
because
like
the act of firing someone, I think most courts wouldn't consider that an act of speech. They would consider that an act of conduct.
That's
That
the
wasn't what
government,
they said.
right? Stepping in to protect free speech in private areas, right, or in locally controlled areas.
That's
right?
totally fine, and it's not hypocritical for me to say, just so you know, Title VII in this country has been applied to extend to people getting fired over their sexual orientation, whether or not they're transgender. That has been applied in terms of statutory interpretation by Neil Gorsuch of all people to also extend to transgender people. That's fine. That's not an infringement of First Amendment values as we understand them.
Okay, so if somebody gets fired, right, for expressing racist views in a university or in a workplace, right, should the government step in and say, hey, you can't fire people for that because that's an infringement of their free speech?
No,
I think it depends. It really depends. Like we draw the line between harassment and simply speaking your opinion. Like if they are just expressing their views, it is different.
So what you're saying is you're completely comfortable with a university teacher getting up in front of her class and calling the black folks in it the N-word?
No, of course not. No, and there's obviously differences.
Close to that.
So one is we already have rules, for instance, as applied in schools for public schools, where people's speech rights aren't freedom from consequence, and especially when it comes to private action. If it's a private school, forget about it. You're not even in the same domain. We're talking about government infringement of speech, number one. And number two, if it's like a university-funded type school like that, everyone here agrees, whether it's there's a plague going around and we can't allow people to go to churches, or we can't allow people to gather in traditional public fora like parks and stuff. We all agree with the exceptions and the compelling purposes and strict scrutiny. So obviously there's a compelling government interest in the case of a public university professor saying explicitly racist things for them to be fired. And so none of us here, we all understand, because there's a compelling state interest that's narrowly tailored. We all agree. It's the same as the
exercising their free speech. What is this?
So if it's
context and nuance,
if it's a content-based discrimination of speech, right? Non-content-based discrimination of speech has a lower standard, but if it's a content-based discrimination of speech,
can you explain the difference between content-based and non-content-based?
So suppose that I'm speaking very, very loudly in a way that is like making everyone go deaf in like a park. So just give me that that hypothetical. That is not and I'm told to like shut up in that park, or I'm told to go like away because it's 9 o'clock and the park's closed. Those are not content-based restrictions. I can give you the legal definition.
Nobody's arguing for that.
So but even for
content-based free speech,
I know I'm trying to address you. So even for content-based speech, you can still discriminate if there's a compelling government purpose that's very narrow to the issue. So suppose, for instance, that there was a pandemic and we had to limit access to all public fora, and because otherwise people would die. No one here would say that that it breaks our First Amendment rights or whatever. So long as there is a compelling interest that's narrowly tailored, I think that we're okay with.
So, for example, I don't know. You have a university professor, right, who's continuously espousing how brilliant the bell curve is and how much like black folks are actually like stupider than white folks, and the university fires him for that. Right? Is this a breach of free speech rights? Like, does that count?
Tough case. Well, you need Yeah, I'm assuming you're. I'm forgetting now the professor who you're alluding to, but maybe that's a margin call. Maybe these government public educational institutions, obviously they have a need to maintain their student base, and if the facts show that like students are not enrolling anymore, that would probably be relevant to whether or not the state has
Who
a
cares
compelling
if
interest.
students are not? Who cares
'Cause
if
it would-
students are not enrolling
Because that
anymore?
would be a good purpose,
surely
right? If the
surely
government's
the problem
unable,
is the harm done to the students that are already there.
Let him finish, please.
if the government is unable to provide education because its professors are all racists, then it absolutely matters whether that's real or not, whether or not they are
Okay,
allowed
let's
to fire
say,
professors.
Okay, if people are still signing up, can they still fire that professor?
Then it also depends. You'd have to bring in like testimony from like what is the harm done? Are there other professors? Is it the only guy who's teaching the one class? You're picking a hard case, and I agree that it's hard. The easy cases are the explicit KKK, member.
I don't think
who's a
it's hard.
professor.
I think they should be able to fire him.
Really? I mean, now suppose it's something a little different. You fire a professor because he's a communist, because he's advocating for the end of, and people interpret that as a way of killing landlords, and then that's harmful. So we're going to fire him because he's a communist. You agree with that? That's an easy case, right?
I mean, if he advocates for killing landlords, then
no.
sure,
He's
yeah,
interpreting
fire
it.
him.
You just said the bell curve, right? And you would agree that there's a lot of inferential steps from bell curve to killing people. And you,
What?
and
I mean,
I'm giving
I said
you,
he was
you said it was an easy case. You said it was an easy case.
I said he
Did
was
you not?
I said he was espousing the brilliance of the bell curve and saying that black people.
And you said it was an easy case.
And he was saying that black people were inherently stupider than white people, right? That was the important part of the fucking statement there.
Okay, but there's nothing violent. There's an inferential step to violence there, right? I would agree that it's problematic. It might lead to
no
violence.
inferential step to violence there. That
there
doesn't
is,
need to be, depending on what you mean by violence. Of course, I would class like certain other things as, but there's no inferential step to physical violence there.
There isn't. So
No.
me saying that a group is categorically dumber, the violence is assumed in that statement. It's equal to saying that these people need to be hurt, killed, or put below us. That's an equivalent statement in your mind?
No, I'm literally saying.
Okay, but then there's an inferential step in between, right?
I'm literally saying that it doesn't necessarily lead to that at all.
Okay,
right?
well, I'm trying to offer you
the kind of discrimination that it leads to is discrimination in like marking and teaching standards.
Didn't we already solve this problem with protected classes?
You do to a certain extent, but not with respect to like political opinion, because that's not a protected class of the.
Like, so even if someone goes to this professor,
some political opinions necessarily entail attacks on other people based on protected classes. So first of all, if you're a communist professor and you're advocating for killing landlords, the advocacy for like murder of a group of people is probably going to get you fired. And you know what? I probably wouldn't stand up and defend that person. Seems like they're making it pretty easy for them to get themselves fired. That's not a hill I'll die on. But when it comes to like advocacy for certain ideologies, like Nazism, for example, it's not just the political opinion. Baked into Nazism, like fundamentally a core component of the ideology, is a violation of the principles that we have enshrouded in our system of protected classes. You can't really be an egalitarian Nazi. It doesn't really jive. And you could argue that a sufficiently bad faith actor could say, well, being a communist is inherently discriminatory against kulaks and Serbians and what have you. But I feel like that's a weaker case to argue. And I feel like, I mean, again, no law can withstand the worst faith actors. I mean, if we're assuming everyone's interpreting everything in the worst possible way, then maybe there's some potential abuse of that system. But when it comes to firing people for their political opinions, I don't think we're talking about firing people for being like libertarians or whatever. We're not talking about firing people because they think taxation is theft, regardless of what you think of that idea. We're talking about firing people who engage in the expression of ideas that not only make it a fairly hostile, work or educational space for, well, I guess anyone who's not part of a hegemonic identity, but also violate our ideas when it comes to protected classes, right?
Yeah, but I have an admission that Charles Murray is a hard case. That's not the same as a avowed Nazi.
Well, give me an example. Give me an example. We can work it out. Where's the line?
Okay.
Right?
So Viv said to me that someone who's espousing Charles Murray ideology and saying that. And saying it's the best thing ever, that person's firing on the basis of that.
Which ideology? Like which parts?
That black people on average have lower IQs than.
No, I was very specific. I was saying that black people are inherently stupider than white people, right?
That's the same thing as saying that they have lower IQ, right? On average.
Sure.
It's the same statement.
Yeah. Okay.
It's more inflammatory, but
One is
sometimes-
yours is more inflammatory, but it's the same substance. And
I mean,
what I'm
if a professor was like kept going on and on, like in the class, like, yeah, black people are stupider, black people are stupider. Like, I mean, I feel like that'd be pretty open and shut, right? There's not really much of an
But
education.
it depends on the fact. So you would agree, like it depends on the fact. It's not easily apparent, and we want it to be hard cases. If government's in the role of making content-based.
No, wait. Well, hold on. Wait. I just think. Wait, hold on.
Vaush.
I disagree with that. I don't think that something always needs to be rulable along hard lines for it to be like federal law. We have thousands of federal laws that will come down to the nuances of arguments.
You're not hearing me. I'm saying that I think this would be a difficult case to apply if you were to have a law or some kind of. If you're going to fire one person,
every law will have difficult cases. I mean, our self-defense laws require incredibly nuanced analysis of the very minute details of a situation. But we didn't go like, oh, we can't have self-defense laws. It would be complicated sometimes. Like,
I'm
sure,
not talking about the law as such. I'm speaking about the individual case and telling to Viv that I'm okay with firing certain people on the basis of their belief, but it's a high standard. And it should be a high standard. If it's the government, right? If it's a government hiring
you're still fucking misunderstanding me. I'm saying
that?
if the university,
A lot of misunderstanding going around.
If the university then chooses to fire that person, should the state step in and say, no, you cannot fire that person? This is different from having like a law saying you must
clear everything up right now. Number one, if it's a private actor, there's no violation, right? The school could fire you.
Whatever, public school.
They have to, fulfill with their contract. So we're only talking now about public schools or schools
if it's a private actor, so if it's a workplace, you can fire them. Fine. Okay, cool.
For their and you would agree with that, right? It would be nonsensical for me to say that firms, for instance, shouldn't be able to hire someone because of their political opinions if they're public facing, and it's not good for their business to have you on, right? You would agree with that. So we're only talking about.
I don't think you should be able to like hire and fire people based on whether they voted Republican or Democrat.
You don't? What if you're like a Democratic organization and we only hire Democrats?
Okay, if you're affiliated with the Democratic Party, that's obviously different. But like,
okay, there's no limiting principle to your statements about. So I know it would be nice not to fire people because of the Democrat or Republican, but if let's say you're an immigration nonprofit and you don't want to have people who have expressed Trump in favor of Trump in the past, and you fire someone who you just hired who was great, but he used to have Trump-related things in the past, there's no limiting principle to you saying it would be nice not to discriminate.
Okay, sure.
But they're private actors, all right?
Okay, private actors.
So you agree?
Whatever. So
you agree that there's no First Amendment problem here, right? There's no first.
Yeah. So you're perfectly fine with the community.
Totally fine with it.
You're fine with the community in that case making the decision that they don't want somebody in their space and kicking them the fuck out because of their speech.
Do you think that I think that speech should carry with it no weight or consequences? I think speech and expressive conduct are truly impactful, and of course they should carry. If your ideas are radical, they're going to engender disagreement, and you should be okay with that, and we should want that. And if your speech is harmful,
okay, cool. We started with the.
It's about government action. So we're talking about.
Okay. Fuck me. No, we started with the ACLU case in Stokey, right?
Government action.
Okay. The ACLU case in Stokey required lawyers to come in and say, no, you can't like stop these people marching in your town, right? You can't refuse them a permit to have their protest.
Who was refusing them a permit?
I don't know.
Was it a government institution?
It'd be the town council or something.
Nod your head. Yes, it was a government institution. In this country, the federal standard for First Amendment is typically mapped on to state whatever laws they have through incorporation doctrine. So yes, it was a government actor who was trying to limit the permits to I believe the Nazi march. So they're government actors that we're talking about with respect to these First Amendment issues. That's what we're talking about. And so the only way in which your hiring, firing example would be relevant is the extent to which a government institution was hiring or firing someone based on political opinion. And I told you there, in those situations, it would have to be
university.
Right, so that's why I was clearing all that private stuff out first.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the
accept
cases,
there are going to be complicated edge cases, and just acknowledge that there's always going to be some nuance to this. I mean, if they want to drag it out into some sort of protracted court battle after a firing, then that's their right. It just seems like there's no way to have like a hardline definition. But like if a professor was like dancing around the classroom, pointing at like black kids and saying like, "You have a lower IQ on average, and you have a lower IQ,"
that's an easier case.
Okay. Well, I agree it's easier, but
like
we have to agree there's no hard line. It's just just let the details get settled in the court, right? Like have a broad law, like, hey, if your behavior is in some way enables or begets harassment against protected classes, then that's grounds for firing.
Well,
and then
a
if you
law.
disagree with
It's
that,
the policy is the firing, and the defense is the First Amendment.
Laws are inherently nuanced. So, like, part of the reason they call it interpreting the law versus just like following the rules is specifically because they account for nuance. That's why they're written in the way that they are. So to think there's some sort of hard line, like threshold for like, yes, this constitutes whatever, or no, is
we should
just
ban racism.
bizarre. Like, it's because there is so much nuance to this. So I don't know why you would fight against that or like deny that that is
okay. So
reality.
a nuance here would be that even if we don't fire this,
GSU, give it a try. You've been waiting.
Yeah, I feel like I understand what Vaush was just saying, but what I really hear when I hear those statements is let's just balloon our judicial system with a whole bunch of lawsuits and frivolous like carrying of cases, right? So like I said, my stance against this is because I don't think it's good for society.
Oh no, the horror new laws will carry new court cases. We should never institute any new law.
It's the firing and the defense is the First Amendment.
That's an odd argument from an anarchist.
I'm saying that this law would have to be so subjectively defined.
We already have it though.
That is nonsense. No, we don't have hate speech law.
This is
literally protected characteristics. This is literally what we're talking about.
Now you can fire professors and stuff for being racist, and I mean it would
just be a firing. It would just the defense is the First Amendment. Like, you can't fire me because it's a political opinion. So the policy would be one that would be challenged by the firee, the one who's got fired.
Okay, cool. So, like,
anybody in this room that would be okay with a Republican employer firing Democratic employees or a Democrat?
Hold on. Wait, sorry. Please, just a second.
Dancing around it.
Okay, sure.
Wait, this can't be a rebuttal to everything. You can, literally any law can be like responded to with, well, what if bad faith actor X interprets it in a way that hurts you? We know, but we already have a bunch of laws in society that adhere to a bunch of really vague guidelines that we rely on courts to interpret. And for the most part, not always, but for the most part, it works out. Like when you say like, oh, well, all these laws that are anti-discrimination can be used to you, like we know that, but right now you already can fire a professor for engaging in that behavior. And for the most part, it seems like that's a good thing. As far as I can tell, the majority of professors who are fired for bigotry aren't like communists and anarchists fired by bad faith Republican professors. It's usually a matter of leveraging public opinion against them. If a professor does something obviously fucked up, then students decry it, and then they'll go to their dean, and the dean weighs the costs and benefits of dealing with a PR shitstorm as local media gets involved.
But Vaush, they've brought this up to call out our hypocrisy for you called this out for us to be hypocrites.
Peace go.
Wait, they've brought this up.
Oh no, sorry. Peace go. Respond.
They've brought this up to say you guys are hypocrites. You would obviously be okay with people with the universities, public institutions firing racists, wouldn't you? And our answer is, yeah, of course we'd be okay with that. It doesn't make us hypocrites on everything else we said about hate speech law.
That's poggers, right?
We went back and forth how fucking long, and you couldn't just say, yeah, it's perfectly okay. Like if
that's what we were doing. It's reconcilable. It's not a hypocrisy.
If they seek redress, it ought not be granted. They should still remain fired if they have particularly bigoted opinions that they're.
Of course, but it's not hypocrisy for us to also be against hate speech laws and be okay with firing explicitly racist professors. That's not a
okay, but they're okay. So when I say at the very start of the fucking conversation that on the ground level, right, not as a federal law, but on the ground level, if a community, if a private employer, or if a particular institution decides that they want to have somebody not speaking that hate speech within their community, within their institution, right, then they should have the freedom to be able to remove.
No, you're far too broad now, because we would limit it what the government is allowed to do. We would put restrictions on what the government is allowed to do. And even in the case of firings, it would have to be some showing from the government that this is a compelling purpose for them to fire this particular individual, and they'd have to make a showing with evidence.
Compelling purpose mean? And
that's Vaush's appeal to. These are standards that need to be interpreted in the common law or in court cases.
And why can't a local government, a local town?
They certainly can. They certainly could. It's a high threshold to like.
Didn't even fucking finish, dude. Jeez.
I know what they're saying.
Holy shit.
Why can't? Why,
And they say,
why can't a
interrupt a
local
lot.
government say, we don't want fucking Nazis marching in our town? Like that's something that you guys were like. Pretty much everybody.
There's
on
the
the opposite
difference,
side was
'cause-
there's a
Yeah.
difference between that and a
Yes.
university. So they're both government institutions, right?
Yes.
They're both public institutions. They're both involved in the administering of people's lives and their social environments.
I'm
What
happy
is
to
the
explain the difference and reconcile them for you. So one is acting as a prior restraint on speech. There's a fear that if you extend it broadly, you will chill speech. And that effect is limited if you have a narrow rule or a narrow policy, a narrow firing to just someone who works for the government. You see how that's much more narrow? It's not going to chill speech as much as a broad rule about how humans just generally speak. That's a big component of this. And also the purpose for the government isn't as there, right? So there always is going to be harmful speech. We accept.
So a university.
And one is removing from an institution, the other is removing the speech from like public domain.
Society. There's a
completely
nexus.
different. There's no analogy. They aren't analogous at all.
Kicking out a student for this kind of speech, that would be unacceptable in your eyes then.
Picking out a student?
Kicking.
Yeah, a student.
What do you mean?
Kicking them out of
student.
university.
Kicking out of
expelling them from the university. That would be acceptable in your eyes.
It would depend. It would depend, right? So if it's a private university, of course, if it's a private,
holy fuck,
kids
we're
get
obviously talking about
if it's a public school, then the standard is higher. And I've already told you at the start of this that for like high schools and stuff, public schools, it's a little bit less than universities. You're allowed to like kick kids out of the class for swearing. Your speech rights in classrooms and in school are less than what they are outside of school. And that's another one of these exceptions that we all are okay with. We talked about child pornography. I'm not okay with obscenity.
No, I know we're okay with it. I'm trying to get to why we're okay with it, where the line is between a local government deciding they don't want Nazis marching and a university kicking out a student for the same kind
We're
of
afraid of content-based, broad content-based discrimination of speech.
Yes.
That's what we're afraid of.
So
it's not perfect, and some of it's
I'm
arbitrary.
going to try this new person, Medic. Go ahead.
Hey, so Pisco, this is something you guys were like talking about, like the conservative versus, or not the conservative, but like the Nazi versus like the communists, and like if both extremes should be fired depending on whether or not they should be in whatever community or college. But here's my thing: is it seems that the public outrage generally starts with a like viral image of bigotry, and then from there it goes on to outrage. It doesn't happen to do with their politics necessarily. It's usually somebody does something either racist, bigoted, transphobic, homophobic, and then backlash comes back. People figure out what happened, like their situation where they're like working at, and then they go and they tell their boss. Now, being conservative and lining up with bigotry, like, I don't know, like if that's how it lines up, then that's how it lines up. But that seems to be the backlash. Like it happens to liberal people and lefties as well. Like people get fucked over on lefty Twitter all the fucking time. Like people get bashed all the time for their opinions.
Yeah, I'm not making an observation about what the prevalence is between left or right, who is more likely to be abused or to not be abused, to be fired or face a negative consequence of the speech. I'll leave that to you guys. I know that there's plenty of disagreements on who has it worse on Twitter and in the employment stuff. I'm just speaking that when it comes to public employment and any case where there's an infringement on speech, I think the barrier and the threshold for determining, your speech is way too harmful should be high, and whatever you're trying to impose on that speech as a restriction should be narrow so as not to encompass a broader set of activities for society as a whole.
But I mean, I apologize. I'm just saying, like, as society goes, like, as a backlash, as a company, you need to look at, like, the bottom dollar. And if you have an employee who just got done, again, like a viral instance of bigotry, like usually
private action not encompassed at all.
So in the case of the bottom dollar, the first thing you're going to do is you want to separate yourself from that employee. So the easiest thing for them to do would then to be separate. So I don't think that necessarily like it's going to be whatever society chooses. However large the backlash is on the situation is what's going to land that person with or without a job. Now, whether that's the government, the government doesn't have a place in that, but like as if Twitter decides like on a backlash because you said the N-word to a person in public, that everybody and their mother is gonna put in a change.org description or whatever, and or a petition or whatever, and they want to get you kicked out, and the company does it, that's a free right. And like the bar, whether it was kicking sand at a kid or like gunning down a bunch of children in a school or whatever, like it's reportable to both criminal and societal backlash.
Just be clear, we're not talking about private retaliation, and also like we're talking about either speech or expressive content. I agree there's some murky lines, but certainly shooting people or assaulting people, that wouldn't be expressive content.
I apologize. That's a little extreme. Okay, you understand, like racism versus just like kicking sand at a kid or something like that. Something atrocious, but that would get you kicked out of your job.
Hey, you would either be fired because you're a racist and it harms some governmental. Remember, there's a government institution that's doing that, or you're fired because you kicked sand at a kid, and that's conduct that I wouldn't consider expressive conduct under the intent of the person and all that stuff. So that either way would be, I think, okay.
So we're going to go to KOE, Wick, and then check in with Vaush.
Oh, well, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, what I keep thinking here, though, is, we kind of had this kind of dancing around. Are we okay with the idea of politics being able to decide your employment? Republican employers being allowed to fire Democrat employees and Democrat employers being allowed to fire Republican employees? Because that's where
it's worth me stepping up to say something here. We're already in at-will employment in so many different states that they can basically do it if they want to anyway. So whatever the next point is, just get to it.
Okay. Well, hey, so apparently we're okay with that. There's people in this panel that are totally okay with that.
You're not okay with private actors choosing who they want to do business with?
I'm not saying that I'm okay with it. I'm not saying that I'm not okay with it. All that I'm saying is
no. I'm saying, like, when if it's your company, you have the right to associate with who you want to associate with. Freedom of association is one of the most essential freedoms. And yeah, if I find out some guys has done some really reprehensible shit, they're not going to be on my farm no more.
That's what Torian said. I mean, what's your problem with what Torian said then? I mean, it's something that exists. Private actors,
I've heard when we were talking about that, I heard somebody on the panel go, "Oh God, if only the day we could do that." And I was like, "Who the fuck wants that?" Like,
nobody fucking said that. What?
No, folks, you go back and listen to that. Somebody was talking about just that, but there's not so many people that are on the screen at the moment. But fuck, I had a different point, but I can't remember what it is. But the last thing I'll keep on mind with you folks is whenever you think you've got the analysis that requires mind reading, you need to be able to read somebody's mind to know what their true intent was. That analysis you can usually generally throw out because it's non-falsifiable, because you have no way of knowing what they were truly saying.
You need mens rea for like so many.
Yeah, Vaush and Viv have explained why this proves too much as an argument. We have mens rea and we use circumstantial evidence all the time to prove intent. So this argument proves too much. We can't accept it at face value.
Oh, okay. Let's go to sorry, what was the next person? Wick and then Vaush.
I think you said Wick, Vaush.
Yeah.
I do have a question for Pisco and the rest of you as well. We talk about public institutions. We talk about government institutions and how we are okay with firing because they do racist acts. They call someone the N-word or what have you. Where I would maybe ask your opinion here, because I'm not sure. I think this is where I would diverge from the general consensus that we are building, is that if you are a government employee or you work in a government institution, your behavior at work, on premises, above board, totally fine. No harassment, no hate speech, nothing. You do your job, you do it well. On the weekend, you go to a rally for a group that is considered problematic, let's say, that has...
You go to Charlottesville.
You go to Charlottesville or something.
Make it the KKK.
Would you be okay with the government in that case firing that individual?
Absolutely.
For speech okay.
Yes.
Yeah. You have to be, because it's not just it's the appearance of impropriety. It's also a compelling interest for the government. Imagine that you had a bunch of avowed KKK people in our, United States district attorneys or United States attorneys offices, and like we're like, oh, we just leave it at home. We don't do anything there. It would totally take away from the government able to do its job if they were constantly having to field these inquiries of bias all the time. So yes, even off time activity and speech-related activity can be enough, I think, for governments to fire people on the basis of their expressive conduct.
There's a very valid reason why pretty much every single liberal Western democracy around the world has within it a set of codes that states that their civil service members cannot be publicly political. They can do whatever they want in their private spheres. They can say whatever the fuck they want to their family. They cannot go to rallies. They cannot express their personal political opinions, because that, just like Pisco says, it completely biases the system that is government. And we cannot function when half the civil service knows the other half's political leanings.
Or it gives the appearance of it, even if it doesn't actually. Suppose that you could put it aside. The mere appearance of it is a problem.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
That's why Mueller fired those other people. I forget the names of the officers. But that's why they were fired, not because they actually had bias, because the appearance.
So and you also see within history. Sorry,
no, go ahead. No, say words.
Yeah, you also see within history, especially when you look at Nazi history, one of the first things Hitler did when he gained political power was remove the civil service entirely and replace it with Nazi-affiliated officials, because the civil service is how you run a state. And when you have a state run by politically engaged and publicly political figures, it completely corrupts the state from within.
Yeah, like the Conservatives are trying to do in our country right now with the EHRC.
So we understand that even though, and maybe this is to Vaush, because I heard someone interpreted Vaush's word this way, maybe it was the case, but like even in this case, these public servants are blocked from speaking because we know the hateful words themselves are the problem, right? Beyond the hateful intentions, even though we can't get rid of those hateful intentions, right? We can't look into the hearts of men, right? But we understand that the hateful words themselves are the threat, and that's the thing that we have, or excuse me, not hateful words, but the political words in themselves are the problem, and not their political intentions, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's like the problem is that any evidence of bias completely destroys the public's faith in your ability to do your job. Imagine if you had a judge, for example, who never said or done anything racist in court, but like it would turn out that they were like a frequent poster in Stormfront forums, like, would you, if you were a black guy and that was your judge, would you ever trust a ruling from this person? No, of course not. Which is one of the reasons why it's possible to get rulings challenged or thrown out based on, well, a variety of factors, one of which would be that. Same with a cop, right? Okay? There's a lot of overlap between cops and white supremacist organizations. And with cops, already fairly existent bias, against certain members of our fine American community, it would make a lot of sense to me that people would have their trust in the establishment undermined by the tolerance of people who are in their day-to-day job, not biased, but in private, allowed to be. It's also a workplace comfort thing, right? Like, this is actually something that happened to a friend of mine a long time ago, back when I was in high school. So it turned out that she worked at a job, just some service job bullshit, and she had a coworker who was a guy, and it turns out this guy was kind of like a proto-incel. I don't even know if the term incel was around back then. It would have been like 2010 or something like that. But at the job they had, it turned some I don't know how this came to be known, but this guy was a frequent forum poster, and he would say stuff like, I think rape should be legal, I think women's bodies are objects, that kind of stuff. Now, this guy was a perfect gentleman at the workplace. Never did anything weird, creepy, no harassment, nothing. But tell me, if you're a lady, you want to work with this guy? God, no. Even if it was a public institution, say it was like a, local courthouse. You want to work with this guy? Probably not, no. I think that behavior and opinions expressed off the job should be taken into consideration with regards to employment on the job, especially once made public. I mean, I don't think there are any conditions by which a person in a marginalized group could ever feel comfortable working alongside somebody who privately expresses advocacy for opinions that would lead to their removal for the country or for genocide of their people. So that's something to take into consideration as well. And there's also social utility to be derived from the excision of these people from our public services. Give them a little bit less influence in the no doubt innumerable ways that their biases have creeped into their decision making.
Great, so we should
So
ban
my only
hate speech, right?
Well, no,
My
no,
only
not,
concern-
wait, hold on. We're not talking about arresting people. We're only talking about firing people.
I understand. But my main concern here
Hold on,
is
sorry,
that the
hold on. But
Oh.
no. Yeah, we not okay. We don't have to arrest them, but we can do all kinds of things other than arrest, right? But we can just say that
Spank them.
we can find them, right? There are all kinds of things we can do.
Put them on a list.
A hard
but if you
finger
pay
wagging.
fine and you go to court, you go to like jail, right? If eventually you don't pay, or are you just supposed to be in this endless cycle?
Oh, sure.
It's a punitive sanction from the state.
Go ahead, please. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I didn't. Go ahead. You go.
Oh, I was going to say it's a punitive sanction from the state, which is in the case of the firing, you're not stopping them from engaging in that speech.
Exactly.
You're stopping their employment with the government. But in your case, you are using the coercive force of the state to. Now you can catch me on this and say, well, aren't you doing it with the fire? And you're kind of pressuring them in a way. I think that it's much more. There's a tighter nexus in the firing case with the job and potentially other avenues for you to get your employment. Whereas with the speech, you are directly targeting.
Okay, so is the problem the punishment, right? The punishment of the act?
In a way,
or is it
in a way
the act itself has to be protected?
But also the justification, because the justification has to do with necessary government functions. As Vaush said, you need to run the courthouse. If you can't get court clerks because your person is racist, you can't run the courthouse. If you can't have any faith in system, you can't run the courthouse. And these are necessary government functions or very important government functions that need to be able to exist. And we can't allow idiosyncratic or pervasive racist beliefs to disrupt that, or any kind of belief.
Okay. I mean, I agree with you. Hold on, we'll get to you. I agree with you, but like again, and maybe I'm missing it, so I apologize. But like, is it the act that is you're trying to protect, or are you simply saying that we don't have a remedy that is appropriate for the state to be using?
It's the act. It's the notion that speech is different for some reason, for the the Hitchens reasons or the John Stuart Mill reasons or whatever those reasons that make us think that speech is different and important and fundamental, either as a safety valve to democracy, as a tool to get to truth, which is often the meme, right? The free marketplace of ideas. We all have collectively decided that speech is important. You think it's important, Prime, because you have panels where a lot of people accuse you of platforming dangerous ideas. And so we all think that speech is extremely important. And so we're trying to protect. We're trying to protect the act, and we'll say there's a list of reasons where we can breach that precious whatever that is. And it's in the cases of categorically unprotected speech like child pornography and fighting words and that kind of stuff, or it can be if the government has a good enough reason, like really, really super good enough reason, and it's fit to their restriction. And so there's a tight fit between what you're doing and the harm of the speech.
Vaush, do you agree with him? Did you hear him?
Well, I think that I was playing video games. Can I get the do-over?
Okay.
Busted.
Yeah, so I was asking whether
I'm playing Horizon Zero Dawn.
I need to finish the game. I need to finish that game so I can play the sequel. And there's so many games I need to finish. I got a whole.
I'm sorry,
list.
I wasn't trying to be rude.
No spoilers.
You were it's a good game. You were doing what you need to be doing because I need to be doing the same thing any which way.
I can disagree vehemently if it would add to the panel. No, in fact, I think the last person talking should be arrested for whatever that was.
So Vaush, my question was. What is it that is the objection to making free speech illegal? Is it protecting the act of the speech, or is it that we don't have an appropriate remedy, right? So that you're thinking, well, arrest is too much for hate speech. And that's why I don't want to do it. But other than that, if that wasn't the case, if we had some other perfect remedy that the state could apply, then I would be fine with banning or making hate speech illegal.
For me, it has to be the arrest because state power is unique. No other power exists that can deprive you of your rights. In every other instance, whether we're talking fines or being fired or anything else, you can rely on a basic set of legal rights that are deprived from you if you are arrested and incarcerated. So for me, the idea of a person being arrested, that has to be a very, 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 very high line. But with that being said, we also have to keep in mind that there is a chilling effect to free speech that exists when bigotry is allowed to run rampant. So even if nobody's making explicit threats of violence, the free speech of, let's say, black people is lessened when in a community of white supremacists. Even if nobody ever lays a finger against them, even if we all stay within the bounds of the law, there is an implicit threat there. And that's the case against any group that's broadly targeted, not just racial lines. It's pretty much anything. So if you have a workplace, if you have even more, a school that allows for pretty open expressions of bigotry as long as they don't violate the law, nobody gets fired, you're implicitly chilling the free speech of people who are affected by that hate speech. And that's why I think firing is an appropriate solution. It's a rough one. It doesn't necessarily fix the bigotry of the person engaging in that behavior. Maybe if there was some ideal way to sit them down and debate them out of their positions, that would be ideal. But realistically, a lot of people aren't in that state when they express those opinions in a public forum.
So
Vaush, earlier
harmful.
Earlier you said you were okay with fines, and we know that fines can eventually lead to arrests, blah blah blah, when they're unpaid. So are you sure that you're okay with
I'm
fines?
sorry, I never said fines, I don't think. Not for hate speech, no. Or firing I'm fine with because
he was
the
calling
argument,
the difference between restraints on your liberty and restraints on your wallet, I think, but he didn't say that he was necessarily okay with fines as applied to hate speech.
I can't think of an example where I would find that acceptable. Unless we're talking a person engages in speech that would get them arrested, but then because they got off easy, they get fined instead. Like if a person engages in harassment and then the state lets them off with a fine or something, that would be acceptable because the alternative already would have been arrest. But to add additional people to the docket of those fined by the state, I wouldn't find that acceptable.
Calling fire in a crowded... Hold on. You just want to get this and then I'll open this up. Calling fire in a crowded theater. Okay to arrest?
Yeah, because first of all, there's argument whether or not that's even speech that's covered by the First Amendment. But I think that suppose that it were a fake, call or whatever. One is you could argue it's not a content-based restriction, and two, it's a very low value speech, and third, there's a very good reason for a government to ban that kind of speech, and it's very narrow to the kind of activity that is calling for fire when it's clear it's not a joke in this context with the intention to do that. It's very narrow in its scope, and for that reason, I think it's okay, and it's low value speech.
Would that not fall under imminent lawless action?
Wait. To help you a little bit more, Prime. To help you a little bit more, I think it has the ability to cause physical damage and not just whatever we would consider emotional damage, right? And we look at those things as very different under the law.
Oh boy,
I think that's what you don't agree with.
No, you gave me an opening
exactly.
there.
That's what you don't agree with. So that's what I want to give you.
Okay.
I think that's where you're going, right?
Exactly. So, but before I go there, Vaush, what do you think?
Well, it's also the other thing that makes that, I think, very easy to say that it's illegal is that there's no avenue by which people can really be oppressed by that law. Like crying out like fire in a public theater is something that there's no positive utility to be derived, no activist movement that it could be used to target, no bigotry that it could be used to slyly express. It's just don't do this obviously bad thing. Same with death threats. Death threats are another really, really, really easy one, at least conceptually. There's not really any benefit to be derived from them. It's just if you allow it, it's bad, flat out. So with that, I'm okay with arrests. Same with death threats, I guess. It seems like an easy call.
Stochastic terror. Is there any benefit to that?
That's a super rough one. I think that you can make a legitimate argument for the arrest of people who engage in some behaviors like that. I don't want to be too specific, but I do think that we are too lax with stochastic terrorism.
Well, you can have first of all imminent lawless. Someone was mentioning Brandenburg earlier. That's its own category of unprotected speech. Obviously, like accomplice liability in the world of criminal. Like if you help someone and you encourage them, like go do this crime, go do this, go do this. That in the private context, it's not a general cry. Typically, isn't protected. Same with conspiracy.
Okay, but the problem, so the problem with like stochastic terror is that you, instead of having like saying somebody's instead of somebody saying you should go do this, right? It's like it's a close knit I don't want to say close knit, but like a relatively closed off group ideologically, right? That is constantly exhorting each other to like higher and higher levels of action, and none of them are doing it through I mean, some of them might, but they don't have to be doing it explicitly through saying, oh, you should go and do this, right? It's just constantly celebrating the people who do go and do this sort of stuff, and so on. So it starts getting really, really dodgy there. But I think
Can I ask a question of the panel when you're done? Sorry.
I think for sure, like some of the forums and stuff that we were talking about, like you could probably bring some kind of law that would prosecute administrators of those forums where that sort of stuff's going on.
So, Vaush, you can ask that question, and Wick can be the first person because he's been waiting to answer it.
I just want to ask, like, because with the stochastic terrorism thing, okay, if a person was like a public figure,
No, I was saying go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I'll go after you.
No worries. I was saying, like, I think we could probably all agree that if a public figure said, like, I don't know, whites are the superior race and a culling needs to be engaged in to purge all the lesser races from this country, I think most people can agree that, like, at a certain line of encouragement, that behavior should probably warrant some kind of legal investigation, if nothing else. The problem is that you can basically say the exact same thing, like, very obviously, without using language that would warrant you any kind of legal investigation, you know? So if you, like, you can eventually draw it back to the abstract. Like with what Tucker Carlson's doing right now. Tucker Carlson's been going on and on about this lately. The greatest threat to democracy is immigration. The Hart-Celler Act of the 1960s, that's the greatest threat we've ever had to democracy. Now, what did the Hart-Celler Act do? It basically let a bunch of non-white people into the country. So what Tucker Carlson is saying fundamentally is that our democracy, an institution which he has said we should defend to the death, that's a very common line for any political commentator, is being threatened by a law that allowed non-white people to come in. The logical extrapolations of this lead immediately to violence and stochastic terrorism, but it's all couched within language that completely annuls him from any kind of legal consequences. Now, I don't think you should just be able to, like, arrest him for what he's saying there, because that seems like it could get dicey quickly, but it's something we have to be honest with talking about. Like, the fact that stuff like this is allowed is dangerous. Maybe we have to allow it. Maybe there's no other way, but it is dangerous. It's just something we have to keep in mind.
Yeah, for sure. We can say
it sounds a lot like mind reading.
I think we'd all.
So we'll get Wick and then Jishu. We'll get to Jishu at the move. All right.
Well, and you just mentioned there at the tail end there, it gets really dicey really quickly, because you can take this line of reasoning, you take this logic train and apply it to a whole bunch of things. You mentioned earlier, for example, that your friend did not feel comfortable at the workspace because of the private views expressed privately by one of their coworkers. We have had people on this panel before say that they do not feel comfortable working with people who voted for Trump, and they use much of the same reasoning. They tied the things that Trump said to various racist things, which is exactly true. But we cannot. There is a danger. Yes, there's 100%.
I think I'm okay with people being fired for voting Republican, by the way. I think I have to bite the bullet on that one. I think I'm okay with that.
I understand that that's probably a joke.
Especially in 2020.
No, I'm not joking.
2016, I could probably forget it. But
I know you're not.
Political opinions aren't a protected class, right?
Yes, but when it comes down to it, like, this is a very big it's a big can of worms, because when you open it, and if this is a line you're using, how someone feels, their comfort level, then it gets really dicey really quickly, because a lot of people feel really uncomfortable when presented with things that we here would find very comfortable. Transphobia is the idea that people feel really uncomfortable working with someone who is trans. And we would not be okay with
He's doing the
firing
thing.
someone
He
for
always
that,
does
for
the thing.
example.
He just brings up the same point over and over again. It's a wick
Because
thing. He
it's
can't get off. He makes one point at the start of the panel and then just repeats it ad nauseum.
And I have a very
for 4
unique
hours.
perspective
It's
that I would like to
frustrating as all
provide.
hell.
Okay.
So
well,
much
I
famous.
wanna-
Where's the love, folks? Come on.
I want to interrupt for a second, quick too.
no.
I want to
Okay.
hear layman.
Okay.
Let's hear layman.
Excuse me. Yes, you can, but
Yo,
Wait,
I hate
who's
they just
talking?
memed on. No, they memed on Wick, so it made me forget what I was gonna say. You can come back to me, Wick. I'm sorry, but that Vivian had somewhat of an accurate representation. But
Can we
My
fix
point
all these
is-
problems by
yeah,
just getting rid of
regardless what
Republicans?
this-
It seems like every law we want to implement, the problem is like, well, what if Republicans did it? What if we just got rid of Republicans? Then we wouldn't have to worry about them abusing all the laws that we put in place to make the world better. Isn't that like the solution we're
Be
working
careful.
Honestly,
be
I
careful there.
follow
Bosh.
that
You're
logic
engaging in some
really well.
stochastic terrorism right there.
Whoa,
Well,
getting rid of them
that
in the free
makes
marketplace
sense.
of ideas.
Right,
Well
man.
done.
Vash,
So I have a very interesting, weird.
yeah. So Prime, this does bring me back to what I was going to say, and because we were going to talk about the differences between like physical harm and threatening physical harm, and like emotional harm or mental harm or whatever you wanted to talk about there. That's what I wanted to bring up and for us to engage in when you were saying the differences between those, right?
Sorry. Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was going to ask, why do you think those should be protected the same? That's pretty much my question, because I think that there's a different level of threat, a different level of impact, blah blah blah. Right.
So
the usual.
So we can understand that. So there's. We say that harassment is something that shouldn't be allowed. Correct. Right. Like that we.
Yes.
Harassment is something. Okay. That the government can step in. Right.
Yep, and there's a way to rationalize that in everything we just said too. If there's a question there, no one here, I think, as Maddie brought it up first, I think no one here disagrees that harassment and targeted speech with an intention to hurt a particular person or to infringe on their privacy is usually the big nexus there. Like you're calling someone at 5 o'clock at night or you're stalking people. This kind of targeted activity, we feel, I think it's okay to prescribe and in a way, in other words, ban.
Okay.
So I have a really interesting case that's weird, and I just want to see what you guys think about it. So I don't know if anyone here has ever heard of the cop Gilbert Valley. He essentially got arrested for being on a kink website that was talking about like cannibalism, and that cannibalism was his kink, and he was arrested for that.
He was arrested for attempted murder. He was arrested for
illegal.
For like murder, for attempted murder or conspiracy to commit murder.
But in
Sounds
his
like it wasn't just a fantasy.
His defense that it was fan fiction. There was no attempted murder. He didn't attempt to murder anyone, and when he was doing his job, he was like perfect at his job as a cop. He didn't actually like go to anyone's house. He didn't do anything, and his claim was that it was fan fiction because it was just him and his friends talking about it.
It's a hard case.
Hold on. People can claim anything as fan fiction. So
I'm sorry. Can I actually butt in on that one case? That case is not a good example because he used the police scanner to look up information about a woman and then put that information about that woman into his fan fiction. That's what he got arrested for.
Yeah, but he just said, "Well, that was part of my fiction."
No. What he got arrested for was using the laptop specifically.
Yeah, he used like police equipment to do these kind of searches and that sort of thing. Listen, that is a hard case about like murder and what do you need for attempt liability, that kind of stuff. I don't think it's precisely what we're worried about on this side of the house.
But what I'm reading is that he was arrested because on a dark fetish website, he was talking about torturing, rape, and murdering his own wife, and his wife is the one who reported him to the police. So maybe there's a bunch of other things that happened, but it seems like the original reason for his arrest was because it seems as if he was planning or at least fantasizing about the murder of his own wife, right? So that's
that's why I wanted to bring it up, because it was weird, because it's like it was based on a fantasy and it was fiction according to him, and there was no actual actions that took place in regards to like attempted
we can't in Minecraft in real life, right? We all agree that you can't just say in Minecraft and be absolved.
In Roblox in real life.
This is not a good example.
Can we say in Skyrim? I like that better.
Unless we
that one yet.
know, unless we
feds
know
aren't
all
onto
the
that one yet.
details of this case, we're just going to be stuck in the weeds forever trying to
Yeah,
work
exactly.
out what the details
Okay.
are.
Yeah,
feels
I
like
have a,
derailment.
I have a question for Pisco really quickly. So, like, on the topic of stochastic terrorism, so like, from my understanding, the reason why so many people can quote unquote get away with taking it right up to that line and not going over it and not getting arrested for it is because they it's non-imminent in terms of their speech. So they'll say, someday we need to overthrow this republic, and things. So it doesn't put a time frame on it. But if they were to say, for example, we need to storm the Capitol right now, that would go over into an imminent action.
Yeah, that's what Vaush was alluding to, I think, by saying
Yeah.
that these people need to ring the right. You almost are asking these people who are, to have like ring the right bells in order for them to be guilty of this crime, and like a sophisticated person, or not even that sophisticated person, is able to get around it by using the kind of words or saying that it's not imminent explicitly to get around it. And I think you're right, and I think Vaush is right that that's the state of our law. But try to think about the law if it were differently. Suppose that you said we should at some point overthrow the United States government and install a dictatorship of the proletariat. Is that
curious?
If that is like that is illegal, right? Now. That's illegal. It would be illegal to do that. You're calling for that. It's not imminent. It's explicit, though. Should that be our standard? That any call to lawless action, if you publish in a book how to construct a nuclear weapon, or how to make a certain drug, right, and advocate for people to make their own LSD or whatever, should that be a crime? It's a call. Suppose it's an explicit call for lawless action.
Well, you can get two of those three things out of the Anarchist Cookbook. I'm sorry.
I'd answer that with a question myself. In that, under those theories, would you then say something like teaching historical materialism? Would that fall under? Because that teaching teaches that one day the capitalist mode of production will fall. The current state of our government will fall.
I think I want to protect the communists, and I want to protect the revolutionary anarchists, and that's part of the that's why I think Wick, although maybe a little bit one note in this sphere, I don't think it's.
I don't also fuck them both.
KOE also keeps saying this fear, and it's one that I think has been referenced by the other side, or whoever's left on the other side, but hasn't been fully addressed, which is, these laws historically were applied against communists and socialists in all the cases.
I'm not saying folks should be arrested for like vague. What I said was I don't even know if it would be possible to implement laws to counteract that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I'm not referencing you specifically. I'm saying back when the standards were lower, back when it was Schneck case, or that's the Oliver Wendell Holmes case and a bunch of other ones. Back when the standards were lower, they were applied to in the World War I context, World War II context. They weren't applied to communists because Stalin was our ally, but then in the Cold War period they were applied to communists, and in the 1720s era they were applied to people who were against the war, and many of them were anarchists. So I think you have to address that.
You could run this against the Constitution too, right? I mean, just really quick, just like, was it not written by the founding fathers themselves that it is just and fair that if a government no longer duly represents the interests of their people, that a population should rise up against it and seize control of that government and form a new one?
Who said that? I mean, certainly not Madison. And Madison wanted a stable government to last, and he's maybe Jefferson said something like that, but he's
I remember it was written.
Vaush the Jeffersonian.
Close your mic.
The only point I'm getting at is that depending on the preconditions expressed,
Layman, holy shit, you're typing so loud. Vaush, go.
Oh fuck! I'm so sorry. I had no idea that I was.
Vaush,
I'm
go.
so sorry.
Okay, great. Vaush, go, please.
Just depending on the preconditions, like you could justify calls to revolution pretty easily. I mean, hell, if the Republicans were right and the election actually had been stolen, I think you could justify a lot that they could do. everything they said was true, and again, it's not, and that's the problem. They failed in the evidentiary element of this. If they could prove the claims made, then I think they'd have a pretty good case for a lot of their activities. And failing that, I think what they're doing is reprehensible. But if they did, then I don't know. You could if it was true that there was a deep state conspiracy to deny the true elected representative their place in government, so that an ongoing cabal of like Democratic pedophiles could continue their reign, you could actually get away with a lot after that. So, I mean, the point
It's a great
is,
point. Yeah.
right. There are all thresholds where we'll justify like advocacy for stuff like that. I think that there's always going to be way too much nuance to ever come up with like a really solid dunk line in a Twitch debate panel. Like, this is the line and this is where things should be drawn, because it's always going to be something that's going to be debated, not only in the heat of the moment, the ethics of it will be debated for like decades to come. You know, it's always going to be rough.
Well, you still have to think about it, and you could say I want a high barrier as opposed to a low barrier. I think your point is it's a wonderful point. It's precisely why I want to protect people who say, yeah, the election was stolen. You know, me who have argued day and night against these people and who think that they're all losers. I don't want the government to come and go to their houses if they haven't committed crimes, precisely because one day it might be me. And so I think that's a good point.
So
which is why there was such a big difference.
Let's go to layman and see what he's got, and then Kaylee.
I was just gonna say the whole free speech discussion seems a little silly. See, I'm the resident radical centrist of these communities. If you're not familiar with who I am, and I think that the best solution to the whole free speech problem, essentially, we take half of the words in the dictionary, we make those words illegal, then we take the other half of the words and we make them untouchable, completely free reign. And the words that are free reign are specifically the words that make Vaush angry and like really, really fucking mad. And then we just make all the other words illegal. That's my prescription. Yeah, I know, right?
Use Thanos, the dictionary.
I've learned so much from you.
Yeah,
that's fair and brave.
Yeah, I know, and that's it. You all have a good night.
Layman. I was so looking forward to that. But yeah, I love how Layman goes like, Phil, you can't say that. I'm like, but I just did. Why is everybody so mad? But
I've never been more inspired.
I know. I've learned so much. We laughed, we cried. But you know, folks, whenever you want to restrict the speech of another person, even if it's an opinion you find reprehensible, like we just had Pisco 95 just say, I mean, you are potentially making a switch for your own back, okay? You might be having to make a switch for the back of your own legs there, because any restriction that you want to use against your political enemies will someday be turned back on you. Turnabout is perfectly fair play. Now, we've also had a lot of really interesting things that have been discussed. We've had cannibal cops of Cleveland, racist judges of Rhode Island, and all kinds of crazy shit that we've discussed. And all of that comes back to the reason that those people need to be removed is because government cannot function without credibility. And if those judges are seen as racist, or if you got some whacked out cannibal fantasy cop, they're no longer credible. So they are not credible representatives of the state at that point. And then we were talking about lone wolf terrorism and people breaking off onto that, and should people be charged for charging people up? Now, it's fascinating. Just earlier tonight, me and my buddies were recording an episode for Big Buck and Empire on YouTube about the Oklahoma City bombing. And there was a guy named Roger Moore, not the James Bond guy, but it turns out this guy was really trying to rile up all the people that were responsible for that. But he did it in such a way that they couldn't pin nothing on him. And to this day, he still has not gone to prison. I mean, he's a fucking shitheel, but to this day, that still has not happened. So the idea that somebody that's not even connected, we can charge them for the actions of another, that's getting into sticky territory. Like, that's getting into almost Orwellian territory, the likes of which that I really do not want to get into.
And you know what Orwellian means.
George Orwell is my favorite author. 1984 was the most influential book I ever read in my life when I was 14 years old. Thank you,
okay, Jordan.
Thank you, Mrs. Apley, my English teacher. Thank you for giving me that book. But all right,
I only just came back in, but I also like 1984. It's a very good book. People meme it too hard. It's actually very well written. I think it does a good job.
It is a good book, but like pretty much everybody on the right who gives that particular speech that Kay has just given has no fucking idea what it says. Like,
not to mention 90% of people that claim that they've read 1984 have not read the book.
I read it, Paige. It fucking blew my mind when I read it for the first time.
74% of statistics everybody cites are just pulled out of their fucking ass.
when I'm out on debate and
Just like the one you just made.
that I'm with did a bad
Yeah,
job
that's
with her
the joke.
makeup, I
Hold
say
on.
this is just like 1984.
So
I
it
throw the
seems like
reference.
it seems
All
like
right,
everybody's
Pisker.
basically agreed that they're like a lot of the stuff is already illegal, like calling for violence and we've like basically all already agreed to that. So I'm just trying to figure out what exactly anyone who
So-
is supporting this would be going after. Like, what else
So
should we do?
here's a conundrum, right? And it's been touched on a few times. So I was trying to bring it up earlier, but other people needed to have a chance to speak before me, and that's totally reasonable. But so we all agree that democracy and free speech, these are important things that ought to be protected, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, you have a situation in the United States currently, right, wherein 15% of your population believes that the government is run by satanic fucking pedophiles, right? And
15%?
yeah,
Yeah.
15% believes the central theory of QAnon.
Jesus.
Seems
I know,
low.
it's
Almost,
insane.
we've
It's even
almost
more if
converted
you
all of y'all.
restrict. It's even more if you restrict it to just Republicans, but 15% of the general population. It's a really scary thought, and one of the central ideas of QAnon.
Which
is
part of it
that-
is scary? The fact that our politicians are doing that, or that? No, I'm fine. I'm joking. Go ahead.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
I believe
Thanks.
that theory. I
Fuck
just
for
think
that.
that's
so,
my.
So one of the central beliefs of QAnon, right, is that they want a military coup. This is what like Flynn got in a bit of a kerfuffle over advocating for recently. Is they want a military coup to like overthrow the current Biden administration, install Trump as like a dictator, basically, and get rid of democracy entirely.
Sounds like a Confederate to me.
Let's say, right, that in a few years' time, that 15% grows to like 40%, right? You're now in real deep fucking shit. Okay. The problem with having ultimate free speech and Vaush touched on this, right, is not only the chilling effect that it has on other people's speech, but that anti-democratic speech can destroy democracy. You can vote democracy out, but you can't fucking vote it back in again once it's gone, right? And likewise, free speech can infringe upon the free speech of other people. So the idea is that we ought to be able to maximize free speech, right, whilst being able to protect these things. And if we end up in a situation in which more than 50% of the United States believes that there ought to be a military coup and a dictator installed and democracy suspended, it's over.
Vaush just told you, hang on,
again.
but Vaush had a perfect response to this earlier, which is any system of governance or law will not survive a total, immoral, evil people at the helm. And I think that's the answer for you. We shouldn't.
Exactly. So we're not talking about immoral, evil people at the helm. We're talking about.
I think if this thing grows,
just allow me to finish. Sorry, just making my proposal. My proposal is that the nearer we get to the mark where we think that it is possible that democracy could be voted out, the more restrictions we should probably consider placing on the spreading of these anti-democratic ideas.
Viv, the question is one of
because I waited a long time to ask that. So what would you advocate for then? Because that's what I've been trying to figure out. Like what? Because nobody's saying that any kind of solution.
She's not going to give you a straight answer because
it's complicated. We talked about this.
The thing is, Vivian, the solution exists. The solution exists already. It's beautiful. It's amazing. In fact, it's called the separation of government. That is what protects democracy, and it's what has protected near enough every democracy around the world.
Checks and balances.
You separate the executive from the legislative from the judiciary. Each of the three pillars of government place checks and balances upon the other. So one pillar cannot fall with the others falling as well. They hold each other up.
It is totally possible for if there was a sufficient number of open fascists in our country for them to completely legally overtake our system, and then through control of the judiciary, the legislative and executive branches, without ever breaking a single law, dismantle our democracy.
Can you,
I think
can you come
democracy.
up with, off the top of your head, a country around the world that was previously democratic, that overthrew its democratic principles without involving or infiltrating the military? Because I can't. Oh, there might be. I genuinely can't.
Oh,
Well,
that's
wait,
fine.
hold on.
Had to have happened
yeah,
before
sorry.
the
Let Vaush respond to the thing. Go ahead, Vaush.
So I can answer that first and foremost, but first of all, that wouldn't necessarily be an illegal action. If you have control over the legislative and executive branches, you can manipulate the law such to like post hoc define the actions of your enemies as being sedition or treason, and then you can bring the military in to take them out. It's entirely what if you have enough people on your side in a democracy, you can hypothetically get away with anything. I believe in self-sustaining democracy, so I don't think it should be possible for a democratic majority to vote out democracy. If more than 50% of the people in this country wanted democracy to be gotten rid of, I don't think we should cede to those demands. I don't think democracy should be allowed to
Again,
get
your
rid of democracy.
solution is already
You
here.
believe in the
It's-
minority
it's-
rights of a republic.
it's called-
You can't.
oh my god! It's called a codified constitution, which, for all of its faults, I fucking hate codified constitutions. But that enshrines in law certain laws that are higher than anything else. And in the United States,
Well, as long as you
right?
have a minimum.
Please,
Let
please,
him finish his
let me
point,
finish.
please.
Now, I completely understand what you're saying, Vaush. Theoretically, under a supermajority, yes, you could overturn some of these major democratic, quote-unquote, higher laws that are codified under the codified Constitution of the United States. However, getting a supermajority of, say, fascists in the legislature, from my perspective, I think that is a virtual impossibility. Through the history of fascist regimes, no fascist regime has successfully gained the support of the legislature under democratic means. The only one that came close. The only one that came close was Adolf Hitler in 1933, I believe, the elections, and he still didn't get a majority.
Well, they don't necessarily need to, right? I mean, they don't actually need. They don't actually need to take over the Constitution and have a supermajority. They just need to have enough power to prevent their opposition from stopping them once they start doing illegal things. If they have enough control. So, for example, the police heavily infiltrated by white supremacists. The military, not actually. It's actually a lot of liberals in the military, but their leadership generally tends to lean like more Republican leaning. If you elect the right military officials, you have that can be done very easily. You stack the judiciary, you get enough people in Congress, you start getting little steps and measures taken, little pushes, like how Donald Trump, for example, was trying to bring sedition charges against like Antifa or like Black Lives Matter protesters. If he had managed to get away with that with Barr, little steps like that, and eventually a turning point is hit, and past that point, they don't need to pretend anymore. They can just crush you.
Wait, but Vaush,
They don't
this
need
proves
to-
this argument proves too much, because now is anything justifiable because of that real threat that you're pointing out a real threat, but that doesn't make
Keeping
everything and
fascists
anything
out of government.
justifiable.
Keeping fascists
At any-
out of government.
That's just an argument overall.
We should be aware. We should have responses. Wait, hang on. So we should have responses to that. We should have ideas about that, how to confront that. But it doesn't justify everything just by virtue of the fact that it's a danger that exists.
I
We
was
need
never.
to
I
have.
didn't
Okay,
say
so
everything. I was only. I was only pointing. I was
So no one here disagrees.
Wait.
Let Vaush
I wasn't
respond to
trying
him.
justify. I wasn't trying to justify everything. I was only saying that I think democracy should be self-sustaining, and that while it is hypothetically possible for fascists to completely dismantle democracy legally, they don't actually need to. They only need to wait until they have enough power that they no longer have sufficient
Yeah, that's
opposition
true.
to continue.
Yeah, but you're
That's the
right.
only-
But
I'm not saying we should,
then
like,
what's the so what to that?
Protect against that. You cannot use laws to protect against. You just
Yeah.
you elucidated a very good reason why
You
hate
absolutely
speech
can.
laws and things like that are ineffective, because they do not fix the problem.
But we're forgetting the third pillar. We're forgetting an independent judiciary cannot be effectively infiltrated on a mass scale by fascist elements. It just can't happen.
It already has. We already have the.
Please shut up. Please shut up. You cannot compare very conservative judges with fascist
fascists.
individuals. You can't do that.
Absolutely
It's
can.
The majority of the judges that the majority of the judges that threw out the Trump case were conservatives.
Okay, hold on. All right, so Mayor, finish your point. Nacho, jump in, and then
Wait, tell Vaush to name one fascist judge. He just indicted our.
all I wanted to do.
I just want to
pass-
say
Percentage of the Republican voting base is
Judges off the top of
fascist.
your
I'm
head.
curious.
Okay.
And the leftist,
Okay.
panel, what percentage of the Republican voting base is fascist in your opinion?
Okay, Vaush, then you can answer this.
how many of them voted for Trump?
Oh my god.
Oh, so you think every single Trump voter is a fascist? Okay. All
Wait,
right.
I mean, it's
There
at
you
least
go.
23%.
Hold.
Is my
Hold on.
answer.
It's not a matter of whether every single voter is a fascist. It's whether or not they vote for fascists. If you think Donald Trump is a fascist, they all vote for the fascist, then they are voting for the fascist government. That is
Which
what they
federal
do.
judge
How
is
many
a
Republican
fascist?
Party do you think are fascists? What
So
percentage
many
of Republican
Democrats-
Party voters do you think
Doesn't
are fascists?
matter.
That's what I'm asking.
Wait, I'm not talking about
Your
the
opinion.
moral
Your opinion.
credibility of the individual voters. That's never been something that I've attempted to comment on.
Let's talk
I'm
about the
only talking
judges.
About the influence of fascism.
So which federal judge or which set of federal judges do you think are fascist?
Supreme Court judges?
The Supreme Court justices. Which ones?
I'm not actually familiar with.
Oh
Supreme
my god.
I know, for example, I know that Scalia in a different country probably would have ruled yes on me being sent to a death camp if he had the opportunity.
You think Scalia was a fascist?
I'll put that.
Yeah, he's the
Oh my
fucking
God.
fascist.
I'll put that
hang
guy
on.
in. He's
Wait,
Republicans are like Captain Planet villains. Like that's not true. At all.
Okay. So
Hold on, I have to take
he has to be able to talk
Finish
to
my-
defend his point. So Vaush, defend your point.
Yeah. So I think
That was
again,
hate
what
speech, though.
we're doing right now is they're reducing fascism or like the influence of fascism down to an individual moral issue. Okay, and which is not the case. 20 years ago, there were people in the Republican Party elected.
Conservatism.
Shut up.
Who were elected officials, and these were not people who I would describe as having fascist leanings. Okay, nowadays, many of those very same officials, many of those very same voters, uncritically support Donald Trump, who, as far as I'm concerned, is an open threat to democracy and has led people down now 15% of this country down a QAnon road, and that's about as openly anti-democratic as you can get. I don't care whether a person deep down in their heart is a fascist. I don't even know what that means. Deep down in your heart, you're a fascist. I don't know what that means. It's what the effects you have in the world lead towards fascism, and every Republican voter, by way of being one, does do
a
that.
silly
If you're-
definition of someone who's a fascist. So if
It's like the Incredibles. If everyone's special, then nobody is.
Vosh, it's silly because
no, at no point did I say you are a fascist, but you said that's a silly definition for calling a person a fascist. That's not
That's
what I'm
correct.
doing
That's a
here.
Hey, hold
No,
on.
no,
one thing. Hey,
talking about-
Vosh. Hey, hold on. Hey, Vosh. Your mic is like popping and doing stuff.
Let me leave.
I
Yeah,
don't
let me
know
leave.
what.
Yeah, I'll pull you back in.
It's all those.
My god.
Okay.
So to answer KOE's question, at least 23% of the Republican voter base is fascist.
Sorry, hang on. First of all, we were talking about the judges here. For one, we're talking about judges and justices in the judiciary. So let's not now make this argument about the broader Republican
KOE
Party.
asked about Republicans.
Okay, well then to that extent, I think KOE was distracting on what we were talking about. But then Vaush came in and said anyone who ultimately contributes and affects the outcome of fascism is in his mind a fascist, and he doesn't see a need to look into the soul of someone to see if they're truly
Contributes to fascism.
well. Someone who contributes to fascism. What is a contribution to
Well,
fascism?
if you vote for like a fascist politician, don't you think that would be?
So it requires an
contributing
intentionality, right? You have to intend to enact fascism or to promote fascism. No.
Necessarily.
So if someone,
to this?
so someone who makes an act that may lead to or will bring about fascism to a greater probability, that's someone who's a fascist, correct?
There are
This is
considering
like association
openly
fallacy,
anti-democratic.
right?
Well, hold on, wait.
It kind of
So there are
is.
obviously thresholds here. You can blur the lines as much as you want, but Trump is very openly anti-democratic. Voting for him, I'd consider a fascist action, thus enabling fascism. I don't think.
But do you
that's
think?
very hard.
So you think a third of the country?
Let him finish. Let him finish, and then you can ask your goddamn question.
Oh my god, we know what he was fucking gonna say.
Oh, holy shit.
No, you don't.
Holy shit.
No,
I didn't
let
know.
him finish.
I want to hear.
Fuck. Shut up. Shut up. Everyone shut the fuck up. All right? Stop it. Let Vaush finish his question. You got a problem, that get the fuck out. Thank you.
I just want to say we need to move away from like individual moral condemnations. There are people who vote for fascist outcomes who themselves are probably very fine people. The only reason they're doing what they do is because they've been misled by media or they have a set of concerns that maybe aren't based that in reality or whatever. But it's not about like every single Republican's a fascist at their heart, because I know Republicans and a lot of them are fine people. It's about what actions do we take, what outcomes do they affect. I don't think intent factors in it at all. I don't think Donald Trump thinks he's a fascist at all. I think that he's an idiot, but the outcome
outcomes of his power are undeniably
Gosh,
fascist.
you voted for a liberal, didn't you? So that makes you a liberal.
It means that I
Yeah.
preferred a liberal
No, he
outcome
literally just.
to a fascist.
This is association fallacy.
Then are you a
Yeah.
liberal or are you not?
So wait, hold on. Wait, really quick. I'm
Yeah.
going to impugn your intelligence if you do this to me again. At
the
no point
dumbest
have
question.
I said this person is a fascist. I've talked about the outcome.
You
people
said that-
push and given the op.
You said
Hold
that
on.
there were
Let-
judges
let
who were
finish, let him
fascists.
finish. Let him finish. Let him finish.
People, right, but we're talking
Wait,
about
he
voters.
did.
You're talking about me. Voting on a judge. A judge is a person in a different position of power with a different degree of intentionality. We're talking about voters. That's why you talked about me. I'm a
No,
voter,
I
not a
was talking about
judge.
the judiciary.
Okay, well,
The
then
judiciary.
why me? So when we're talking about voters, when the previous election, there were two directions this country could take: a neoliberal one or a fascist one. And given that choice, I think it prudent that we all choose the neoliberal one because it is preferable. It's not about whether or not it makes you a neoliberal or makes you a fascist. It's the direction you push in. Did I push the country in a neoliberal direction when I voted for Biden? Yes. But because the only alternative was pushing it in a fascist direction or allowing
This
it
is
to be
another
pushed in
point that no one
direction.
disagreed with, but you said there were fascists in our judiciary. So on what basis does that association lead to your belief that there's fascists in our judiciary?
I think that honestly, I think that being a Republican in a position of power basically means that you have to prove to me that you're not a fascist. They are so openly anti-democratic. I need some
This is
kind
an
of
excuse not to think. I mean, this is silly. So anyone who
it's
has
an
an association,
anti-democratic party. If a person like is
a
part
lot
of
of
the
these
Nazi
judges
party, I need
predate
them to
Trump.
prove to me.
They're Republicans. You talk about
Which is
Scalia.
evidence of that fascist element also predates Trump. Trump is the logical conclusion to it, but that's that's the end of a long line of anti-democratic policy.
So was
that has
George
been
Bush a
spearheaded
fascist?
specifically by the GOP?
Was George Bush a fascist? You're comfortable saying he was a fascist?
Sure, not
No,
as much
I think that
as
George.
Trump, but yeah, I think.
Wait,
What
but
does the word mean to you now?
This is the same as somebody.
Anybody to the left
Okay.
of Noam Chomsky.
Hold on, hold on,
Or
hold
the
on.
right of Noam
Oh,
Chomsky.
we will have order. Okay, great. Maddie, you were trying to say something.
Yeah, basically, like I think this whole line of questioning of do you think so and so is a fascist? Do you think socialist? Listen, Trump and the policies that he advocated for, which is mirrored by his rhetoric, is explicitly anti-democratic. Whether you want to label that a fascist or not, whatever that is, it's fine. Do we think that everyone that voted for him is also a fascist? No, because often the people that end up voting
That's
for
what was
fascists
said.
do so because they didn't get they got false information. They were fed certain things. If you ask someone, hey, are you voting for a fascist? No one's going to say oh yeah, I love fascists. Can't get enough of them. That's not how this works. And to think that also a legislature can't be filled with fascists because but we live in a democracy. Have you been blind and not paying attention to what the policy of the GOP has been at the both state and federal level for the past 2 decades? What they've been doing is systematically changing the laws so that you make it harder to vote, harder for marginalized people to be able to participate in democracy, also to gerrymander so that they are more easily able to pack the legislature and then effectively pack the courts with people who are going to be sympathetic to their causes. That is how that happens, and that is how it happens under a democratic system.
Okay.
The reason
No one
it's so important for us, I'm not done. No, I'm not done.
Yeah, let
No.
her finish.
No, I'm not done.
God.
So what you do, the reason that it's so important to protect voting rights, to protect those types of things is because if we don't do that, that allows people who want to consolidate power to then utilize the systems and processes that we have in place for our democracy. It enables them to utilize those things in order to implement fascist out and deliver fascist outcomes. That's what we're saying. So this whole thing about do you think this person's a fascist? Do you think this voter's a fascist? What a fucking stupid question.
Okay.
Truly.
No,
I'm
that's not what
my
was said.
brain is
That's not what was
fried.
said. No,
Okay,
so
let's
everyone
set it
agrees.
down to conversation.
Wait,
Everyone
so
agrees
this is
here
simple.
that there's a pathways to fascism. There's a danger of fascism. I would say Trump is fascist. But what was said is that all you need to know someone is a fascist is a Republican association. Even judges who are nominated and confirmed under previous Republican administrations are fascists. Hell, George Bush is a fascist. If that's the case, what does this word even mean?
Wait,
talk about the George Bush thing if you want.
Just like
Okay.
Invincible, if
Okay.
everybody's special,
only do
then
one
nobody
question.
is.
Hold on,
Vosh.
only
wait.
do
This
one
is why
question
this is silly.
So
Vosh,
GSU
this is
Gambit
why
go,
this is
and
silly.
then we'll go back to Vosh.
Yeah, Vaush, this is why this is silly, right? People on the right can look at the left and say, oh, they want to nationalize healthcare. They want to nationalize education. They want to nationalize all of these industries. They want to they want to decommodify housing. Oh, they're all communists. They want to transfer all the power to the state, right? So your lazy ass view of everyone that's conservative is is a fascist, it's the same view
Keep
that
saying
everyone on the left
not
is
what I'm saying, and
communist.
people keep not listening to me. Okay, wait. So
No,
first of all,
I'm saying
this
the politicians
I,
that support those policies, right? Just like
okay,
you
hold
are,
on. Wait.
or the judges or whoever, whatever people you want to imbue with the term fascism would be the
We need
same
to be
as the
clear.
right doing that with communists.
We need to be clear on like the non-ascension of malicious intent here. Okay, I don't think most fascists think they're fascists, and I'm not impugning voters here. Even if they contribute to fascist outcomes, I really think the vast majority of Republican voters are just fucking stupid. I don't think that they're like motivated by some deep-seated desire to enact the Fourth Reich. When it comes to actual Republican politicians, yeah, the Republican Party for the past 60 years has been deeply infiltrated by white supremacy and a fervent hatred of democracy. Every Republican president since the Southern Strategy has pretty clearly outlined their like electoral and broader policy goals in a way that disadvantages minorities, furthers ethno-supremacy, furthers American exceptionalism, and furthers like imperialism abroad. This is pretty much ubiquitous across the presidencies. Now, the ways in which they do this differ. George Bush is not the same type of president as Donald Trump, not even close, but he did push for a holy war, and he did enact the Patriot Act, and he did enact a lot of jingoistic patriotism as a way of like dismantling the arguments of his opposition. And isn't it so interesting that all of the dusty old Republicans who a decade ago acted like George Bush era Iraq war peddling neocons have now fully bit the dust on being like Trump era fascist, anti-democratic, complete big lie, delusional dipshits now? I don't think there's that much of a difference. I think a lot of them are opportunists that are willing to jump on any far right goal that'll end up like consolidating the role of the party. So with all
So then why did they throw out the election fraud? All those judges, a lot of those judges were conservative judges appointed by Trump.
So what I just said was I think the party has deep roots in fascism, and what you heard was all of them at all times are always going to act.
Changing your
But you said we're
stances to be
opportunists.
so now your stances are becoming things that I wouldn't disagree with. You know that of course there's fascist roots in a lot of in the Democratic Party. There's
play into the room.
But you're changing your initial statement, which is very strong, to become more diluted. And before you were saying there
What
are
was the initial statement?
There are
Do you think,
fascists.
first of all, in the context of the 15-person panel, I think it's okay to clarify a little bit on a statement that was briefly made over the shouts of other people.
That's
But
fine.
What
Yeah,
statement
sorry.
would you like me to
So
specifically elaborate?
I want to know. You said that there were fascists in our federal judiciary, and that's what I want clarification on. And then I think you said that Republican voters who voted for Trump are fascists, and now you're saying, well, they're pushing for something that's fascist. That's something I don't disagree with. But it sounds like you're diluting what you initially said with respect to the voters, and I want more clarification on what you said with respect to the federal judiciary.
Not diluting.
With respect to the voters, I don't. With respect, huh?
I said if it's not diluting, it's backpedaling.
I don't think it's backpedaling. With respect to the voters, I think I've been quite clear that it's not a matter of directly impugning their intent. It's just a matter of like what they support. Maybe some of them are like directly fascists. I'm sure they are. A lot of them probably just follow whatever trends they're told by the news. You know,
Okay,
I don't think
judges.
that a person is fascist if like
so
they're told
to be
press
clear,
red button or blue, and they choose red button because they think they'll get candy at the end of it, and it turns out that
Mike is getting
So,
worse
yeah.
and worse.
Hey, Vaush,
Bring me back. I don't know why my mic.
what section of the
Plug
country?
it.
Oh,
And plug it back in.
God, I was gonna ask him.
Sorry.
I would. Okay. Hey, Vaush, what section of the country you're on? I'll change the room to that.
It sounds
That
like
was
it might be like slightly unplugged or something.
Yeah, I
Mine-
think
well,
it's a cord.
mine-
I think it's a cord connection for sure.
It's an issue that I have with Discord in general. Unfortunately, it works when I'm on stream. It just
So Vaush,
is it working now? Do I sound fine now?
it's better now.
Right,
I think
sound like garbage.
it's better than it was
Yeah.
before.
Gosh, I'm gonna send you a blue Yeti, man. I'm sorry.
That's
That
what
was
I
my
got
first
right here.
microphone.
Sure. What
With regard-
what
with
area
regard-
of the country you're in? Just tell me that. What like?
I'm in Seattle.
Seattle. Okay, good. Thank you.
Ooh.
So that's Vaush,
Area.
I mean, Vaush, I have a question for you. So it's not enough to know that someone voted for Trump to know that they're a fascist, correct? You
I
agree
don't.
with that?
I just don't care what a person is. I care what a person does. If a person votes for a fascist, that's the line.
You know,
that
you
I
could care about a lot of things. I'm asking, is it sufficient knowledge? Is it possible ever to define yourself by an ideology or to identify someone as believing in a particular ideology? Is that an impossible task that is incoherent?
I generally think that when you assign a person an ideology, you're just using it as a linguistic shortcut to say that these
I'm
are
not
the
asking
goals
if
that a
you're
person
what you're using it
generally
for. I'm
supports.
asking, is it possible to identify someone with a particular ideology, or is that definitionally impossible?
If they're
incoherent?
expressly in favor of it, sure, but I don't think most people are aware of the ideology they support.
Okay, so it's not. But so under that definition, it's not enough to know someone voted for Trump to know that they expressly believe something. Correct?
Well, no, they could vote for Trump for any number of reasons, but they remain a
Okay.
supporter of fascism by way of voting for Trump, even if it's not something they're maliciously doing.
So it sounds like you would agree with the statement then that knowing that someone's a Trump voter is not enough to know they're fascist.
Sure, but it
Correct?
would be enough to know they support fascism, which is what I care about. I don't actually care if they're a
Distinction
fascist. I
without a
care if they.
So let's go to the judiciary then. So what is your evidence that there are members of the judiciary who are fascist?
Well, I'm pretty sure. Okay, wait. I didn't come with like articles. I'm pretty sure that I read like prior case on a couple of the judges that were appointed to the federal circuit by Trump. Some of the stuff there was like incredibly suspect from
Like
some
what?
of the prior cases that they had handled. Wait. Okay, so this can be interpreted as backpedaling. I didn't know this statement would be the one that would be heavily scrutinized, but I don't have.
You said the
like,
federal judiciary was embedded with fascists, or
wait, hold
It's gonna get a little scrutiny.
Can somebody does somebody remember the specific language that I used? Because I feel like a lot more weight was applied to this statement than
Vaush,
the other statements that I made.
do you think that imbuing our federal judges with fascism is a statement that we should just like glass over? Like what? Like,
Wait, hold on. Wait. What was the specific language that I used so I can
You said
clarify to the
Scalia was a
utmost
fascist judge, right?
No,
Hold on. Scalia would repeatedly back off of obviously originalist positions in favor of advocating for a wide variety of anti-minority rulings. I
Name one.
absolutely think that Scalia. I would need to go back through it. I'm not an expert on the judiciary. This is an impression that I've gotten from a limited understanding of what he said, but it's something that I'd feel comfortable defending if I came back here after an hour of reading.
Shouldn't you know a little? I mean, you're accusing a man.
You're accusing people of being fascist. I mean, come on now.
And the best is,
wait, hold on.
He wasn't
There's a
consistent
pretty
on
big-
originalism.
There's a pretty big
and-
difference. Hold on. There's a pretty big difference between having read what I've read in a person. I'm pretty sure this person would support fascist outcomes, and I have a specific memory of all of the case and what are they called? The summaries they do. The Supreme Court justices when they disagree.
Yeah, but the thing is, Scalia is very known for being, for instance, so Scalia is conservative, but he's known for being very strong on like criminal procedural rights, for instance. That's something that like fascists typically aren't very good with, having very strong criminal procedural rights. Scalia is also known for being somewhat protective of free speech in certain areas. For instance, with respect to a lot of the controversial free speech cases, he sides in favor of free speech a lot of the time. Those are tendencies that I don't consider.
Fascists tend to be very anti-individualist, but the rhetoric of the Republican Party is explicitly pro-individualism. Fascism is idiosyncratic. It pulls from a lot of ideas, and I don't think that people, when I say there are fascists in the judiciary, what I don't mean is there are like deep sleeper Hydra agents with the secret goal of destroying democracy. What I mean is there are people who align with the Republicans' broader ideological goals and will act in favor of those. And right now, the Republican Party's broader ideological goal is a fascist one.
So I don't know how this is.
Okay,
all
distinction
that
without a difference. Okay.
No, hold on. I don't know how this is all that controversial, right? That we have a Republican Party.
I can do the research and come back. I didn't know that'd be super harped on, but I have read like enough stuff to know that if I looked back at it, I could find some pretty compelling.
Well, Vaush, I think you're a Martian.
Let me say this, and then we'll go to KOE, and then it's Neo person. Start great. But like I don't know how this is so controversial. Like we've seen the other Republican Party, we've seen the fall of the Republican Party, not just in the Trump administration, but for decades, right? This aligning themselves with white supremacy. Like we've seen this is a thing that they've done, right? All along the ways, like making comfortable bedfellows with them, and to the point where them realizing that Trump was a threat, right? And actively stating that, and actively, for once, trying to stop it. They saw what was coming. The establishment Republicans fought, well, like hell, maybe, I don't know. But like they fought against it, right? But as soon as Trump came into office, right, or even before then, when it was clear that the base was with them, right, their principles went out the door, right? They realized it was a political gain to be had, and then, sure, we're fine with a proto-fascist. Oh, did you give us our tax cut? Oh, this guy's not so bad. So I don't.
You're right, Prime. You're absolutely right about the broader point. This is something I totally agree with you. I'm sure other people wouldn't, but being right about the broader point does not give us excuse to say things that are not true or things that aren't backed. It's a lot of the reason why I think a lot of conservatives are frustrated oftentimes with other things.
What
like
specific point do you disagree with?
That our federal judiciary is infested with fascists. I don't agree that they're.
Hold on. So do you think that there are any fascists among the many Republicans that have been appointed to judiciary positions?
I have no reason to believe that among the federal judiciary there is a fascist. I have no reason to believe that.
So, what do you think a
It
fascist
would require
is?
mind reasoning to think that there is.
Just like being inferential here, if by the definitions that I'm using, Donald Trump is a fascist, and the legislators for the Republican Party are fascist because they almost to a man back pretty much everything that he does. Do you really think it's that unlikely that the third branch of government would also, with judges appointed, by the way, by a fascist, might also have leanings in that direction? Is that something that's intuitively impossible to you?
Well, a couple things. We're not asking whether it's possible. Of course, I'll say it. It's possible. There's a lot of things true. It's possible all of them are fascist. So
do you think
I'm
it's
not
reasonable?
Going to get tripped up
possible
by.
QAnon is right.
What you think the threshold for evidence is? Do you think it's a reasonable thing to believe?
That's what I was next going to say. Is you need affirmative reason to believe that these federal judges are fascists and not just accepting the nomination of a fascist, or they may not even consider they're fascist. Does the belief that Trump isn't a fascist make you a fascist? I don't know. And furthermore, the federal judges oftentimes rule against those appointed by Trump, rule against Trump. So it doesn't satisfy your condition that they're just doing everything that Trump says. So that was your condition for the legislators.
Wait, hold on. I didn't say every single person appointed by Trump has to agree with everything that he does, or they're like all fascists. It's funny that you're accusing me of being essentialist, because I feel like every statement that I make is being criticized in an incredibly essentialist way.
Well, no. So I don't think
as a general rule, I think the Republican Party is at this point a fairly overtly fascist party. It casts aspersions upon anyone with that party alignment who has enough power to go into government, certainly enough power to be appointed to the judiciary. I mean, that's a pretty extreme position of power.
So it's enough to know that they're Republican.
If I may.
Well, okay.
So with that being
it's enough to know they're Republican.
Sorry. We'll let Vaush finish, then we'll go to Kiwi.
So with that being, that's an initial presumption, okay? Now, I don't know the specific positions of every single Republican in Congress. I just don't know all of them. But I'm comfortable saying, just broadly, based on their general support for Donald Trump and the way they've acted, I'd be comfortable like, oh, is that Republican congressperson a fascist? Yeah, well, they certainly push for fascist outcomes. Now, with the judiciary, I have read quite a bit on some of the appointees from Trump, some of the things they've said and done that I think is wildly unbecoming of a legal professional, stuff that certainly seems convenient to any fascist who might be in power. I don't remember that stuff right off the bat. If you like, and I'm genuinely being sincere here, I can come back at some point in the future, and I can come back with like a couple of things that I saw that prompted me to make that statement. I apologize for not making it without having like sources at the hand, but I feel like I could justify it if given some time.
I just want to clarify, I'm not asking for a source on like just general like. I wouldn't need a source. I would just need like what have they done?
Now, if I may. Now, one of the reasons why you're getting a lot of pushback on this, Vaush, is you're saying, well, there's people in the judiciary that are fascists. Well, I mean, Vaush, I think you're a Martian. What? Why do I need to have evidence to prove that you're a Martian? No, you're clearly a Martian, and you've got a lot of Martian sympathies, and I think we really need to be worried about that. Just saying these, and also we've been having a rather interesting imposition where pretty much damn near anybody to the right of Noam Chomsky is being called a fascist, and it's just like I keep saying, and as I was saying earlier, and I said a few other times, it's just like that movie, The Incredibles. If everybody's special, that's just another way of saying that nobody is. And also, one last thing I'd like to throw out there is mind reading to determine whether someone's a fascist or not. It's a non-falsifiable statement saying, I think they're fascist. I think they're. Go ahead.
Really quickly, the response that you've given proves you haven't listened to a single fucking thing that I've said, because at no point was I making inferential statements about people's mind states, only about the actions they do and the effects they have. Additionally, you saying that like saying a person might have fascist leanings or outcomes is equivalent to like just calling a person a Martian with Martian leanings suggests to me that you might have an
you're making an assertion without any evidence.
Low threshold for what it means to be a fascist. So, do you believe?
I'm making a high assertion for proof and evidence.
Do you think that Donald Trump is a fascist?
No.
Okay, right. So that's the reason why. You probably
If
think
he
I'm
is, he's a
calling
really
people
shitty one. He
Martians
lost a
because you-
re-election and he was under investigation the whole time. So it's a real shitty fascist.
Wait, hold on. Being a failed fascist doesn't make you less of one. So that's probably the reason why you hear Martian
pretty bad at
accusations
it.
from me, because you're incapable of seeing fascism when it's evident. Your brain just doesn't see it. It's like ultraviolet light to you. So when I say, hey, it's over there, you think I'm seeing things. But
No, I think
most
you're
of the
just
people on
crying
this
wolf
panel
too
don't
much, and now
understand.
people aren't going to be able to recognize real fascism when it shows up. So I think this calling
What's
everybody
real?
a fascist is
Wait.
actually very harmful.
Hey,
Attacks on the
Oh,
I'm
boy.
not
Okay.
getting baited into the is Trump a fascist thing. This is a very evident point.
Okay, great. Sorry. Don't
Not
worry.
really.
Vosh,
7 million people voted for him. Apparently, he's not as fascist as you think.
What does that
Oh my
mean?
fucking
Wait,
God,
what?
that's such a stupid point.
Oh boy.
He's
You know-
baiting. He's
Are you
throwing
trying to-
lines out.
No, I'm not gonna go into that actually. No.
Wash me in your judgment, internet. I love it.
So we're gonna go.
Nobody
to,
would vote for a fascist.
We will go to Neo. We'll go to Samantha, and then maybe stop by our friend Fawn, who is here. Thank you, Fawn, for stopping by. All right, so Neo.
Oh, hello everybody. I'm Neo Gaia. So I actually came on here to talk about follow up on the old panel about free speech, but I will just say, you know who I can tell you is not a fascist? The former RNC chair, Michael Steele, who put everything, like, he's a Republican. You can't say he's not a Republican, but he really has, like, stood up to fucking Trump and, like, voted for Biden. He didn't want to vote for Biden. He's not a leftist. Nobody can accuse him of being a leftist or a liberal, but he's definitely not a fascist. Like, I'm just saying, like, this idea that, I don't know who that is, AOE Nation, was saying that, like, oh, everybody, just because we're leftists, we're saying that everybody that's not a leftist is, like, that's a lie, because, like, someone, I think Vaush said earlier, like, people who, there are many Republicans that put their, like, put on the line, you know, going against their own, like, many values that they have, where they don't want to vote for left-wing values, but they were like, you know what, democracy is important. Well, I don't want this fascist shit, and they, like, supported the people they literally are, like, we're talking about the RNC chair. Like, he literally was like, does not like Democrats. He's like fighting them forever. But anyway, that's all I'll have to say about that until we get back to the free speech thing.
I mean,
Also,
there's
that
not
one guy
enough
that always gets called a
Republicans
rhino.
Okay, let him respond. What?
Oh, I just think if you get called a rhino, you're probably one of the good Republicans, right? So yeah, that was good. Like Romney, for example. You know, I don't like him.
You said
but,
Bush
you know.
You said Bush was a fascist. So I mean, and people call Bush a rhino.
He's been called a rhino.
Yeah, I think that well, maybe not every rhino. I think that Bush pretty much like set the groundwork for everything that we're seeing today, as well as like the broader conservative space. I think that Bush's opposition to Trump has more to do with legacy than it does like broader ideological dispositions. Not
I mean,
to
there's
say
always
they're
an out
exactly
for
the
you. I
same,
mean,
they're definitely not.
Wow.
So
it's
it's very
he's a
convenient.
fascist, but he's fighting against the other fascists to reduce his power. Wow, this is amazing.
Okay,
That's not what I said. Well, I can't. Oh God, we're so allergic to nuance here. So there were plenty of things Trump did that set the shape of the Republican Party and made it amicable to the ways in which the conspiracism, the rampant xenophobia, the war paranoia being used to justify like fear of immigration. These were not, well, they weren't set in motion by Bush, but they were heavily enabled by him. Now, I think the tendencies he set in motion were fascistic in many ways. Does that make him a fascist? I don't know. It sets the country in a certain direction. Is he the same as Trump? Definitely not. Trump is way, way worse than Bush is with regards to the extent to which they push for fascist policies. Bush, for example, never did anything anywhere near as bad as this big lie election steal bullshit. But do they push in the line? Yeah. And I feel like introspective people back during the Bush administration were making these points too. I know that. They were there. They were saying this is exactly how you run down that road. You enable
What is
this,
fascism in abstract? What is fascism in abstract?
Really easy.
It'd be great to get a definition from Vaush.
Yeah.
Well, generally, it's considered to be like a an ultra right wing, ultra nationalistic form of like usually like an ethno-nationalist political identity. I prefer Umberto Eco's 14 points, but it gets like really in the weeds. I don't think that fascism is always super consistent with its definition.
Okay, so we're gonna go.
Oh yeah, wait, didn't Bush literally steal the 2000 election? I'm sorry, somebody in chat just mentioned that, but yeah, the 2000 election was shady as shit. I completely forgot with the Jeb Bush and the governor of Florida and the butterfly ballots. I completely forgot that he got away with it. Actually, he got away with stealing that election. At least Trump lost. You know.
So one second. I mean, are there accusations that Bush himself actively with malice.
Sorry. We got it. Other people waiting. We got to jump in. So we'll go to Comrade Samantha, and then we'll go to Fawn, who I'm very excited to have. Go ahead.
Goddamn Pisco, have you ever shot about, just shutting the fuck up? Anyway, I don't get what everybody's obsessions over fucking labels are. They're stupid and they don't fucking serve any real purpose. To respond real quick to Neo Gaia, when you're saying, look, he was good because he voted for Biden. Richard Spencer also came out and voted for Biden. Does that make him less of a fascist piece of shit? No. So your statement was fucking complete garbage. Vaush, hold on. I'm fucking talking. Shut the fuck up. Here's the thing. You said, well, I'm going to claim fascist because of fascist. I'm looking at fascist outcomes. You were saying you're looking at fascist outcomes by what people vote for or their positions, right? I'm going to take a cross and kind of say there's been a lot of stuff from the left that are considered your fucking lovely label fascist outcomes, such as gun grabbing and censorship. What are your thoughts on that?
Here.
What?
Here.
Wait. First of all, hold on. Wait. First of all, so it's true. Richard Spencer's presidential vote didn't make him a fascist. He's a fascist for other reasons. And second of all, what censorship, gun taking? What are you referring to?
Those are very fascist outcomes. You were saying that
the Nazis actually expanded gun
Let me
rights.
respond if you're asking.
Not for Jews.
Shut your fucking mouth for a fucking
Are
second.
Democrats taking guns away from a minority group?
Respond like I was responding. Let me respond. Shut up for a fucking minute. I said.
You okay?
I said you were saying that like you take a look at people's fascist outcomes, and I'm saying that gun grabbing and censorship were very fascist outcomes.
What
Germany
gun
was
grabbing?
Nazi
Wait,
Germany
let's
was
do this point by
oh my
point.
God,
What gun
shut
grabbing?
the fuck up. Can I finish my statement before you fucking jet in there like a fucking goddamn dude?
All right,
Okay,
finish up, then we'll ask.
Fascist Nazi Germany was very well known for taking guns and censorship and book burning and stuff like that. Like, there's a lot of mind you, I'm not saying this is good things or bad things. I'm not taking a side here. I'm just saying, hey, the left has been known to support things that may come up as like fascist outcomes with like the gun grabbing, gun bans, the Nancy Pelosi bill that was pulled up that we had, and then also all the censorship or all this speech bad coming from the left.
So with regards to the guns, Nazis expanded gun rights. They only took guns away from minorities. Democrats aren't looking to take guns away from any specific group of people, like any minority group. So I don't really think there's necessarily a parallel there. With regards to censorship, what pro-censorship laws or pushes are you saying are fascistic from the Democratic Party?
I'm not saying laws in general. I'm just saying that's their positions. They want
Like
to
what?
expand.
Like
they
which
want
ones?
to expand. There's a lot of talk about expanding hate speech laws.
I don't
We've
think
talked about it on
so.
this
Wait,
podcast
is that
many
something
times.
known fascist government policy expanding hate speech laws? What censorship are we referring to here? So they talk about hate speech laws. This is fascistic. This is very weak.
Not everything we don't like is fascist. On Vaush's side, on Samantha's side, just saying that there's a policy that we think is ill-informed or harms a certain community is not enough to know it's fascist.
This is
fascism, reductionism.
Look, it's really okay. It's really hurting us in this conversation. There's no real fucking decent fucking definition of fascism. Vaush brought up the 14 points, which is like a really decent fucking essay. Umberto Eco's fascism, right? But it talks about the process of getting to fascism, right, and the common characteristics of various fascist regimes. I much prefer to describe fascism very simply, right, rather than going through all these fucking points or whatever, or going to Robert.
Probably better for a
Pattinson's
panel
fucking
too.
Yeah.
Bizarre definition. So fascism, very, very simply, I think it is perfectly reasonable, colloquially, right, to define fascism as ultra nationalism with a desire to purify the bulk of people based on their immutable characteristics, or of behaviors deemed degenerate through religious means. That's it. That'll do. Whatever.
Okay.
But purifying the bulk of people based on their immutable characteristics, I think that's enough to call somebody fascist.
You normally have a cult of personality around a superior, quote unquote, superior individual.
Yes, that's 14.
We get to change the definition.
There
of
are a ton of
fascism.
things that can lead into it too. One of the big problems that it feels like there are so many
According
ideological
to who we're using
roads
it.
that lead to it.
Okay.
Hey, I did have one question.
Okay.
I did have one question. It's small.
One quick question, then I want to move down this list.
One quick question. Yeah, so Vaush, people in the chat were pointing out early because it felt like you were gaslighting us. Someone asked you what percent of the country is fascist, and you said how many people supported Donald Trump, which is where we got the declaration that you were saying that supporting Trump makes you fascistic. So I just want to hold you to account to what you said, and I'm assuming
Okay, yeah,
that
but I
you're
feel
just being
it may be
inflammatory.
true that it may be true that as shorthand I said that, but I feel like 80 times afterwards I made it clear that I was talking about the actions people engage in rather than their like innate tendencies. Now you could make the argument that there is no such thing as an innate tendency, only what we do. That even if a person in their heart doesn't believe anything fascist, they still are one if they do the thing. That's more of a philosophical argument. At the end
Right,
of the
you
day,
said
I'm
the
concerned with
argument that
people's
you're
actions.
making, Vaush, to be
You
fair.
said the
that is
action was
argument that
voting for
you're
Trump.
making. Like,
The
I
argument that
wouldn't
I'm
go-
making is that I
wouldn't-
care about people's actions.
Okay.
People are
Yeah,
going
so-
all the
Okay.
time
Whoa,
of
sorry. Whoa,
calling
we got
Distinction without a
What?
difference.
We're gonna move down the line. All right.
There are a
Sorry.
lot of people in America who do fascist things. I'll certainly say that. Yeah, like how many people voted for Trump.
Okay, so we're gonna let some people in, right? So we're going to Fawn. We're gonna, oh boy, we're gonna go to Fawn. We're gonna go to Katarana. Then we're going to stop by Destiny, and hopefully Destiny and Vaush should be inspired to show us their very pretty faces that everyone would love to see. Any which way,
I'm not wearing clothes.
Even better.
Even
Oh,
better.
even better.
Even better.
Oh,
Well,
God.
streaming's banned.
Pretty fascistic of you, Vaush.
I would love the exclusive on Bosch's nipples. Okay, all right, let's go to Fawn.
It's something we haven't seen. Come on.
Fawn, please.
Hi.
Hi.
I just want to say I like I was like listening in for ages, and then I went to go have a shower, and I come back and it's like full just I don't know where I don't even know where it went, but it suddenly got very, very American. Is that no, not in an insulting way, just I was like, oh, now I feel a little bit out of my depth. Hate speech is I'm trying to figure out what track we're still going on here. Where are we going?
Okay, all right. So we were on hate speech before, and we can go back to hate speech. That's where that's the start of this conversation. But we moved on to whether the Republican Party within America is a fascist. Is fascist sympathetic in any case.
Yeah. Obviously, I can't speak on American politics. I'm from New Zealand, so I'm not nearly as educated as you guys would be on that sort of thing. But I mean, if we're talking about, I feel like I like that we got a definition of fascism as what we're talking about here. That's not exactly how I put it in my mind, but that doesn't matter. But there's always, if you start to restrict any kind of speech by law, then there's always my brain's scared. Sorry. There's always a risk of then the power changing hands and then different things becoming obviously illegal. And if you set a precedent for making certain words, phrases, like things like that, punishable by law, then they can change very, very quickly. Obviously, I don't want hate speech. I don't want people being mean to each other and being hateful towards each other. But I think that there's a lot of importance in social punishment. You know, it's like, yeah, people should be fired if they are like, you know, kill all of these certain groups of people. I think that people have their right to not want to employ people who have those sort of beliefs. And I think that that is a form of social punishment that does not need to be regulated by law.
Okay.
In my opinion.
Thanks so much. All right. Katarana, then we'll go to Destiny.
Yeah, I just don't entirely understand some of the hang up on like whether or not, or like why is it so contentious to go ahead and prescribe the idea that like some people in the Republican Party, even if they don't knowingly subscribe to the tenets of fascism, could still be fascist. You can do a racism without being racist. You could do a fascism without being a fascist. And some people can be a fascist without knowing they are a fascist. It's not that crazy of a point. So if people are going ahead and passing legislation or going ahead and advocating for ideas that are fascist in nature, it doesn't matter what the intent is. At the end of the day, what it ends up being done to society still ends up being the same end goal. Same thing goes for when we talk about like racist legislation. Like it doesn't matter what anybody's intent is ever, because if it ends up causing net harm, who gives a fuck? So like I just don't entirely understand like why like there needs to be like such contention on like, is everybody that voted for Trump fascist? I don't know, but they did a fascism by doing it. Like that's it. If you did a fascism, the end. It's not that crazy to say.
Okay, so we'll move over to Destiny, but two things. First of all, if you're enjoying this content, hit the follow button. Look what I bring you. I bring you content all the goddamn time. Hit the goddamn follow button and make sure notifications are on. So much content happens here, and these situations don't happen in any other channel. Hit the fucking follow button. And then secondly, I'll say thank you, Destiny. Like, you were I'm sure you were just as naked as Vaush, but you said, I'm gonna put on clothes for Prime. I appreciate that. So Destiny, please take it away.
I don't know why. I think that labeling people as fascist and calling them fascist is just a way to signal to your community that you are like on your ideological camp, and then you can shit on other people that are outside of your ideological camp. It's a brainless in-group, out-group thing. Anybody that does it is wasting everybody's time. It doesn't even make sense to condemn somebody for doing something that is fascist, because it implies that every single fascist thing is bad. It's like saying we shouldn't drink water because Hitler drank water. There are plenty of quote-unquote fascist policies that a lot of people across all sides of the political spectrum would agree with. For instance, the rejection of immigrants into your economy to protect native wages is something that people on the far left, like Bernie Sanders, have supported, and it's also something that fascists would consider good as well. The massive protection of your economy, the increasing of tariffs, and putting big trade embargoes or barriers from other countries so you can do like made in America shit, that would be a fascist policy, and people on the left would probably support that policy as well. They're like this obsession with like labeling things as fascist and saying that it's bad and all of it is bad is just so mind-rottingly fucking stupid, and it's like a meta narrative or a meta conversation that people have so that they can avoid having an actual conversation about any particular policy whatsoever.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Wait, what? I'm sorry. Literally, what? Like, I totally get that there are some people that are going ahead and giving this labels things willy-nilly, just like the way some people go ahead and say everything that's like left of like Pelosi is an SJW, and just like everything that like is a little bit like everything's racist, sure, but like on Twitter. But like at the end of the day, like even if it is a label that people are giving stupidly, doesn't mean that at sometimes it's not a label that is accurate. That can go with anything. Like
the problem is that that is actually exactly what happens, is that once a label is used and abused so much, it quickly descends into meaninglessness. And that is what has happened with the term fascism. I would literally bet my left arm that the vast majority of people, probably the majority of people on this very call that use the term fascism as a pejorative, don't actually know what the fuck fascism is. It is literally just a label that we give to people that we think
Person who doesn't know what fascism is,
wait, hold on.
Clearly.
I do think it's particularly funny. Wait, really quick.
Okay,
I do
wait,
think
hold
it's
on.
funny.
I'm so curious. Wait, what is Neo Geo or whatever? What do you think fascism is? Let's hear it.
From tariff, sorry, fascist.
No, I want to hear it. She made fun of me. What do you think fascism is?
No, it's a good question. But in this situation, it has to do. I used to call George W. Bush a fascist, but I was incorrect because I learned, what fascism is.
What is fascism?
He wasn't a fascist because he didn't have a following in the cult. Like, at minimum, it has to be there's a charismatic leader, and their followers do whatever they tell them. It's like a cult.
No. Okay, so this is exactly what I'm talking about. Okay,
but like
this is why we need. This is why
no,
we need to stop
but
using
that's
the word
the very
fascist.
minimum.
Oh my god!
I appreciate the fact.
This is what.
I just hold on. I appreciate the fact. Hold on, wait.
Vaush, go ahead.
I appreciate the fact that Destiny is against unproductive, divisive discourse. So he came in here and spent 2 minutes complaining that nobody but him knew what the definition of fascism was. Hold on.
I'm just saying stop using the term and just talk about
one
the
person at a time. One person at a time. So rather than adding any nuance or clarification to the conversation, he came in here in an effort to virtue signal against the lefties he hates so much. So with regard,
all I'm saying is that nobody knows what fascism
hold on,
means.
we're not done yet.
Stop having a meta conversation about.
We're not done yet.
Okay. Here's what might happen.
Let him finish the point before we get mad.
Hold on. Here's what might happen. I might just take this to the private room and we'll just have a few people.
Don't do that.
Don't do it? Okay, okay, fine. I'm just saying, look, Well, then
Well,
one
I
at a
thought we were
fucking
taking
time.
time.
There, shut up.
Wait,
One at
I
a
wasn't
time.
finished with my
So, Vaush, go
salient
ahead.
point. Yeah. So anyway, the argument that calling things fascist is bad is dumb because tariffs and other things some fascists may agree with are fascist policies is pretty self-evidently ridiculous. Fascists may agree with policies that are meant to make drinking water clean. That wouldn't make those fascist policies. You could argue then, like, what is the line at which point you could call a policy fascist? There is certainly a blurry line there. I mean, at what point does protectionism become ethno-supremacy?
Your line's
I
not
think
blurry at
that
all. You think Bush is fascist. I'm
Hold
sure you
on.
think immigration restrictions are fascist.
Protectionism is purely
No, I don't
fascist.
think.
It absolutely
No,
will
I
be
don't
supported
think.
by fascists. Like,
No, hold on. No, wait, hold on. Something being supported by fascists doesn't make it fascist inherently.
what makes
Like I
it
said,
fascist
clean drinking.
inherently?
Hold on. Clean drinking water is
Stop
probably
using
supported by
example.
everyone.
No, hold on. You're not talking to your
Protectionism
audience.
is something
Say it in
supported
an abstract.
Wait. Hold on. No.
Actually,
Give us
can't
a clear
finish a point
definition.
because
Yeah,
he's so
Vaush.
triggered. He's so angry coming in
No,
here.
I'm not angry. You're veering off. Just tell us what
He's
makes
very
a,
mad.
what
An
makes a
abstract
policy
without
fascist.
reference to example. An abstract.
Yeah, just make what is it?
Let Vaush finish his thought.
No,
and
let him
then
answer.
we'll find
Yeah.
out. Oh,
Well,
we'll find
I'd
out.
like to finish
Destiny,
the
we'll find
original
out.
point, no?
Vaush, go ahead,
Yeah.
please.
We might eventually get there even. What was I talking about? Whether or not
What
a policy
makes
is
a policy
fascist. Oh, yeah.
fascist?
So it's a blurry line, obviously, because
my
there are
God.
policies that are going to be supported by people on any side of the aisle. When you're talking about Republicans, I think that Trump's a rejection of the election results and everything that's happened subsequent of that is a very, very,
Without
very
reference to
obvious
example.
indication.
Without reference, I mean, no one will deny those
Without
examples that you bring
reference,
up.
so wait, hold on. You want me to describe where the line is for a fascist policy without using an example? How do you suggest I do that exactly?
You don't understand how to provide a definition or something? Do you know this is like how the dictionary works, right? Like you can't use the word in the definition. You should be able to give us a clear criteria by which a policy can be evaluated that makes it fascist or not fascist. If you're incredulous, you can't do that without an example. Why would you even try to do it? Just say you don't know how to do it, or you don't have a criteria.
Hold on. The reason why is because literally nobody does this. When you're talking about whether or not a given policy is in alignment with a given like ideological line, you would almost always defer to example because there are numerous ways in which those policies can be interpreted, enacted, and informed upon that would determine whether or not they actually adhere to that line. Whether or not like the way in which you do or advocate for protectionism can be fascistic. It's possible that the same law passed by Trump or by Bernie Sanders could be more or less fascistic depending on the cultural trends it reinforced. Examples are essential here.
Yes. No, that what you're saying is true, but what you need to concede, and you won't because you're unwilling to, because it makes you look bad, is that there's going to be a large overlap between all sorts of different policies and all sorts of ideologies.
I have never. Not only is that not something I'm willing to concede, I said that right off the bat with the water cleaning example.
Okay, fascists and left-leaning people are going to support protectionism for largely the same reason. They want to protect natives.
That's not necessarily the case.
What part of that isn't? No, wait, let him answer. No, wait. Let him answer. What isn't necessarily the case there? Please explain to me the difference.
Lefties have historically supported protectionism, either A, because it's a developing country and they think of it as a way
The
to
U.S.
develop
is not a developing country. Stop.
Wait, hold on. You said lefties. You didn't say American lefties. I'm just being specific and clear with my language. Thank you. Either because they want. I know he has a problem with the nuance, right?
No, we don't. No, it's not about the nuances because you're pivoting. Because you're
No,
trying
with
to
hot
answer
We're
while you're
talking about the United States.
Hold on.
We're talking about the
Being
U.S.
specific,
Let him
being
finish.
specific with a definition is not what pivoting is. That's not what the word means. You're free to look it up.
No,
So
but he used
historically,
America as an
lefties
example,
have
and so he would
supported-
include that.
Vosh,
Historically,
we're talking about George
lefties,
Bush and President Trump. We were talking
historically,
about the U.S.
Historically,
Funny
lefties
feudalism.
have supported protectionism either because it allows the development of a robust internal economy not dependent on like foreign exports, or B, as is the case with Bernie Sanders, because they believe, and I disagree with this, that it would be in support of domestic workers. Fascists typically support protectionism in an ethnic sense. They're not actually interested in the preferentiality of their workers, which is why they aren't pro-worker. Their policies are broadly not pro-worker. They don't support workers holistically. They're protectionist as long as it allows them to maintain national and ethnic lines. And that's one of the reasons why that same policy pushed by Sanders and by Trump might be totally different in whether or not I'd call it fascist.
It in a way it can push national ethnic lines, but the most important part is the idea of achieving autarky, the idea that you have a state that is completely self-sufficient. That's the big reason
Well, that's
why
different from
they support
protecting workers.
It can be or it couldn't be. It depends. But the point is that people support, left-leaning people and fascists support these things in order to protect Native workers. Now,
For
whether you
different
can say
reasons,
that,
right? Well, not to protect Native workers, to protect the state
for
or
different
the
reasons. If you want
ethnicity.
to get like
Fascist.
super deep into
Workers
the
of the
different
world
reasons, sure.
unite,
I'm just saying that.
Dusty.
I'm just saying that largely speaking, to just write off a policy because it might be fascist or supported by fascists, it's just stupid. There are
When did
plenty
I do
of
that?
policies that over. When did you?
You
do
wrote
that?
off a judge for being
serious?
nominated by
Wait,
Trump.
Hold on.
Okay, you just
We need a court stenographer in here.
What policy did I write off errantly just because it was like fascist coded, but otherwise might be reasonable?
Just real quick, you just spent a whole lot of time arguing about how people's intent or why they're doing something doesn't matter to you.
Didn't matter.
That
Yeah.
if it
That was so central
if it-
before.
If it went closer towards fascism, then it was fascist. Now you're arguing the exact opposite. You
So
are
that
intent
and
is
this
sexual
is
though,
these are
on the
not.
same
Wait, hold
policy.
on.
in the
These are
Because the
not
problem
even
is that- yeah, and
remotely
the problem is that
contradictory positions.
people
I'm
don't-
not talking about
people
intent.
don't want to evaluate. People don't want to evaluate the individual policies because policy research is boring and because it takes work and nobody really
What
wants to.
policy
And it's
have I
way more
errantly
exciting
written off?
and it's way more fun. Apparently, you're writing off judges because you're saying
Wait,
they're
what
fascist.
you
Which,
said
by
policy.
the way, writing
What
off a
policy
judge
have
that
I
gets there through a
errantly?
democratic process is a pretty fascist thing to do. By the way,
That's
but you know,
not
there's a
what
lot of
fascism
lefties that
means.
want to do. It kind of is, right?
Wait,
The idea that-
we've got a couple dumb things lined up. First of all, you haven't mentioned a policy that I've errantly written off. Second of all, you've accused me of doing this unwilling to acknowledge the overlap in policy preferences between people on both sides of the political aisle, which
Okay,
I did
so-
right
okay,
off the
sure.
bat in this conversation.
You know what?
Third of
I'm
all,
ready. Hold
with
on. Okay,
regards
I'm ready.
with
I'm ready.
regards
The
to the
lists are cute.
judges, with
Okay,
regards
so
to
we're
the
doing
judges,
the
it
actual
is-
gish gallop in real time. If you
This
just
is
take
not.
so
Wait,
much
you
shit that
just
you
you
can't.
made 3 points. I'm responding to 3 points
I
very
didn't make it.
quickly.
We're
We're
having a
not
back and
going into
forth on
super
one
depth.
thing.
And
Okay.
with regard, well, then why'd you bring up the judges? You mentioned policies. Now I'm responding to the judges' point. With regards to the judges' point, I said that there were fascists amongst the Republican judiciary, and I said I'd be happy to go and reread the stuff that I had seen beforehand to come back with more convincing arguments. But with regards to like saying there are fascists in the Republican judiciary, even if there was a democratic process by which they were elected, that's not a fascist accusation. It's not fascist to say that a fascist party has fascists amongst it. That's
Okay,
just not
I
what
just want
fascism is.
to hold on. I'll take. I might take the L here. So I'm just curious. So for the people in the room, how many people in here felt like Vaush was saying that if anything was like fascist or fascist adjacent, it ought to be written off as fascist? Did anybody else get that feeling in here?
But what policy? What did I do that
exactly
on?
what he said.
Okay,
You
that's-
called
okay,
Bush.
that's what I thought. That was the feeling that I got.
Vaush
Okay.
is make-
That's
Vaush
what we're
was
trying to
making-
understand.
Wait, okay, so Vaush was making the argument, basically, which is the argument that I think...
Deferring to
what's
the
his
opinions
fucking
of
name?
conservatives to construct an argument against me.
Okay, he's making the argument that like I think it's Mark Bray, whoever wrote the anti-fascist handbook, right? That like anti-fascists oppose those whose actions in the world help to build fascism, right? Now, me personally, as an anti-fascist, I get really fucking frustrated when people just call everything fucking fascism, when people say things like, oh, Republican voters are fascists because they're supporting fascism or whatever, right? I think it's really important to define to if you want to identify somebody as a fascist, to say, hey, this is an anti-democratic ultra-nationalist who has an interest in protecting like people of a certain ethnic or national identity, possibly a religious identity in the case of something like ISIS, right? I think it's really important to make sure that they have those beliefs before you say this person is a fascist.
But
I
Viv,
think
you should
can
take issue
also-
with him calling.
think-
You should take issue with him calling Scalia and Bush fascists, shouldn't you?
I can substantiate those positions. I need to reread the Scalia stuff, but Bush, I think it's fairly.
Please let me finish.
How is Bush a fascist?
I do take exception. I do take exception to that. But I think that we can also recognize that there is a difference between identifying someone as holding personally in their own minds, right, or having expressed in their own words fascist beliefs, right, and people who are taking actions towards building fascism in the world. One is a much more nuanced conversation, much more complicated to be able to prove, right? And that's why I wouldn't be comfortable calling those specific people fascists. And
Can I
that's
hear?
why
I'm
would
really
be
curious. Wait,
opposed-
how is Bush?
I would
How
be
is Bush a
opposed to Vox
fascist?
calling
I
I'm still
really
waiting
want
to
to
hear a
that.
policy that I've written off because it was fascist
Bush-
coded that I
the
didn't
Bush
think
doctrine.
I want to
of.
hear how Bush. Wait, Pisco, did he?
Well,
How is Bush a
I want to hear an
fascist?
answer to the first accusation you
I don't know.
against me. Are you
Wait,
giving up
I
on that
guess
Bush
one?
was like
Too hard to
Bush was like a
substantiate?
free trade neocon. There was like
Too
imperialism.
hard to
He had
substantiate?
extrajudicial kidnappings.
Bush literally had
So did
Guantanamo Bay
Obama.
and like extrajudicial kidnappings.
Everybody, the
and
extrajudicial kidnappings does not
that
make
was
you a fucking
bad.
fascist. Yeah,
Is
that's
it
Remember the drone
Obama
strikes under
fascist? Waiting to hear
Obama?
on that policy. You made a
I
very
said
specific
that I
accusation.
don't think he's a fascist.
Thank
I
you.
said that.
That's what I'm
just to
asking.
say-
Why is Bush a fascist?
No, I just explained earlier. Sorry, I gotta put my volume down. My roommate complained. I said earlier, I used to think Bush was a fascist when I was younger because he was setting up very dangerous authoritarian things like kidnapping people abroad and sending them to Guantanamo Bay with no judicial remedy. That's where that stuff came from. That doesn't mean he's a fascist because of where I've learned about fascism.
that
It
is
requires like a
Bush did that?
charismatic
Obama did it
leader
too.
to have like a cult like following. Like people voted for Bush, but they didn't like think like he like had pretty consistent policies, right? Trump has been all over the place, and like his followers will just believe whatever he says, and that's the dynamic that's really dangerous. Like people voted for
We're not
Bush
talking about
because
we're
they,
talking
like,
about Bush.
agree with
Why is
him
Bush a
on
fascist?
stuff.
We have
We're
two
talking about
political
Bush.
parties.
If you're wondering where that came from, oh yeah, it came from the kidnapping people in
I just want to say that anybody that would consider
you-
a fucking neocon a fascist is like, Jesus Christ. Like, what the fuck do these words even mean to you guys? Holy fuck.
Oh, we're happy to talk
don't know
about
what
it. I
you're
know.
saying
Did you
about
just
you
come in
guys.
here
If
to complain
everybody's
about my
special,
presence on the
nobody
panel?
is.
Are you that desperate for my attention?
No.
It's
Are
literally.
we debating
You.
semantics
You're not
now?
the person I'm referring to.
Is that everything that we're doing? Is just debating semantics, though?
It's
No, Prime, I haven't talked.
Okay, go ahead.
We're not just.
I just want to
debating
know what
semantics.
policy I've written off because it
No,
was
wait,
like fascist coded.
We're not debating just semantics. I think Vaush is a incredibly intelligent individual, and I hold him in high regard. So when someone asks him, "Hey, who are the fascists in our country?" and he says, "Hey, who voted for Trump?" I think that's incredibly reductionist, and I think that holding Vaush to task for the words that he said isn't just arguing over semantics. It's arguing over the ideas that are like pervasive all across the left, and it's disgusting. And it's the rhetoric that people on the right use to say, "Hey, everybody on the left is a communist," right? It's literally analogous.
Okay.
And it's lazy and it's disgusting.
okay.
And when I'm in, but when I'm involved in a conversation, I'm gonna hold somebody to the words that they say, with the hope that Vaush will say, "You know what? That was actually an idiotic thing to say. Let's move forward."
Which statement specifically? Are we just talking about the definition of fascism
I
here?
mean, Vaush. No, but Vaush later on stated, right. So on specifically that point, right? When he made that, after that, he's saying, well, less that they are all fascists, individually fascists, more that they are simply supporting a fascist, right? There is.
But that's not what he said initially. They're
Then
different.
also said that makes
we
them
acknowledge
fascist.
that. Hold on, I literally just said that.
Okay.
I just said that. He stated what GSU Gambit stated, but then he clarified later on that they are supporting a fascist, right? Not necessarily they are fascists, but they are supporting a fascist.
That doesn't disarm the previous statement.
Oh, hold on, wait, really quickly.
Kind
I
of a
feel
distinction without a difference.
Hold on. First of all, while I don't think I've walked back anything like horrendous here, I do think that in the context of a 15-person debate panel, if I say, for example, how many fascists are there in America? How many people voted for Donald Trump? And then over the next 20 minutes, I explain why I actually think that action is more important than intent. I don't feel like that's walking back. I feel like that's just the way in which you add nuance to the kinds of statements that you have to make to interject in this environment. Now, in terms of whether or not, are we talking about whether Bush is a fascist? In terms of whether or not we're talking... Sure, but
that's
wait,
why
hold on.
my
Wait. First of all,
response was at least 23%.
First of all, we have all here to an extent made statements that we have later walked back on or further enumerated upon. For example, Destiny has already made several statements that he refuses to even acknowledge when I ask him to follow up on because he knows he can't substantiate, such as suggesting that I have disavowed policies because they're fascist leaning without actually looking into the nuances of those policies. He isn't even talking about that now. So if we're talking about what the definition of fascism
that
is,
everything is bad just because it might have some overlap with fascism. That would lead
I
me
never
to
said
logically
that.
believe
I
that,
never
oh,
at
okay.
any point
but
said
But
that.
the thing was, when I tried to ask you for what is your definition of fascism, you did something that somebody does who doesn't understand a topic. You just tried to give me some examples.
When did you
Because
ask me for that?
those are-
Wait, hold on.
When did
You
I
didn't
ask
ask
you
me
to
for a
define-
definition of fascism. You
Does
asked me
anybody,
for a
can
definition
anybody
of
here
what would
raise
make...
their hand if they remember me
Hold
asking
on.
Vaush how to define fascism? Does
So wait,
anybody
really
remember me
quick.
asking that question?
So this is actually
Okay,
a
thank
question
you,
with a
just checking.
factual answer. You didn't ask me to define fascism. You asked me to determine how you would find a policy fascist, which is actually way more complicated.
Wait, so you have,
you didn't
you
ask
have
me
a
to define
consistent
fascism.
definition of fascism, but you can't tell me what makes a policy fascist?
I think that when you're looking at, and for reasons I already explained, if you recall, when you're talking about whether or not a policy is fascist, there are many nuances which can affect the extent to which I believe it would contribute to fascism. So I think deferring to example is preferable. That's why I talked about how protectionism can be progressive or fascist leaning, even if the text of the law is the same, depending on the context in which the law is passed.
That your very own definition there doesn't really work, though, because you say just by contributing to fascism, it might make a particular policy fascist. But a left-leaning person can implement a policy that absolutely contributes to fascism, but they don't have the intentions to, and it doesn't really take the entire country in that direction.
Of course, but it's also possible that the context of that implementation could make it so that a policy which would otherwise contribute to fascism does not. There's a very big difference, for example.
You see how the meta-narrative around this is so cancerous and toxic and a waste of time? Like, instead of ever actually talking about the policies themselves, if they're good or bad,
you can't blame me for the toxic meta-narrative when you came in here and exacerbated it. You came in here and stirred the toxic meta-narrative, and now you're complaining about it.
I came in here and I dived into the toxic
Answer all your questions, and when you don't have any more rebuttals, you come up with, isn't this conversation toxic? I don't know. Why are you having it?
No, that's not a rebuttal. That's my entire point, is that coming in here just labeling stuff as fascist and bad is not a productive use of time.
I didn't label things as fascist and bad. We were
Did you
having a
label George
conversation.
Bush?
Hold on.
Okay, it's happening. It's happening. It's happening. We're moving. We're moving.
You wait. Hold on. No. I like the
Kiwi Nation on YouTube and Twitch.
You want the big group?
I like the group. I'm lonely. I like the group. Look, wait, hold on. I can amend this. Okay.
We can fix this.
So saying labeling things fascist and labeling things fascist, comma, and bad are two different things, and it's also very different from saying that I'll write off anything because it could potentially have any fascist leanings.
Hold on. Just on that
Did I
statement,
say
you would label
George
something
Bush?
fascist and good?
I think that there are things that a fascist would do that could be good, like protectionism under some
But they
circumstances.
wouldn't be fascist.
So then you agree then
by merit.
Okay,
this is so stupid.
I don't think
I don't
So Vaush thinks
this
there
is
are
a
some
confusion that
fascist things
existed
that are
prior
good.
to
Okay,
us
that's
coming
For
in
the
here.
love of God, it's
Hold on,
really
hold
easy
on.
to explain why you're having this problem, okay?
No, I feel like this is an exceptionally thing to understand.
Really quick, you guys do realize
let me.
I didn't actually finish.
Stop, Biv, go.
Thank you so much. Okay, so fascism has multiple attributes. Okay, I named a few. I think there are others outside that are like debatable or whatever, but like there are some very essential characteristics of fascism, right? We were talking about anti-democracy, ultra-nationalism, a desire to purify that national ethnic or religious group from impure things, generally on the basis of like either degenerate behaviors or fucking immutable characteristics, right? And you can have an individual policy that is like targeted at one of these things, right? Increasing authoritarianism or targeting minority groups in order to repress them or whatever, right? But those on their own don't constitute necessarily fascism. You could have an authoritarian communist government, for example, right? Which some people might call red fashion, can stray into it, but it's irrelevant.
Viv, how do you reconcile that with what Vaush said earlier, that intent doesn't matter? Before
please,
intent
for
was...
the love of fucking God, Pisco, stop fucking lumping me in with Vaush when I'm quite clearly saying that I think he's being irresponsible in his rhetoric, and I disagree with his idea that like George Bush is a fascist. Okay, please fucking stop like needling at me about that. When you're trying to identify an individual policy as fascist, it's very difficult to do without looking at the reasons why it's being implemented and who it's being implemented by, right? Because who it's being implemented by might be expressing all those other things all together at once, right? And are clearly trying to build fascism through the implementation of this policy, whereas like other people might be implementing this policy for different reasons, because policies tend to only kind of target one or two of those attributes. They can't target like just full-on fascism unless the policy is like, we're going to have a fascist government now.
Okay, yeah, but there's a big problem with that whole conversation. There's a whole big problem with that. Once you get to the point where you're like literally like where you start trying to label a whole bunch of things as fascism just because they have the potential to possibly be fascist adjacent, then at this point now the phrase becomes so incredibly vacuous that now it doesn't mean anything. No,
True.
It's not whether or not you're clear. It's the fact that that's been demonstrated in this conversation. And once you have people literally making like not being even able to define the word fascist, and you're still using it in a conversation with these same people that have literally they played fast and loose with the definition of fascism and like 10 back and forth.
Who doesn't know the definition here?
Wait. with 10 back and forths. And Vaush, listen, in all fairness, you still didn't give one, by the way, because you definitely were asked.
I was asked and I provided one about 20 minutes ago. Do you remember?
Wait,
I like Umberto Eco's better, but those are too long for a panel.
He said he liked Umberto Eco's 14
let him
points.
go.
Stop. Hey, what's the definition?
Do we really want me to read out Umberto Eco's 14 points?
No.
Wait. How about a better question with it? Why is Bush or Scalia a fascist?
Sorry, what did you say?
Okay.
Vivian gave a good definition of fascism. She gave good, like...
Okay, well, Destiny.
Yeah, I just want to know, how are Bush or Scalia a fascist?
So with Scalia, I would need to go back over the case rulings that he's given because I don't have a great memory for the judicial stuff. I said that earlier. I'd be happy to come back with a lot more arguments because this is stuff that I half remember from podcasts that I've listened to and articles that I've read and conversations that I've had. With Bush, I think the argument is a lot more direct, and it's obviously something I remember a little bit more directly. I think that Bush, the obvious ones, the straightforward ones are obviously the 2020 election and the extent to which it was not fairly earned, in my opinion. The broader ones, though, are the
2000.
2004.
Did I see 2004? I meant 2000.
Bush went to court. He submitted himself to the authority of the court.
No, don't make him answer questions. Don't spoil.
Hold on.
I really want to hear what he thinks that election was really fascist. I want to hear
Destiny,
that.
how arrogant do you have to be to believe I'm not familiar with the way in which the 2000 thing went down? Okay, I'm
That's
perfectly
why I really
aware
want
that
to
it
hear
went
your
to court.
description of it.
Okay, I wasn't going to describe it. I wasn't going to describe it any further. It was a buddy relationship. God, what's the term?
You talk about the governor, Jeb Bush.
No, when you're a
Parasocial?
nepotistic relationship between George Bush and a person already in power in order to undemocratically secure an election to which he otherwise probably didn't have a right. I think that's definitely in line, at least with the anti-democratic element of fascism, though it's nowhere near as overt as what Trump did, of course. So you have that. You have the deference to.
Let's stop there. I mean, he submitted himself. He submitted himself to the court
stop
system.
at one point. He wants to go like 15 points in.
We have to stop there.
Hold on. Wait, do you want to? Wait, do you want me to give the reason or not? Do you want to argue that or what? Do you want to argue?
Let's not go on.
Wait, hold on.
In order to explain one point, you bring up like 7 things tangentially that are all wrong and disagreeable, and then like nobody wants to go back to the original point.
What have I said so far that's wrong? Explain what I've said so far.
I'll explain.
No, hold on. Wait, hold on. Because wait, please, one person at a time. Destiny is so horny to disagree with me for his audience that he's jumping in, accusing me of saying things incorrect. What if I said that's incorrect? Destiny,
I'll tell you.
If I said, hey, buddy, I've been in here for an hour and a half. You jumped in here because of me. What did I say that was incorrect about the 2020?
Argument on fascism.
What did I say that was
Way more
incorrect?
than you have. Okay. Secondly,
What did I say that was
You
incorrect?
said so many things that are incorrect. The fact that
With-
you think that the majority of
now,
voters,
with
that people that
Bush.
voted for Trump are fascists. I don't
Right
remember
now
all the
with
incorrect
Bush.
things. I don't
Right
remember.
now with Bush.
I
What did I
don't
say?
remember. I don't remember
The
all
past
the incorrect
30
things.
seconds, you don't remember what I said? You just said that I've said incorrect things. What did I say? That was
Remember
incorrect?
when Vaush was
Said that
crying
I
because
said
people
that
wouldn't
I
let him
said that
finish
you
his
said.
22 paragraph answers? I don't remember all the wrong things you've said because every time you explain or respond to somebody, you have to say 15 more things. So
I
we
said
never actually
one
get to go
thing.
back. No,
I said one thing about Bush, and you
wait,
said
wait.
he's saying
That's-
incorrect things. What did I say
Hold
that
on,
was
wait, Vaush,
incorrect?
You did say something that was incorrect.
Hold on, wait. Vaush.
I was
Hold on,
gonna-
wait. This is simple. Destiny, don't do the meta conversation thing, right? You
This
would
is
be
all a
you would be
meta
frustrated.
conversation.
No, listen. He's asking you directly, what did I just say about Bush in the
He doesn't
election that
have
you
anything.
disagree
He's
with?
just mad.
Can you respond to that? Because you
I
don't
was
like
curious.
meta
I was
conversations.
curious. I was curious why he thought the outcome of that election was fascist, or why that was fascist leaning.
Anti-democratic. I think that having an elected representative who's your brother, who facilitates the implementation of a ballot system that was very clearly out of line with previous expectations and led to very specific and targeted results which favored your brother, and then going by the results of that election and then getting your party on board with all of the presuppositions and justifications of that ballot implementation is fairly anti-democratic. But before I had even finished that point, you were screaming, he's already wrong. He's already
Wait. No, we can't stop. We can't stop there. That's what I was going to address. That's where the point. That's where the problem comes in. I don't think that that's fascist even a little bit. What I think is, you can
Is
say
it anti-democratic?
You can say it's anti-democratic, right?
Submit yourself to the
Wait. Wait, there's a bunch of things. There are a bunch of other election systems that would not be fascist, right? Like things that Stalin did weren't
Yeah, I'm
necessarily
trying to build a
fascist. So
case.
I know you're trying to build a case, but if you build a case and the first premise of your case is flawed, then that means now
That's
you're building.
not. Wait, hold on.
But you
So,
are building
wait,
a gish
wait,
gallop.
hold on.
Because
Wait,
at this
that's
point,
not.
that's not
That's not
fascist.
how that.
Just saying anti-democratic is not enough to say fascist.
Wait,
even a little
that's
bit.
why I wasn't done. Wait, hold on. Why do you think Bush is fascist? Okay, let me give out some arguments to explain some tenets of fascism that he adhered to. First, anti-democracy. Well,
Let's
hold
stop
on.
there.
That didn't singly prove the fascism. Well, I know there are more points. To
No,
be
but this
made
wasn't
after
an
that.
active Stop. So one is Bush
Oh,
submitted
my God.
himself. Bush submitted himself to the authority of the court. He
I'm
went
aware
through.
of that.
Okay,
I don't think
so
that makes it not anti-democratic. The way in which
It's
that
the
behaved was very
definition of
nepotistic.
democracy.
Wait, hold
But
on.
judges
hold
are
on.
appointed by elected
hold on.
officials. Sorry.
So an action can't be anti-democratic if a court ends up signing off on it. Is that correct?
Not
if a
if
court signs
everything
off on it.
if everything follows
Judges
the
are appointed
democratic
by elected
process,
officials.
correct? Yes.
No, that is
On-
not what. No,
on
that
the
is
substantive
absolutely
issue-
not the case. So hold
on the
on. Wait,
substantive
would
issue, it wasn't
Bush's-
even a
Would
5-4.
Bush's? Oh, sorry, not Bush. Would Trump's big lie then not have been anti-democratic if the courts had end up agreeing with him and all of his ridiculous court cases gone through? No, it still would have been anti-democratic.
Not
Even
if
if
they
they
just
passed
no.
a democratic system.
No, hold on. I'm so glad that you're saying this because to a lot of left-leaning people, anti-democratic means it doesn't agree with me. This is why they want to eliminate the filibuster. This is why they want to pack the courts. This is why they want to delete the Senate because everything that doesn't agree.
Wait, answer the question. Would Trump's big lie have been anti-democratic if the courts had agreed with it?
Let Destiny finish.
If the data supported it.
If he followed the democratic process and that process turned out a decision, you can't say that it's anti-democratic. You might not like the decision, but it's not anti-democratic.
So hold on. Let me just ask. If Trump's big lie had been affirmed by the courts, would you have considered it anti-democratic?
If when you say his big lie that the election was stolen or whatever, no, wait, let me fucking do
the
this.
broader effort to suppress the mail-in votes, the whole the campaign that was raised across the country in an effort to secure the election illegitimately.
If he won his supreme, if the courts turned out the decision, then that's the decision that goes. That's not an anti-democratic thing. No.
Okay, I fundamentally disagree.
Okay,
I think
that's
it is
fine.
entirely. Hold on. Wait, hold on.
It's fine if you
Really quickly. I know that Destiny is lying here because he had the opposite take on Morales.
Why are you having a meta conversation about
hold
this?
on.
No,
because
that was different because he Morales deleted the part of the court that didn't agree with him. That's that would be an example of an anti-democratic
thing. Did he do it through a legal process? Wait, hold on. Fanatic, hold on. We need to do one thing at a time. So I remember Destiny criticizing Evo Morales because he got behind an amendment to the Constitution that was made by the Supreme Court. A legal process entirely done through the legal endowments of the Bolivian Supreme Court, which nonetheless he was comfortable calling anti-democratic, one which I am comfortable calling anti-democratic, because it is entirely possible for a democratic system to allow anti-democratic acts to take place. To suggest otherwise is absolutely ridiculous.
While that is true, we would have to see what steps were being taken by the people and if they were necessarily anti-democratic. So, for instance, if somebody, we'll say,
like
for instance,
the butterfly ballots with
loses an election or is unable to get something passed, and then they fundamentally alter the structure or the institution in order to get something passed, now we can make arguments like, this feels like
what
a little
if
bit
the
democratic.
judges
So
were
let's say,
all
for instance,
appointed by Trump and they were biased in his favor?
It doesn't matter. Trump won the election. That's part of what the president of the United States is allowed to do. Is appoint judges.
So wait, the Supreme Court legally changed the Constitution to expand term limits for Evo Morales. What is the issue here?
No, I can't.
Legality is not sufficient, but it's some evidence that you're comporting with democracy.
I see. So this is a completely arbitrary standard that gets invoked or not invoked depending how mad we are.
You don't have separate extrinsic evidence. The election, by all accounts, was extremely close. And there's some
dispute. Is this anti-democratic? Would it own the lefties to say it's anti-democratic?
No.
Let me think for a minute.
Do you have what's your quantum of evidence to suggest that Gore won Florida? There are some studies after the fact that indicate he won by some hundred of votes, but the process matters, right? And whether or not Florida State administrators followed that process also matters.
The process absolutely matters. However, so here's an example, by the way. This is an example that I love to bring up, okay? It is the North Carolina voter ID law. So there was an attempt made in North Carolina to ban the admission of certain types of voter identification, which
which just so happened to completely coincide with the types of identification Black people are more likely to use. They also targeted certain windows, availabilities of voting. There was a lot to it. It happened a while ago, but basically, it was pretty clearly, and it was ruled as such, an attack on the ability for Black people to vote. So it's entirely possible, alt universe, that that law could have gone unchallenged by the courts. It could have gone straight through. A legal law passed with the full backing and
You're arguing
credibility of
against
our
no
legal
one.
system. Hold on.
You're arguing
wait,
against
hold on.
no one.
Hold on. It could have passed legally, and it still
Yes.
would have been anti-democratic.
Okay,
Because even if
let me
the
just
law
let me-
passed,
I'm trying to get in a point.
Can we disambiguate these two things? Can we disambiguate these two things, right?
even
The
if the law
process,
passes through democratic processes, it still can be
process,
anti-democratic.
The process and the effect, okay? The process can be democratic. The effect cannot be. It can demolish democracy. Like we can just do that, right?
It doesn't just stop there. It doesn't
democratically-
just stop there. Look, Destiny's been trying to make this point this entire time, and I think this is something that you keep ignoring, Vaush. It's not just whether or not it went through the courts. That's not enough. It's the fact that you would have to prove that it went through the courts and the courts did something untoward, and at that point, then you'd be able to say it's anti-democratic. Once someone submits themselves to the court, assuming all things are on the up and up, and there's nothing subversive happening by the courts themselves, then at that point you have to say you can no longer say it's anti-democratic. And
wait,
that's
hold on. Wait, for examples that I've already provided, I fundamentally disagree. It's entirely possible to push for anti-democratic things democratically. We had Jim Crow in this country, for God's sake. Wait, please let me finish. I saw you open your mouth. We had, for decades, an explicit system of second-class citizenship for Black people, which was entirely supported through the legal framework of our country. That was anti-democratic. Yes, it was.
Legality is not enough. Wait, Vaush. Legality is not enough for democracy.
Wait, please, God. I know we're so horny to jump on these points, but yes, it is possible for something.
It's a straw man.
Because
Shut up.
this is wait, hold on. Nobody's straw manning, and it's not a gish gallop. I've been trying to make the same point this entire time. And a straw man would be a mischaracterization of other people's points.
It is a
I'm only trying to
mischaracterization.
describe my own. I'm only describing my own. And my point is that even if something is passed democratically, it can be anti-democratic. This is self-evidently true. If you look at the history of the legal system in this country, Jim Crow was passed democratically.
No one denies this. You keep saying it. No one denies it. It's an important
We
straw man.
agree
But
something would be democratically passed.
Nobody said that legality was sufficient to know that something is democratic. But following procedure.
Well, then why did Destiny make that point?
No, I made that point that submitting yourself to the court, following procedures, not in this particular case, there's not a great deal of evidence.
Wait, they did that with Jim Crow. There were plenty of court cases.
You need to show us
when you're
quantum.
Saying your question implied that the judges would have come up with a different decision, which implies that there would have been some different evidence that would have been evaluated when they were going over all of the election stuff.
I'm simply saying that you can have a law passed through a democratic process with judges signing off at it, even in good faith, and it can still be an anti-democratic law. This is obviously the case.
You need a separate
one on Bush, by the way.
You
We're so horny to disagree with every premise here.
To show you need to prove that other quantum of evidence that's anti-democratic. You need to suggest to me and tell me why was it anti-democratic. Everything else that you're talking about with this election. I mean, it was
what anti-democratic?
So this election was decided by some hundreds of votes, right? And it was decided, as we know, famously by.
I would need to reread because I haven't actually had to read this for a while. But if I remember correctly, the butterfly ballots were essentially an inexplicable alteration to the previous balloting system that were all but explicitly designed to confuse older people in certain areas of the state to vote for a candidate that they otherwise wouldn't have voted for, to take votes away from Al Gore. So I think that is very obviously being done with the intent to manipulate the legitimate outcome of the election. It was done nepotistically from a relative of the person who was president to be. Now, I consider that fundamentally anti-democratic, a smear on the ideals of this country. That it ended up passing, that may mean it was legitimately anti-democratic. It may have followed the law, but I still think it's anti-democratic, thus anti-democracy.
Where's your proof of this?
thus
If this
anti- I can
I do have
only
a question real
substantiate
quick. I
this
do have
point
a-
to such a level of depth. What else do you want? It's obviously an attempt to manipulate the legitimate outcome of the election by confusing voters.
It's
What
not
else do you
obviously
want?
that unless you have
contention
evidence
here-
of it.
My contention here is that the butterfly ballots, your argument, as I understand it, is that they were intentionally made in order to rig the election for George W.
For
Bush.
George
That's
Bush.
a pretty George Bush. Sorry,
That's a big
that's
claim.
a pretty extraordinary
Let
claim.
me bring up my
And
21-year-old
you're just
documentation.
throwing it out there. No
I'm not
evidence.
throwing it out.
no
Hold
real-
on. Wait. The idea that I'm the only person who is made
doesn't matter how
this
many
claim is
people believe
ridiculous.
that. That's
This
very
is-
A lot of people believe election fraud in
hold
2020.
on. Wait, I'm sorry. Wait, we are regressing so quickly into low IQ arguments, but I'm glad we're all kept in good company here and everyone who agrees to disagree with me. So if you are in charge of
And the
deciding
7
which
Supreme
ballots,
Court justices that also disagree with you, by the way. But
hold
okay.
on. If you are in charge, by
Just
the way,
one was fascist. That's still 6
self-evidently
non-fascist
irrelevant.
Supreme Court justices. But yeah.
Will this retort own the left? Let me interject. So, with regards to the butterfly ballots, just like with the North Carolina voter ID laws, we are taking a look at an unjustified but significant change to an existing system, which had a very deliberate outcome and seemed to be done by people with a very deliberate motive.
You
Now,
know that.
If anyone who is a lawyer or I guess has graduated high school can tell you, trying to infer intent from people's behaviors is part of understanding
Vaush,
what they want
the same exact argument back to you in the
you're
context of
about to say
2020.
that I said intent doesn't matter, but now
No, I'm
you
not
are
about to say
accused
that.
of
I'm not about to say
conspiracy.
that. So in 2020, right, a lot of laws were changed in response to COVID in a deliberate attempt, Republicans might say, to change the content of who's going to vote. That's their argument for showing that these laws were anti-democratic or somehow perverse.
A few were
It's the
changed.
same argument.
Pisco, correct me if I'm wrong, a few were actually changed without approval as well, right? By different states.
Correct. Some were done.
That's why some ballots in Pennsylvania, I believe, got thrown out.
Alterations to the voting system are anti-democratic.
That's what you're saying. It's.
No,
I think
that-
your
my
analysis is
God.
backwards
an
from
excuse for
conclusion.
the same.
Working
You're
backwards
agreeing
from
with
a
these
conclusion.
things? This is the line that you're in with now. You might as well be agreeing with Rob or something in the next panel. Listen, I said
all the unnecessary
only-
ad hominems because you don't
not
understand
only
that you're
was
so
the-
upset that if a democratic process
Look
disagrees with
back
you, that
off
you can't
like
just call it
60 points
undemocratic.
since you crawled in here to get my attention. You've got my attention. Congratulations. I wouldn't harp on it. Now, with regards to the Florida situation and the butterfly ballots, I have not just said a thing happened that benefited Republicans. It was a thing happened with an unjustified excuse for being implemented. You know why they put forward those the mail-in ballot laws. It was because of COVID. There was a clear
No, not
and
just that.
obvious-
No. In 2019, in Pennsylvania,
Stop. Pisco, let him finish.
I'm responding to
Finish
like
up.
Let him gish
people.
gallop, Pisco. Shut the fuck up. Let him keep saying wrong
Gish
shit.
galloping is when you respond to one point in nuance, everybody. Get your definitions from somewhere else. Anyway, with regards to the mail-in ballots, there was a clear and obvious reason why they were implemented. Because of COVID. It was a common sense policy that anyone could justify. That ended up benefiting the Democrats by like majority was mostly because Republican propaganda kept Republicans from taking the COVID threat seriously. So with regards to the butterfly ballots, there was no existing justification for the alteration to the ballots. It was a highly unusual change to the ballots that had a very specific outcome done by people with a very specific intent. Now, low IQ individuals amongst us, such as Destiny, annoyed as he is by his anger, might say all of these things are the same. Voter ID laws implemented during a global pandemic that happens once in a century are exactly the same as the brother of a presidential candidate making an unjustified alteration with a specific outcome to voting in a very marginal state. But I say no. These are actually not the same thing. There are critical differences. One of them is undemocratic, anti-democratic actually, and one of them isn't.
So the 2019 Pennsylvania law predates COVID, and that was a law that extended absolute mail-in
We
voting to
didn't
everyone
even
in
get to the rest
Pennsylvania.
of the Bush points. We're
No, but what I'm
So
targeting.
wait. That's fair. Hold on. That's fair because one of these 14 points that I found was like fascist regimes tend to make use of like patriotic mottos, whatever. So under that, like and paraphernalia and flags. Like, so under that, I could name like fucking
get stuck
anything
there.
fascist.
Let's-
So like, how many points, how many tenants does this have to cover
Everything is
before it becomes
fascist, that's
fascist?
Flags? What are we? Come on.
This is your 14 points that you brought up.
Oh boy.
So like, how many does it need to cover before it's fascist?
So I just we can't wait. If we're gonna have this discussion, like you're scanning the points. One component of fascism is ultranationalism.
But that's all. You're only talking about one point of
enough,
this.
sir,
To say the entire, to say that Bush is
Are we
fascist.
moving off Bush then? Are we doing definitions 101?
Yeah,
What are we moving to?
Yeah,
Where's
let's
the next
let's
line?
not focus on definitions.
Please,
I'm still on Bush. I'm just trying to figure out like what some other
I was
points.
gonna leave at midnight. I didn't expect to be here for 2 hours, but I guess I'm here for it now. What do we want to move to next? What's the next line?
I don't know, you still haven't addressed the bullet thing. Like you make a claim, but this is very conspiratorial thinking in nature. You come to this, you have a conclusion, and then you work backwards from it. There's no really justifiable way that you have presented
claim there was funny business in
ballots were
Florida?
purposely and intentionally made.
This is the problem,
Bosh.
Bosh.
Intentionally
Bosh.
made in order to
There's
influence
no
the election.
problem here. There's no problem here.
There is a problem.
Wick has been making points basically like this since the beginning of the panel, not actually adding anything, but just like underlying doubt by making really dumb accusations.
Oh my God,
There is a problem. There is a problem.
Hold on, wait. This is the last thing that I have to say on this. The idea that saying there was funny business in Florida in 2000 with regards to the butterfly ballots is conspiratorial and unjustified is a hysterical claim that I'm not going to justify further. I feel like I've explained
that
it
would be
to the
if
extent
that was
I
your
can.
claim, that would be a tremendous walk back. You didn't say there was some funny business. You started going on about the brother
What did
was
I
the
say?
governor, and they
What did I
clearly,
say?
they clearly
Oh, yeah.
changed things,
A
so they're
very
trying to get the
uncommon
election to go away.
criticism.
That is way different than funny business. You implied a conspiracy, much the same that Trump and the other Republicans do about the 2020 election. You're
That's
literally
crazy.
making
So
exact
wait,
same
hold
claims on the
so
other side.
adopting the common position that the governor of Florida aided his brother in the presidency by doing an unjustified like a ballot change that ended up specifically helping him is exactly the same as Donald Trump lying about the election. Did you not say? I'm sorry. This is, by the way, from the guy who was out there.
What you've
arguing
just
with
said so
people
far, by the
over
way, is
North
ridiculous.
Carolina vote
What
law.
you've just
You
said, by the way,
argued-
is ridiculous.
Destiny,
It wasn't
you
just one person.
argued.
It was an
No,
entire
no,
state
no, sorry,
legislature.
Bosh,
It was a
Bosh,
Florida
let
Supreme
him
Court
go.
and the actual Supreme Court.
Hold on, Bosh, let him go.
You argued that the North Carolina voter ID law is racist
Why do you
against
keep
people.
bringing up
Hold
other
on,
shit?
because it's comparable against people making the same arguments you're making now. Do you know what the people you argued with said? They said this is conspiratorial. You can't actually say there was this intent here. Sure, there may have been motive, and the outcome was very deliberate, and there was evidence that they would have had a specific reason to have done it in the way
That's
that they
not
did.
clear for the
But
Bush
you're-
case.
No,
That's
the North
clear for the
Carolina. No,
It's
okay,
clear for
the
North
North
Carolina.
Carolina.
No,
It is.
you
you're-
are fallen
this is wait, hold on.
far.
No,
Okay,
wait,
shut
respond
up,
to this.
shut up, shut up, shut
Wait,
up, shut up, shut up, shut up.
I wasn't even done, but I'm almost done.
Shut up, shut up.
You have fallen so far. You are making arguments
Holy fuck. Everyone, hold
antithetical.
on, don't worry. I'll help you out. Shut up for a second. We gotta have order. Look, I told you we should move to a private panel. You don't want to do that. Okay, fine.
I just like the idea that ultra progressive Destiny is saying the accusation that Bush and his brother like were responsible for like
It's not an
conspiratorially
argument.
fixing the ballots.
Hold on, I want to
It's the
attack
same
this
as-
point. 'cause
Hold
nobody-
on. I just like that ultra. Hold on. I just like that ultra progressive Destiny, who definitely hasn't slid to the right in his fight against the lefties,
This is
is
not
saying
an
that
argument.
is comparable
Bosh, you're not
to
adding. You're not adding to the conversation.
the
You know
election.
that.
Okay,
I wanna add to the
All right, so
conversation.
I'm muting
I
some
respond to
people.
the North.
Go ahead.
There's like
Destiny-
20 people who
Destiny-
open their mouths are
yeah,
so
okay.
triggered by
I
me.
just have to respond to the
Go.
North Carolina thing because he does this. He drops a really bad claim, follows it up like it's like
You
the
haven't justified
Rubio
a
in
single
the Democratic
dumb fuck
debates.
state you made
Like,
since you come on here, buddy.
This is the Vaush strategy. It's
You came
vaguely
on here to
respond
be
to the point
mad.
and drop a bad analogy that doesn't fit, and then make an ad hom to try
You
to like
just
win the debate
compared
and have like an optics
the
win.
Trump
okay?
big
Let me-
lie to Bush in 2020, and you want to impugn me for bad analogies? You're such a clown
Because
these
the
days,
comparison, are you okay? You sound actually so upset right now. I'm so sorry.
You came
So,
in here
when you-
mad as fuck, and the smile doesn't fool anyone, by the way. I'm not
Okay.
mad. I just
You
laugh
feel him-
really hard
you
whenever
are
I'm called out on my bad
I
arguments.
actually I love it because like
Stephen.
there are some people in this world like you and Fuentes. I think I'm legitimately the only people that piss you off. I actually wear that with pride. So okay, when you say, well, you use these
Little
arguments
flustered
for
there,
North
buddy.
Carolina, you implied that in North Carolina there was a conspiracy, and I'm implying it in Florida. Guess what? In Florida,
The Supreme Court made a ruling on that, and there wasn't a conspiracy. As far as I'm aware, now I could be wrong, I have never been made aware of some broad conspiracy between Bush and his brother to rig that election. Now, when you talk about North Carolina, my understanding is that more or less a conspiracy had kind of been proved. The state legislature in North Carolina, and you should know this because you copy-paste all of my opinions, so I know you've heard me say this exact line before, the North Carolina state
You seem to
legislature
have walked off them,
literally,
so I guess they're just mine now.
specifically requested by race different voter data from different areas and then closed
Then why
down
were the
every
why were the
single
butterfly
thing
ballots
accordingly.
implemented?
If that was the case, why was anybody implementing anything around the coronavirus?
Why was
time period?
anyone
It wasn't,
implementing? What a phenomenal rebuttal. Why specifically that incredibly strangely laid out, very different
why didn't the
ballot
Supreme
that
Court agree
just
with
so
you,
happened?
Vaush? Why didn't the Supreme Court agree with you?
So now
Bush,
we return back to the previous argument, and I have to ask you, would you still be saying the
respond to
North
me.
Carolina voter law was racist
So,
if the courts
anyway,
hadn't disagreed with it?
The North Car-
This is the same bad argument you made earlier.
I'm assuming that the process is working to some extent. So if
Oh,
the
yeah,
courts
so
have
your
decided something
argument is that
different,
legality determines whether or not something's anti-democratic.
No, that's not. It's
Status
determining
quo
the outcome of what
sitting.
happened.
If the
If there
court
was
agree, you
footage,
have-
here's what you're doing.
Go
This is
ahead.
the equivalent of what you're doing. So let me just demonstrate this, right? Let's say that a man shoots somebody in cold blood, and there's 52 videos of it, and everybody sees it, and then the court says like, oh, he did it, and he gets locked in jail. And Vaush is saying, well, what if they would have decided something different? Well, it's hard to imagine that. I mean, if there was different evidence or something, then sure. You're telling me if the courts would have decided something different on the North Carolina case, or different in the Trump case, or different in the Bush v. Gore case, then would it be different? I don't know. Maybe if they're looking over different evidence or something, but we can all see like the evidence that they spoke about.
So
We can all
you're-
read the argument. Hold on,
whether
let
or
me
not
finish.
something
You
is
asked, okay.
considered-
I'm
is
specifically addressing
determined
the
by
things
the
you're
court
specifically saying. Okay, the courts ruled it in a
Fun.
certain way. So right now the onus is on you to tell us, just like it is on the Republicans right now that think that Trump had the election stolen from them. The onus is on them to tell us why did all the judges get it wrong. The onus is on you to tell us, even with a one fascist Scalia, there were still 6 other Supreme Court justices that disagreed with you in the Bush v. Gore case. You need to tell us why they're wrong without alleging some vague conspiracy with zero evidence, which is the exact same thing that Trump and the rest of the Trumpers do right now against our current system that said that he lost the election.
So first of all, your spiel there had little to nothing to do with what I said, so I'm not sure of its relevance. And second of all,
Oh my god.
Okay.
This
Counter.
portal
Yeah, sure.
is
You can.
beautiful.
Okay. So Katarana, you can go. But I just gotta let you know, like, I had no idea that your hand was up until someone in the chat let me know. You gotta like put lights on. It's very difficult.
Me, so there's
My lights are on. I'm just black. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but
okay,
this is
so
very difficult. So anyway, go ahead.
okay.
Hold it in front of the camera.
This lover's quarrel. I'm loving it. Content, beautiful. But like, can't we get to something where
my
it's not
God.
just like Destiny versus Vaush jerk off time?
my
We're
God.
discussing the
Damn,
point.
he came on here to talk with me. He's made accusation after
Oh my
accusation.
God.
He walks back attack after attack.
No. But like,
Okay,
but like,
okay,
but like anything else.
Great.
Like, I'll do anything.
Don't worry,
Okay.
Katarana. Thank you. Vaush and Destiny, finish what you were doing.
Well, I'll just finish the point because it seemed like we're never going to go anywhere with this. So Destiny has retreated to the previous position, which I already indicated was pretty unjustifiable, that legality doesn't determine whether or not something is or is not conspiratorial or anti-democracy. And he can't seem to answer whether or not the North Carolina voter ID laws would be something he would consider to be racist in intent if the courts had not ruled in the way they were, even if the evidence was the same. So there's plenty of documentation out there. I'm sure plenty of people watching are too young to remember any of this. I know I was like 4 at the time, so I had to read about it afterwards. With regards to, hold on. With regards to the butterfly ballots, there was like obviously shady shit going on with clear intent. I think that I've demonstrated that there was intent, there was motive, and there was no other justification for the things that they did. It wasn't like there was some other conceivable explanation. It was pretty targeted.
Why did the court disagree with you?
So hold on. I don't have the individual rulings of all the justices, but I'm not appealing to legality to determine whether or not something is anti-democracy or not. I think that every judge on earth can rule against me, and I can still make a compelling argument for why I believe something is conspiratorial or why I think they did something anti-democratic.
Okay, so
why
you're
did
the
all of
exact same thing as every single.
Hold on. It's okay. You'll get your chance soon, buddy. Don't worry. Much in the same way that I think that Evo Morales' Supreme Court voting in favor of the constitutional reforms they did were anti-democratic, in spite of the fact that all of them agreed. How could they have all agreed? Am I alleging conspiracy? No. I just think different people have different priorities and different ways of seeing the world. I am not in the heads of all of the Supreme Court judges back 21 years ago, so I can't specifically allege their intents, but the idea that I'm like out here in the blue making the claim that there was funny business back in Florida or that there was some conspiracy or deliberate intent to influence the vote is
well, it's very funny. And it's certainly not a position I would expect to come from a progressive or even a person willing to vote for Joe Biden, but it owned the left briefly. So
Not
we're
about
never
owning
actually
about
going.
respected.
we're
Hold on,
never
you can keep
actually
ad
going
homming
to
over and over
finish-
again. I'm not going to sit here
we're
and wait for you to
never
finish with
actually
don't fuck
going to
arguments.
finish
Okay, you have not
It's
given a
okay.
single reason for
Destiny,
why.
you're
you
going
think
to
the
the
court
point
was
with
wrong.
Vaush,
You-
you gotta
if
let
you're
Destiny
going to-
in.
if you're going to
Vaush,
delay-
Vaush, letting Destiny in. Vaush, we're letting Destiny in.
It's okay.
Yeah, okay, yeah, don't just cut him off if he starts ad homing. It's really creepy. I don't know why he's like so obsessed with like making the personal attacks. If you are going to disagree with the courts and you're going to levy an extreme accusation, not only are these courts wrong, but I believe that Bush is fascist for this particular reason related to the courts
Off
being
point.
wrong, you better have a really good reason for why they were wrong. And you can't just say, well, I disagree with them. I think it was in a Twitter thread I read a long time ago, but I don't remember. That's all I'm saying. So in the future, maybe be like, I don't know how I feel about Bush. Instead of coming out here and so strongly asserting, oh, I'm pretty sure him and Scalia were fascists. Well, why? Well, because of the Florida stuff. Well, why?
I noticed he's referring to
I don't
other
really-
points now. This would be a gish gallop if you actually wanted to see it.
It's not a gish gallop. Okay,
Can
so
I ask a really, really important
every other like weird
referencing points.
Okay. These are the
It was
exact
like
same points.
20
Everyone here can
seconds.
hear the conversation. We're going around on the exact same points.
You're
You don't
running
know.
back to earlier points because you
I'm not
ran away
running-
from
this
this
is-
one.
I'm
The
literally
idea that
responding to exactly what
the
you're
Gore Bush
talking to.
election was like the result of election tampering is hardly a unique position. Because I'm not familiar with the Supreme Court documentation does not make my arguments
It's
less
hardly
salient.
unique among like left people on
Especially since
Twitter.
Your
sure.
argument
You
is
said it was
you
a
need to
common
explain-
position.
Wait, hold on. Just to be clear, Destiny's position on this is literally, in order for you to allege conspiratorial intent, you need to tell me the exact motives of every judge who voted against it. So this is clearly not a counter position being taken in good faith. One being taken out of
Dude,
spite.
I just there are so many other worlds. If I was the guy that could see in the Avengers movie like 50 million other stories or whatever, there's like 49 million of them where you're just like a Trump saying all of these exact same arguments about how Trump was robbed of the election. I guess you'll never see that. I mean, peace guarders.
So,
right?
again,
like,
it's
you're
funny that
literally
you would
making
accuse
every
me of
single of the
making
exact
inept
same argument
comparisons
that all
under
the
these
Trump people make. It's
circumstances.
the exact same arguments, word for word almost. Like you could copy paste these, you could control plus V
All-
these, and they
all
would fit
arguments
perfectly for
that there
Trump.
was a problem with all arguments that there are problems with the judicial result and conspiracy underlying behavior of the people who went to that court are equally bad. All of them are equally unjustifiable. This is the mind of a radical centrist, by the way. He doesn't actually believe what he's saying, but it does help him own the left a little bit. Just, I want you, and this is the last thing I'll say legitimately, and then I'll cede the point to whatever. He's saying that the accusation, which I've substantiated, by the way, the fact that there was no other reason to implement those butterfly ballots, it was done by a person with clear intent, motive, blah, 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 that accusation is the same as what Trump has done is so flagrantly anti-intellectual, it could only be made either by an idiot or a person who's
These aren't
arguing
even like arguments.
purely
It's just
for the
random
court
ad homs.
disagreeing with
This
me.
works so much better
So-
like when you're just doing the YouTube format and screaming at your audience. But like if you're actually talking to other people, you should try to respond to the arguments.
Since Destiny
instead of
clearly
just like
just came in here
reaching
to
and
have a
reaching and
conversation
reaching
with
for like
me,
these weird ad homs.
Since
No, like
Destiny clearly just came here to have a
you're
conversation
the only
with
one
me,
in here that is
I'd
digging
like to
so
defer to
hard for these
anybody
ad
else
homs.
here.
Okay, well then.
Were there any other conversations people wanted to have? I mean, he just wanted to talk with me. Do you want a private room, Destiny? Is that what you came here to ask me
I
for?
just
Because
want
I
to
am
make
going
one
to
point,
bed
then I'll
soon.
drop this point entirely, and we can move on. But saying that there's no other reason is what you're saying is there's no other reason that I can think of. There's no other reason than conspiratorial intent that you can think of, and that's
You can apply
fair,
that criticism
but
to literally
that's a
any
fucking
argument.
leap, dude. That's a real
This
fucking
is that's a
leap.
counter argument
And the
you
fact
can
that
make
you don't
really any point ever
recognize
made by
this
anyone.
is kind of silly. But I'll drop it, and we can move on to another topic. Thank you.
You can make that counterpoint to any claim.
I just have one thing I'd like to say real quick. It's just an aside. Destiny, I'm a farmer from Nebraska, and I heard you were from Nebraska at one point. So whenever you say something I agree with, I always think that's the Nebraska talking.
Only the
And I
endorsements today for really getting the cream of the crop up here to agree. with.
Vaush,
Well, I
Vaush,
mean, the king of extreme. I mean, what can I say? I'm pretty awesome.
Vaush,
Fanatic, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that, man, there's literally just one point that I really feel like you keep saying, going back to the same argument about like trying to create this comparison between like the idea that for us to be able to say that nothing untoward happened. It's not even that nothing untoward happened altogether. There's just so much middle ground between the idea of someone being a fascist and what you're saying.
We're like 20 points ago now.
No, we're
can't-
not 20. No. We are not 20 points. We're not 20 points in. This has been the same conversation. That has been the main point that's been underscoring this entire conversation. It's literally been. It's literally been this whole time trying to get you to explain what it is about Bush that's fascist. And this is the first point that you brought in. And the way that you've been trying to defend it, we've been trying to make the same point the entire time. That clearly the Supreme Court didn't agree with you, and it's not just that the Supreme Court didn't agree with you. It's that the Supreme Court disagreed with you while we didn't see any evidence of any Bush having any control over the Supreme Court such that it would allow him to subvert the democratic process. So that right there, that distinction, when you keep retreating back to the point of, well, yeah, you guys are making the analogy of you guys are making the argument that just because it's legal, that's not what we're saying. It's not just because it's legal. It's because it was upheld by the Supreme Court, and we have no evidence.
That's a legality argument.
It's these two.
It's funny. It's funny that
it's not. No. Stop. It's not just that. You got to let me finish the statement. These two things are working. These two things are working concomitantly. It's not just that it was upheld by the Supreme Court. It was that it was upheld by the Supreme Court. And we don't have any evidence that the Supreme Court was affected or controlled or did anything subversive. Those things together are what are causing that. So when you bring up these other analogies, most of them haven't even fit.
I don't think I've been bringing up that many analogies. I think the only one that I brought up is the North Carolina voter ID law, which I think accurately demonstrated the ways in which something can be anti-democratic, whether or not the courts end up agreeing with or disagreeing with it. Not to mention, I mentioned Jim Crow earlier. I tried to describe the reasons why I thought the Bush was fascistic, but I didn't really get a chance to because we got hung up in the first point. A point so self-evident and simplistic, by the way, that it was generally accepted as a common talking point amongst Democrats in 2000, people who today I would consider conservative, given how far the Overton window has shifted to the left in that time. But since then, I suppose it's become a contentious point amongst conservatives and people acting like them for the sake of voting to the left. So we're not actually able to move any further on this, and I can't actually respond to like 16 people jumping in at every point that I have to make. So with all that being said, do we want to disentangle me slightly from the subject of this panel so we can move on? Because if we don't, it's going to be in a loop for the next hour.
Okay.
I would like that.
I'm not even making money from this. I should have turned on my stream if I knew it was going to be this.
Yeah, it should. That's we would have enjoyed the
I
nipples.
know. Viewership, Brian Case. I'm sorry. That was rude of me. Next time I'll turn it on. Okay.
Okay. Thanks. Okay. So we'll
Wait,
let some.
Prime, can I just say one?
Okay.
Can I please say one thing? I've had my hand up forever. My fucking dress strap broke waiting to talk, and I had to go change. So like, here's the thing. I think it's a little like, and I was listening to it the whole time when I was changing, and I kind of couldn't believe what I heard. The fact that something happens through a democratic process does not mean that the outcome of that thing isn't fascist. In fact, the way that fascists historically have gone and risen to power is because they exploit the democratic systems and mechanisms within like a democratic system in order to consolidate power and then implement policies that are anti-democratic, and that can be reinforced like by democratic means. Like this happens all the time. This has been the stated policy of the GOP for a long time, and I feel like I was taking crazy pills because I'm like, do people not like acknowledge that?
No, you're just
do
saying
people not that happens regularly? Like that is something that happens routinely. And here's the thing: there's been plenty of examples in history. Fanatic, you can have a chance in a second. I'm fucking talking. Like there are so many examples of things that at the time were upheld through a democratic process, whether it was through a judge, whether it was through the legislature, but that then later was repealed or whatever because they say, you know what, that actually was anti-democratic or that was preventing people from voting. That's why things like voter ID laws have been passed and then brought back, or a lot of them are still in place. But those are patently anti-democratic, but they still passed in a democratic system. But like those are fascist. So I don't know. It just I feel like we're just here for a proxy fight between Vaush and Destiny.
I just came on to relax.
I just wish you guys
We've been talking about the points this whole time.
Maddie, you literally didn't contribute. I don't know how you didn't hear what I just said. This is insane to me. You literally just made the same point that I already addressed. It's not just that one thing. It's not just that it passed a democratic process. It's not just the Supreme Court upheld it. It would have to be, you'd have to show that Bush had some sort of undue influence over the Supreme Court such that he could cause them to do something subversive in order for you to say that it was fascist. The Supreme Court, or you have to make the argument that the Supreme Court themselves are being fascist, which neither of those statements are being made. So what you just said is complete nonsense. You're not even contributing.
How does persuasion come into it being fascist or not?
So we'll go to Nacho, and then we'll see if GSU, Pisco, and Vivian, who I had muted for the longest time,
true pill, by the way.
So Nacho.
So I was trying to figure out, like, let's say we grant you this one thing, like that's why I was bringing that up. Like, how many of these things? First of all, like, how many of these things does it have to cover before it's like before it's considered fascist? And then do you have anything else to point to reason as far as like reasons why you think that Bush is fascist?
And Fanatic, you've been muted. All right, keep going.
Is that me?
Yeah, I guess that's you.
Yes, Vaush.
I don't think there's a hard line on how many points. Anytime you're trying to ascribe like political effects to a given candidate or whatever, it's going to be a super like complicated and nuanced and highly subjective process. So I just don't have an answer to that. With regards to Bush, after the anti-democratic stuff, the main stuff that I was going to reinforce was hyper nationalism, xenophobia, the deference to religious authority to justify persecution of other groups, and there's a whole bunch of stuff involving Muslims in the Iraq War and war crimes and the camp we have in Cuba, whose name I'm blanking on right now, and there was stuff I was going to feed into with that, and then later in towards his presidency, if I remember correctly, and I could look this up again in the future, I feel like there were more overt populist messages being delivered by his party that he signed off on. Not signed up like he didn't literally sign up, but like he sort of led in with them and passively enabled them as the president. He was nowhere near as much of a fascist as Trump. I mean, we're almost talking night and day, but I feel like the behavior that he engaged in really laid the groundwork. You also have the Guantanamo Bay. Thank you. I can't believe I forgot that. You also have stuff like the Patriot Act, which, I mean, to be fair, I guess that just every president supports it now. But at the time, it was a pretty astonishing like retraction of our civil rights. And there was a lot of other stuff too that I remembered an hour ago. I forget now, but stuff like that. I think he laid groundwork, and that's the problem. That I don't think neoconservatism and fascism are two like really distinct things, which is the reason why a bunch of Republicans who used to be neocons are now like total full-on like practically QAnon, big lie, sucking Trump's dick types. It seems like it's an easy line to blur, and that's the reason why I called Bush fascistic. I think the same criticisms apply further back, like more, probably lesser so with time, though. I feel like Bush Sr. and Nixon stand out to me as people who are probably aberrantly fascist leaning, respectively, within their own time periods. And then you go further and further back, and it becomes less and less applicable. But even then, like back in the 1950s and stuff, with all the McCarthy era, like Cold War Red Scare type stuff, there were a lot of really obvious, like the Frankfurt conspiracy came about back then. The idea that there were leftist intellectuals in academia and government that were like, I mean, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, maybe Jewish, that were controlling like American intellectual like elites and like driving college students to be anti-American. Stuff like this, stuff like that makes me think like leaning fascist. And where the line is, I can't really say, but I can see the pattern now in hindsight, now that I live in 2021, and it led up to Trump, and that was a very dangerous path to walk. That's the overall argument. And I guess it would take 80 million hours to substantiate all of that, but that's the broader argument that I'd make.
Okay, GSU.
Yeah, so I had some points made like an hour ago. It's annoying to me that people are saying, hey, this is like a proxy war. Like, first off, Vaush said some things and I wanted to interrogate what he said, and that's kind of what started all of this. So this is not some, hey, let's proxy war with Destiny and Vaush. I actually was like trying to get him to defend the statements that he made. But the thing that I think you haven't addressed, Vaush, and the thing that I was going to bring up like an hour ago when I got muted, but it's exactly what Fanatic just said. So with the thing in North Carolina, there's an actual causal link that we can draw to, right? We can say that they requested voter data and then they made a decision solely based off that voter data that was like surgically precise to disenfranchise Black voters. What I think everybody has been saying to you that I don't think you've addressed is that there seems to not be this case in the example for the Florida thing. So we can say that Jeb Bush was in power, but there seems to be no causal link that we can draw from Jeb Bush to the state secretary that was over the election, to the election being carried out, to the judges that justified the election. There seems to be no causal link at all to call this anti-democratic because none of that evidence exists. And that's what I wanted to ask you like an hour ago. It sounds like what you're saying is, hey, it was his brother. Like, you know, it's got to be something there, right? And what we're saying is that bar is so low that it's disgusting to use rhetoric as it's fascistic based off
anti-democratic.
Well,
it's about using the evidence that you have to the best of your ability. You're not always going to have stuff as clear cut as getting like this search history of the state legislators indicating that they were looking up what types of like voter IDs Black people used. It's not always going to be that clear cut. So when it comes to the Bush v. Gore situation,
situation. I'm far from the first person to make this claim. It's not just that it was convenient, and convenient it was. It was that there seemed to be no other reason to put forward the butterfly ballots, and the butterfly ballots were so specifically and oddly designed. You can look them up right now. The way they organized, like the listing of the candidates, it wasn't just unusual, it was unprecedented. Nobody did it that way. And you have to think, like, why would they do this unbelievably weird thing? The only logical explanation is the one which is the outcome it led to, which is that people who otherwise would have voted for Gore, the boomers in Florida, then voted for another candidate because their strained cataract-ridden eyeballs couldn't actually see the script on the page. And there's been plenty of analysis after the fact to indicate that that did have that effect. Now, I can't look into their brains and tell you what they were thinking. I can't prove it, because very rarely can you prove intent. You usually need like written statements, or like they need a confession or something like that. But I think that's a fair logical understanding of the events that took place. And this is a fairly well-researched topic too. Like, this is a fairly, as I understood it, agreed upon assessment of the 2000 election. By the way, is my mic still doing the thing? Do I need to come back?
A little bit. No, it's much better.
It's mostly better.
One second.
Okay. He'll come back in, but I changed the thing, the region, and that helps.
To be on his.
Yeah, he's coming back.
Yeah, it's way better now.
So it was way better.
Sorry.
I did change the region for you, and it's way better since. So finish up
Sorry,
your point.
that's
then
my
I'll
bad.
go to-
Discord really hates me. I don't know why, and I don't know how to fix it. So
Yeah. So okay, let's go to Pisco, and before we do,
can we just all go along?
Well,
we
first I want to
share things. We all want to make America great again, right?
So
I want to thank you for.
I just wanted to say quickly, if you're enjoying this content, maybe give me a follow. Hey, like this format that I have, this open panel format, allows for these moments to happen. So if you're enjoying these moments, hit that follow button, make sure notifications are on, because I do this 6 days a week. And you know what else would help, right? If you're maybe sub to the channel, I give you a lot. I do give you a lot for you, right? For a lot of bang for your buck. Subs to the channel, gift bits, or gift subs will be very helpful. Thank you. All right, go ahead, Pisco.
Yeah, I want to thank
the best. None has been better.
I wanted to thank Vaush. I mean, it's not easy to be on a panel, have everyone attacking you from all angles. So appreciate you being here. It's a lot of fun. But I think that we want more as regards the evidence of Bush actively and maliciously influencing the election with the purpose to screw Gore out of a victory. Now, I think that there can be some debate. There's some papers or some research done to suggest that Gore was in fact the winner of that election, but that's not enough evidence to suggest that Bush or any people around the circle intentionally made it so, or intentionally changed the law to have that effect. By all accounts, this election was extremely close, up to a couple hundred votes. No one could have predicted that it would come down to those things, and this situation ended up having a new law being put in place to change those formats in Florida. It's one of the reasons why Florida results are so quick nowadays. What we're looking for is it's not enough to know that something is gone through legal process to know that it's quote unquote democratic, but you need some separate evidence, I think, of intent with respect to this particular passage of this law. And we don't have that here. And you would never accept that of a Trump person who alleged impropriety in the 2020 election only by pointing at a law and throwing up their hands and saying, what other purpose could it possibly have?
No, wait.
Think
So
about the
to be
2019
clear-
law. Yep.
So to be clear, if there was a law that was passed that specifically seemed to lead to an outcome that favored Democratic
talk about
voters, hold on. If such a law was passed and the way they achieved that favorability was by altering the ballot in such a way as to get voters to vote for candidates they didn't actually want, therefore skewing the total, and there was no possible explanation for why they would format things in that way except for the outcome of that explicit bias, and all of this was being facilitated by a relative of the favored presidential candidate, I promise you from the bottom of my heart, if a Democrat did that, I would have a problem with it. Okay.
Let me give you the example. So the example is in 2019, Pennsylvania passed a law.
You said that.
Passed a law. This is pre-COVID, extending the right for mail-in voting to everybody. And what the Republicans have said is they put this law in place to allow illegal voters to vote and to make it easier to rig the election. And that's the purpose they did it. It's not the only state they point to. But what I'm
Is
taking
there
issue
any
with
evidence
is
that it's led to that outcome? Is there
as
another
much evidence as
conceivable
you have.
explanation?
As much
Wait,
evidence
hold on.
as you
Wait.
have.
No, hold on. I do have evidence. Wait, hold on. I do have evidence because the percentage of people who then reported they misvoted after the 2000 election was statistically significant, far greater than it is in the average election. So I have evidence.
That's what they say about this one.
Wait,
That's
hold on.
exactly
Wait,
what they say about
hold
these
on.
ones.
That's wait, hold, wait, please, please, please. That's what they
who
say.
are
But I
undocumented is not anti-democratic.
hold on.
It's
So that's
an
what they.
increase of democracy.
That's what they say, but I guarantee you Republicans have supplied no evidence that it led to an increase in the amount of illegal voting. That's a fact.
I'm sorry, no.
So-
But what you said is voter voter issues related to ballots that did increase in 2000 in certain places, and the Republicans point to that, and that's their quote unquote statistical analysis that something's afoot.
Okay,
is looking
so
at
I would need to look at that then, because I mean I would need to review that evidence before I could really factor it in. So you're telling me then that the extension of the mail-in voting time led to a specific increase in the amount of voting errors with the Republican voters in that state?
the Republicans say that there are more errors.
I'm not asking what
and
they say. They'll say whatever. I mean, like, is there evidence to that? If so,
there's
I would like to
evidence
see
that
it.
there are, by virtue of extending universal mail-in voting, there are more errors with respect to.
But is it
like,
errors
issues.
that deliberately target a particular outcome? Because the way the butterfly ballots were oriented did lead
Prove
to
what you said. Prove what you just said. Prove
Wait,
what
yes,
you
it
just
is.
said.
A confusing ballot doesn't help anybody. It's just confusing for everybody. It's going to fuck it up for everybody. So you can't say it helped with one person.
Yeah, and two quick fact checks. I linked the ballot in chat. These are not impossible to read ballots. Okay, you are right.
I
Anybody
didn't
can go
say
look
they
them
were
up. I linked
impossible
the-
to read.
They're
led to
not.
a
They don't seem.
jumping in with a wrong point. Mad. He had his time to quiet down. He's here.
Okay, I'm just going to keep talking when he starts ad-homing. So number one, the ballots aren't impossible to read. Now, whether or not you want to say, people said that they had trouble, voting or not. Okay, sure, but like that's not that bar of like deliberately misleading somebody that you seem to be trying to set up on the other side. Number one. Number two, the person that designed this ballot was a Democrat. Teresa Lepore was not a Republican. She wasn't a Republican operative. She was a Democrat. So these are like the
Why
idea
was
that
it
these are like
changed?
intentionally.
Who signed off on that actual implementation? And
who
also,
signed
designed the
off on the
ballot,
Pennsylvania law?
signed the ballot
on it? Why
in
is the
what
person
way?
that signed off on it more important than the person that actually created the ballot?
Wait, the person who signs off on it and actually implements it is infinitely more important. There are probably many ballot designs.
Except if it was the other
uh,
case where a Republican had made the ballots and a Democrat had signed off.
Also,
on it,
wait,
we'd probably be
wait,
saying, well, the
made
person
it in
that
what
made it is way more important.
design or the placement of the votes or
She
of the
literally, she literally designed the ballot, the one that was used in this particular election.
Can I see that? Can you put that in the chat?
Okay.
Didn't you know?
Yeah.
I mean, you're alleging something particularly big
No,
and
I didn't
malicious.
think. No, wait, hold on. No. I don't know every
didn't
single
think.
detail
That's
about
the
something
point.
that took place 21 years ago. So, first of all, we weren't actually talking about intent at this point. We were talking about proving whether or not there was a marked difference with a specific bias as to who was affected by this. If you all can Google it, you can take a look at the butterfly ballot. If you look carefully, the very topmost position was the Republican ticket, George Bush and Dick Cheney. Right below that was the Democratic ticket, Al Gore and Joe Lieberman. However, in spite of the fact that the Al Gore and Joe Lieberman position, the text was second in the list downwards, they were the third notch to mark. So that discrepancy in a state with a disproportionately high number of elderly people led to a clear favorability bias. People who wanted to vote for George Bush had a clear lineup. The hole for George Bush was right next to the text for George Bush. Just right there, clean and simple. However, for the Al Gore Democratic ticket, it was the second text aligned with the third point. So this is a way in which a tiny edit to the format...
Text is still aligned. That's not true.
The text is aligned.
There's an arrow pointing.
Yeah, the text is still aligned. It's just not true.
This led to it. Wait, hold on. Wait,
There's a
hold
lot
on.
of mind reading here.
It's so funny to me to hear all
knowing. It's just mind reading.
Hold on. We're not talking about whether or not an average person could figure this out. We're talking about, did this alteration lead to a statistically significant number of Democrats misvote in this case? In this
No,
case,
we're
they
talking,
misvote
that it
with
was
a different
intentionally,
Hat
we're
Buchanan.
talking about if it was intentionally set
No,
up that
right
way.
now we were actually talking about whether or not there was a statistically significant impact.
Can you
Try to
prove
put your points
either?
together.
Can you prove either? How do you know that there's a statistically whatever you said about the Democrats being disproportionately affected? How do you know that?
Okay, allow me to read. This is from an
people were
article
asked.
from The Guardian. Everyone buckle up. This is not exactly new information.
Can we just take this for granted instead of listening to Vaush's
So make a claim, but it's obviously not true.
here comes
No.
Adam. It's just I don't. Okay.
Yeah, okay, no. So there's plenty of documentation that this design led to far fewer Democrat votes in some key counties that otherwise would have been in a very, very, very close election. So I can demonstrate that there was a clear bias in who was affected by this. First and foremost, what were we even on? I don't even remember what this was broadly in service of. It's just so many stupid points, line after line after line.
Your argument here has changed. Your initial claim was that this was an intentionally designed and implemented thing to target specific voters.
Yes.
That this was intentional. Yes.
I believe that is the case.
but
Now,
now
you
you
can't
are
prove
backing
intent unless they admit it, but I believe that is the
No,
case.
you prove with
yes.
circumstantial evidence. I mean, usually intent is proved with circumstantial evidence. And
That
what
is
is
usually the best you can do unless you get a confession. You usually have to infer intent from the likelihood that people would have engaged in other types of behavior could they have.
If this ain't
now,
it,
in this
though.
case, this is
In
a
other
very
words, mind reading.
No, in this case, no, that's not mind reading. It's the opposite. It's actually the type of behavior that literally anybody. It's the type of behavior that literally anybody would engage in if it was their job to determine whether or not somebody meant to do something. If you're at all familiar with the criminal justice field,
Vaush
this
is right
101
about that.
stuff. Yeah,
Vaush is
so
right about that,
with
yeah.
regards to the butterfly ballot, I
He's
point
talking
you
about
again,
mind reading in the fucking.
this is
ballot.
an unprecedentedly badly designed ballot. I mean, truly, like astonishingly badly designed. And it just so happened to be rolled out in a way that favored one candidate over another in a swing state, in a state that was run by the brother of the candidate. Now, nobody's come out with any signed confessions. I admit to that. I don't think I ever said that they had. I can't prove intent. What I can say is that I think there is substantial evidence. Now, I know that there is substantial evidence because this has been a hardline Democratic and even moderate-leaning talking point for a long time. So what we're arguing right now feels like I feel like it's past arguing gay marriage. I feel like I'm arguing gay adoption right now. If you'd all like, I can read up on this more, but I feel like if I can link some articles in chat, but there's evidence that the design was abhorrent. There's evidence that the design favored Republicans for the way it was formatted. We know that Jeb Bush was the governor of the state. Like, if we really want to harp on this point unto infinity, if you really want to crucify me for not being able to prove intent like a literal mind reader, then I guess I'll accept that L.
There's a lot of
14 when that election went down, and everybody, it was said it was confusing for everybody, Republican, Democrat alike, and so there's nobody that really overly benefited from this.
That's
Here's
not
the,
the
I was a teenager when that went down, so I actually remember that election.
Yeah,
You have to link it to George W. Bush. You haven't linked it to George W. Bush.
Well, it's okay,
can't
but
hear.
Vaush made the point, and I think this is crazy to me because I do think that this is a point that we all would agree with. Like he said, like that he has a problem with this, like that he feels like something untoward happened, and I don't think I've ever before today like heard really people question whether or not there seemed like something untoward happened in that.
No, but this is the whole point of what was.
Okay, it's a far cry from fascism, and I think
the whole point
fascism
of
thing
this,
yet so like fragmentally away from the original point at this point. I didn't expect we'd be arguing this. Allow me to one last thing, if I may, read the foreword on a Stanford business article. Okay, View publication. We show that the butterfly ballot used in Palm Beach County, Florida, in the 2000 presidential election caused more than 2,000 Democratic voters to vote by mistake for reform candidate Pat Buchanan, a number larger than George W. Bush's certified margin of victory in Florida. We use multiple methods and several kinds of data to rule out alternative explanations for the vote Buchanan received in Palm Beach. This is from 2001, by the way. This was hot off the press.
So the problem, nobody is disagreeing.
So we're mind reading those two
It's not about mind reading. Hold on.
Did I just hear Destiny say nobody's disagreeing, and then he's going to list a point that he was disagreeing with 5 minutes ago? Hit me with it, Destiny, please.
Okay, sure. Let me explain this one more time. I literally said word for word. Somebody go back and clip it. Everybody agrees that there was funny business. Nobody is saying that there wasn't funny business. But the problem is that you are alleging a conspiracy. This is the exact same types of arguments that you have with insane Trump fanatics who will say things like this particular thing happened and the reason why was because there's a massive conspiracy behind it. So whether it's Fauci miscommunicating how we're supposed to use masks, or whether it was the WHO not getting the correct information out initially about the coronavirus, the problem is that you're taking this argument of something funny or something dumb or something that shouldn't have happened, which everybody, I think most people agree with that everything relating to the Florida ballot thing was fucked, and it probably led to some dumb shit happening, which is why I don't know why you're saying, nobody disagrees with that. The problem is that
a robot again?
yes,
I'm just saying it was confusing for everybody.
Keep talking because he's interrupting me. Okay, holy shit. The problem is that you are alleging a conspiracy, and for some reason, Vaush doesn't seem to understand the difference between saying something bad happened and something bad happened that was intentionally caused by a group of malicious actors. And this is exactly what Trump people do, is they try to play fast and loose with these two things so that they can prove everybody on the other side is a malicious actor. And it's just very strange, like Mott and Bailey. So you'll argue with somebody that says, like, for instance, like, the WHO is an evil, horrible actor. And it's like, really? How do you know that? And it's like, well, they got this and this wrong. It's like, well, just because they got something wrong doesn't mean that they're being malicious on it. And it's the exact same here when we talk about the Florida recount, or whether we talk about any other number of things we're talking about. Just because there might have been something that was fucked up, or just because there might have been something that was wrong, there's a difference between saying something bad or wrong or dumb happened here versus going to the next level and saying there was a conspiracy here. That not
And
a
George
conspiracy,
Bush was in on
not a
it.
conspiracy,
I'd like
and
first
not
of all,
a
I'd like to
conspiracy
address
like, oh my God, like a conspiracy theory, something's horrible, but a conspiracy like there was a plan by a group of people that got together in some way to circumvent the law or do something unlawful or evil or horrible. That is the original claim that you made, that you have now acknowledged multiple times. We all thank you for it. You cannot substantiate it because you need to go back and read more or do whatever.
I can't actually prove intent like a mind reader.
So you want to say like prove intent by mind reader.
I'd like to first of all, I'd like to acknowledge.
Vaush like preach for like 20 minutes. Okay, so I have.
I would like to acknowledge that Destiny is backtracking here because initially
Okay, Vaush, you gotta let him in. Vaush, buddy. Sorry, gotta let him in.
Fuck. Okay, yeah, holy shit, because he railroads like a million points. Nobody is saying that intent has to be proved like a mind reader. Believe it or not, in the criminal justice system in the United States, we prove intent and shit all the time. And to my knowledge, I could be wrong, I don't believe we have any mind readers that work for the criminal justice system.
You don't prove intent.
So there are people that can infer intent, and they do it by more than just looking at a Twitter headline or more looking at something bad that happened and saying like, oh, well, you know, there must have been some intentional
all the
mishap here.
anti-lefty talking points.
There might have been some bad ballot design, which I think most people acknowledge, but unless you can literally give us a shred of evidence that there was some tomfoolery or some conspiracy that was arranged here, it's probably best to just take the L and move on to the next point.
Right. So first of all, I'd like to acknowledge the backtracking. So everyone here, well, not everyone, I'm sorry, but some people here, including Destiny, were saying multiple times that there was no evidence that there was any bias in how these butterfly ballots led to people misvoting. Destiny was saying, wait, hold on. Destiny, wait, hold on. Destiny was, look, I just did. I read a Stanford article quote on you. I can link you the article if you want to read it.
Yeah, but the burden is on you. You have to provide that.
Hold, please. Destiny even said, while chortling, he was saying, anyone could read this. It's aligned right there. So he was perfectly willing to imply that there was no actual negative outcome from the alignment of the butterfly ballot. Then I lay out the evidence that that's not the case, and now he backtracks off of that. Every time he makes a fallacious claim, he is willing to backtrack off of it to the previous one. Like he just tried to say, for example, that the courts prove intent, as if they're able to do that. No. They infer intent.
You prove intent.
Okay, we'll all get there. So when you're talking about conspiracy, or when you're talking about whether or not politicians do things to, say, for example, favor their political allies, you usually have to use inference because very rarely do they openly admit to it. Here's another example where I'm willing to admit conspiracy or infer conspiracy where there's no direct evidence of such. The impeachment of Donald Trump, the first one, where the Republican senators voted to acquit overwhelmingly. And for some of them, like McConnell, they admitted beforehand that they were going to vote to acquit basically no matter what. The rest of them didn't do that. They just voted to acquit. Do I believe there was some kind of bias on the part of Republican senators to not consider the full facts of the case and instead to vote to acquit Donald Trump out of some sort of favorability bias towards their own party? I do believe that. I can't prove it, but I do believe it because it explains their behavior well, and because I think they had intent, and I think they had motive, and I think they had ability. Now, with regards to the butterfly ballot thing, I have demonstrated all of the characteristics that would be sufficient in a criminal trial: the opportunity, the intent, the motive. I think it's sufficient. I have explained why. Hold on. There have been many bad faith efforts to delegitimize.
We're going Alex Jones territory here.
Like, for example, claiming that the butterfly ballots wouldn't have had an effect, a very stupid claim made by people unfamiliar with the evidence, which I rebutted.
I was alive during the election. I was a teenager. I remember it. Sorry,
please.
It was confusing for everybody.
Let him finish.
So
blew it on.
So we've run through all of that, and at this point, all Destiny really has to do is just run back to this. Well, explaining every element that would lead a person to engage in bias in favor of their brother is exactly the same as all of the flippant and
provably false claims made by the Trump administration and their allies during the big lie, the election steal conspiracy. Again, this is anti-intellectual. It is not an actual consideration of the arguments or the case that I provided. He's tried to stop it at every point using arguments he's willing to back off later. There's no real discussion here, frankly. If you
actually
want
real
to look this
discussion
up more in the future, then you're totally free to. But at this point, I've demonstrated all of the components that I believe is sufficient to determine a person.
He hasn't even demonstrated one.
First of all, get off your high horse.
The butterfly balance game. Oh my God!
Yeah,
but prime case, as long as this goes on, they're just not gonna. This is uncharitability to the point of delusion. If you can't mind read the intent of the people involved, then you don't have a shred of evidence, and you're
no one has said that,
as
Vaush.
conspiracy theorists.
So Vaush, first of all, you need to get off your high horse. People say prove intent all the time in the context of criminal intent. They say I have to prove mens rea, prove intent.
How do you do? How do you prove intent?
With circumstantial evidence.
They do it all the time. Have you never heard first degree murder is literally intent? Like they do it all the time.
How do you determine intent?
It's through circumstantial evidence. Okay, so I'm trying to tell you.
So if you determine intent, for example, by finding that a person did something that had a particular outcome to an outcome that they would have desired, and there wasn't any other explanation for their behavior,
Gosh, what I'm saying, you can't call out Destiny for saying prove intent, because people use prove intent all the time. Number two, with regards to your study,
using prove intent by way of inferring it through circumstantial evidence, then I proved
his use of the word prove intent is not indication that he thinks that you have to have a mind reader. That is just common vernacular that people say prove intent. So just be clear there. Number two, on your study that you said, all that you quoted to me was that there's evidence that a sufficient number of Democratic ballots were in play such that they could have overturned the results of the election. Is that correct?
No, I said that there was a disproportionate bias towards Democrat voters voting by mistake.
What you read off, though, was that it was the Democrats, the absolute number of the ballots were off in such a quantity to affect
so
the
if you think about
election,
it math-wise, if there's a disparity caused by the butterfly ballots, and that disparity leads to Bush winning when Gore would have otherwise won, that is a disparity that was biased against the Democrats, because it means more Democrats would have misvoted than Republicans.
Understood, but you could have had a situation in which certain butterfly ballots in certain areas and the way that they were administered were different. You don't have absolute knowledge of that.
Well, no, Pisco, we do have evidence of that.
Destiny's still doing it. In chat right now, he's saying nobody could be fooled by this ballot when I've already provided evidence that people were fooled by the ballot. He's not
I'm just pushing back on this.
He's just bad. You're mad.
Real quick, I'm just pushing back on this point because you keep saying it's impossible to read. I'll acknowledge.
Chat. Hey, did I ever say it's impossible to read?
Wait, didn't he literally say that verbatim?
No, I said that. I'm pretty sure you said average person could understand it.
Old people.
I'm pretty sure you've said a lot of the time, like, that's why we blah, blah, blah. All I'm saying is that if you look, it's not funny. It's funny because
how obviously
so
uninterested you are in actually proving.
I've already acknowledged that there is, I guess, a good possibility that it could have been that so many people were confused or whatever. But just
then why do you keep implying that you don't think that?
I'm not implying that. I know that you only literally can focus on rhetoric because your brain can only hold one idea at a time. But the reason why I'm pushing back is because you keep repeating this talking point that it's like impossible. It wasn't impossible.
I never said that. I'm making it up in your head. You're shadowboxing with Phantom. Are you debating Vaush?
Wait, okay. So then you agree that like most reasonable people could read it, right? Maybe some older people.
I literally said that. I literally said the average person can read it, but it's statistically significant. I know you weren't listening. Are there any other points you want me to clarify?
He did say that. I was in the middle of a point.
He did say that. He did say that.
Very bad faith.
But I just want to say that, to be clear, that he did talk about like how difficult it was for old people. Not that it was. At least I don't remember him saying specifically impossible.
Prime case, if I may, I just want to note it for the record. I think I literally said the average person could read this and understand, but the layout was confusing enough to lead a statistically significant number of people to alter their votes, a claim which is backed up by the evidence. But he's running around in chat, this is so hard to read, guys. It's obvious that he doesn't actually care about which points are proven or disproven, which are valid or invalid. He's just mad and he wants to hold me to anything that he can, even if it's something he's already backed off of.
Okay.
This This is
Pisco. I was just addressing this point to you, like earlier. What I was trying to tell you is that these ballots were specifically distributed in Democratic counties, so it did significantly impact them more so. Like there's evidence for that. Like it's crazy because the ballot was actually created by a Democrat. Like it was created by a Democrat, proved by Republicans, literally disseminated in Democratic places.
That would put a pattern practice not to the ballot itself. So one would be sort of the ballot itself.
The ballot itself was a little bit in question, and it seemed like it was intentionally distributed specifically in these counties. This is crazy to me. I feel like we've gone so far down this rabbit hole that people are literally.
I don't even know we're arguing. It's one. I meant to be off an hour ago. Do we have any final points we want to make?
I don't think.
You think George Bush did it? You think George Bush actually did it?
Wait, really quickly. I don't think anyone here disagrees with the idea that Jeb Bush, I'm sorry, that George W. Bush winning that election, that there was something that was untoward happening there. I really thought we all agreed there. Can we just all say
we
that?
do. We all agree. Yeah, it was dumb. There was dumb shit happening.
Probably won.
That if those ballots had been made a different way, it's entirely possible, if not likely, that we would have had a Democrat.
Or would have won.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, as long as we're all clear there. I just don't see where it's fascist, but that's a whole other thing.
Okay.
Well, because the issue is that Vaush is contending
they've
been given enough evidence, circumstantial or otherwise, that it was a conspiracy. That's what we're disagreeing on.
So again, since nobody here in all the times I've asked it has managed to supply another explanation for why a highly deceptive, completely irregular, and hold on, an unprecedented ballot that just so happened to favor the candidate that was the brother of the governor at the time. And hold on, please. And was distributed specifically in Democratic counties. Unless we can find a better explanation for that, incompetence does not sufficiently describe that. Okay,
incompetence super describes it.
It does not. That is so for to me. So this could be my bias.
Number two.
I didn't get to finish my point again.
You did. You finished your point, and now
you're
mad because
I got interrupted. You probably couldn't tell because you weren't listening.
You can't just say because I can't find another explanation, therefore conspiracy. That is every
wait, hold on.
go-to argument.
No,
I can't think of why this is reported incorrectly. Must be a conspiracy between the media. Must be a conspiracy between the Jews.
Not being able to find another explanation for a person's behavior is actually a really strong indicator of potential intent. So, for example, I'll give you an example to this, okay? If you wanted to arrest a person for attempted murder, okay, and they had a gun in their pocket and they were walking through an alleyway towards their ex-girlfriend's house after posting threatening text messages, the fact that there's no other reasonable explanation for them doing that, walking through that alley towards their ex-girlfriend's apartment with a gun in hand, is actually a really strong indicator towards their intent. So yes,
I agree, but you fucked yourself there, Vaush, because in your example, they sent threatening text messages. So I'm asking you, what is the equivalent to the threatening text messages? There is none here. You don't have the intent at all.
Okay, wait, hold on. Not a direct one-to-one example with every individual element, even if there weren't threatening text messages. If, for example, the ex-boyfriend was standing outside the ex-girlfriend's apartment just staring at her with a gun in hand, if there's no better explanation for him being out there with a gun in hand, that could lend much more credibility to the idea that he's doing something with potential nefarious intent. This is very, very self-evident stuff. We can take away the text messages. Wait, let me, please. I'm only responding to one bad faith point at a time.
Oh my God.
So, hold on. So yes, actually, not being able to find an alternative explanation is often used in court to determine components of intent. This is, again, if you knew anything about this. So with regards
you're so condescending, and you're not giving an equivalent analogy. You're literally saying standing outside with a gun, staring at his ex-girlfriend.
So actually,
there's no equivalent to this.
The goal of that analogy. So the goal of that analogy was actually to demonstrate that if a person engages in suspicious behavior, or if there's a suspicious outcome to that behavior, and there's not any other explanation to that behavior but malintent, that can be used in a component of determining, well, malintent. So hold on, wait, please. I can't. Wait, hold on. I literally, crime case. I need to defer to you because I literally can't make the point because I'm responding to one rebuttal after one rebuttal after one rebuttal.
I would agree.
I need to finish this. Okay.
Let him finish.
So I believe I have sufficiently demonstrated, and again, anyone who knows anything about the court system would know this, that being able to find an alternate explanation for behavior plays in hugely to inferring intent. So since nobody here can provide an explanation that is to me more convincing than Jeb Bush wanted to help his brother win the election, to explain the astonishing bias that was demonstrated in the unprecedented formatting of the butterfly ballots, which were discriminately distributed.
Stop.
Please.
Stop.
That, to me, is pretty suspicious. And to me, the most convincing explanation is malintent. Far more convincing than incompetence. And if after all of that, if Destiny and his fans are so willing to try to own the left that they'll walk back in position.
Cut him off and make him go to the next person. If you're just going to add him at the end, don't waste time on this. If there's like 10 other people that want to talk, don't like sit here and do like 2 minutes of add-ons.
That they're willing to
fucking rude to everybody else on the panel. You're wasting everybody else's time.
Then they're
Just go to
willing
the
to
next person.
retract
Go to the next
on
person.
Okay. Who has? All right, so Vaush is asking for
I was almost done.
Vaush is asking for something very specific. Vaush, he wants an explanation, right?
Wait,
So
please, I have to go. I meant to go an hour and 12 minutes ago. The only point that I'm trying to finish on here is that I feel like people who are arguing against the principles that I've argued here are either uninformed on the facts.
Okay, can we just go to the next? If it's just going to be an ad-hom, just go to the next people. Prime. This is
so
like
is
such
that-
a waste
so-
of time. If he's just going to say,
want to
like,
speak to
any
Vaush.
people
What do you guys want to bet Destiny's going to leave after I leave because he's had his
fuck
fun?
you, GSD.
Anyway,
dude, Prime, who's been on the show more? Me or Vaush? Prime, who's been here more? Me or Vaush?
Prime Case,
No, Prime,
I
I'm curious.
appreciate.
Who's randomly jumped on this show more? Me or Vaush?
Prime Case, I appreciate you having me on.
fighting. All right. Okay. Thank
I
you.
want an answer to that. I want an answer to that. Who's randomly jumped on this show more?
Destiny, you love me more. Destiny, you love me
Prime,
more.
jeez.
Can I speak to Vaush before he leaves, though?
Prime, I'm trying to say bye to Prime though. Come on,
okay.
he's hosting all this.
Okay.
Prime, love you very much. I had fun on the panel. Good luck with all this. Next time, I promise I'll stream. Okay.
Okay.
I loathe leaving because I feel like Vaush is running, but I've been here for 3 hours and I get early sleep
Bring me
tonight.
presents next time, and I'll love you just as much. Okay. All right.
Where do you have a PO
Evidence,
box? I'll send you brownies. Okay.
I'll send you an address.
Wait.
Sure. All right.
Vaush is running
All right.
for me.
Good luck. I'm running from all of you. Good luck. Huh?
Josh, can you
Running from
accept when
everybody.
people invite you onto the panels? Because sometimes we try to make panels so that you could come to, but then sometimes you don't answer. So then if you could answer, then
I'm
we could do this.
sorry.
Ooh, she calling you out.
I'm bad at social media. Okay. I try my best.
Well, answer my messages as the producer that helps put things together. Then maybe you don't need to like have 15 other people yelling at you. You know?
Can you
We have structured
re-message me?
Cateron is like,
Okay.
stop
can
leading
do it
me
right
on
now.
red.
Okay, re-message me and I'll respond so
got
quick
you.
it'll make your head spin. Okay.
Okay. Great.
I'm ready.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Good luck.
All right.
Good luck.